This family is going through an internal war right now because of their youngest son. The dad is a Hexa-class spearman known across the Empire as the Blue Tornado, and he wants his newborn son to grow up swinging a spear just like him. The mom is one of the Empire's greatest assassins, and she wants the baby raised in the shadows learning how to kill people quietly. So why are the two older sisters fighting just as hard to drag the kid into their own paths? Because the oldest sister, Arabella, is a magic prodigy already wrecking the academy at 12 years old. Third circle by age 12. She wants her little brother to follow her into magic so she can feel like a proud big sister. And the second sister, Claire, is a gifted summoner who can already control 2 summons at the same time. She wants him to become a summoner too so she can help him grow up healthy with something to protect him. 4 people, 4 completely different paths, 1 baby in the middle of it. Bro'd barely taken 2 breaths and his dad casually pulled a spear out of his ass and started explaining it to a baby. The mom flipped out, asking him how he could bring a sharp weapon near their son. He shrank under her glare and meekly said he just wanted to show it off. She warned him that if he kept this up, she'd start teaching the kid stealth before he even left his diapers. The two kept going at it, but both knew the real decision would happen on the choosing ceremony. Fast forward 1 year, and here we are. The family tradition where every kid in the house turns 1 and gets 4 items placed in front of them. Whatever the baby crawls to, that becomes his destiny. Legendary spear from Dad, sinister dagger from Mom, expensive magic pouch from Arabella, unique summoning sign from Claire. Each parent and sister is mentally screaming at the baby to pick their item. The prophecy says that whatever item shines represents the most adequate path for the baby to learn. And then our boy slowly crawls toward the table, everyone dying of anxiety. They all want to be the teacher of the youngest. But when he finally gets close to the items, all of a sudden all 4 start glowing at once. The guests lose their minds. This has never happened before in the history of the house. The baby was chosen by every single path simultaneously. The whole family goes quiet. Then his dad slowly turns to the mom and says, "Well, looks like we'll have to teach him all 4. And just like that, the war ends in the worst possible way for the kid. Instead of one parent training him, all 4 members of the household are now lining up to drill their specialty into him. Years pass like this. He's basically a one-man army wrapped in a teenage body, but all those talents come with one unexpected downside. When he finally arrives at the Imperial Academy and breaks every entrance exam record on the way in, none of the professors believe a 14-year-old can actually do everything they're seeing. The kid signs up for the autonomous department, a path that only 2 people have completed in the last 1,000 years, one of whom was the former emperor, and the entire faculty decides to test him personally to see if he's a fraud. From the head of the summoning department, this gorgeous Kafka mommy MILF with stupidly high standards that don't make sense, to the famous lazy director, a Hexa-class swordmaster, who specifically took the autonomous department position because nobody ever applies to it, meaning he never has to teach. The man's whole life plan revolved around getting paid to do nothing. And now this brat shows up and ruins everything. So his goal is to make sure this boy fails the academy entrance. And since the boy doesn't know swordsmanship, this is exactly the weakness he needs to make him fail. But boy oh boy, that's his biggest mistake. Because see, this boy is of course reincarnated, and his past life is the whole reason none of this is going to go the way the director thinks. Our boy was Agric of the Drenic Empire, a war orphan whose mother died in the chaos before he ever opened his eyes. While other kids were playing with toys, he was hauling supplies and surviving on scraps in the middle of an endless war. By the time he was 14, they handed him a sword and threw him onto a battlefield. That's where his talent woke up, mana core in his heart, speed and senses sharper than anything he'd ever known. He climbed the ranks so fast it scared people. By the end, he had mastered 4 mana cores and was 1 step away from joining the Empire's elite Hexa-class knights as one of the youngest in the highest rank a warrior could reach. Then on the final battlefield, the moment everything was supposed to come together, Duke Terian of the enemy empire showed up, one of the 6 Hexa-class knights of Altion. The man's mere presence scattered Agric's entire army. Agric still stood his ground. For him, it was better to die as a warrior than to run as a coward. If destiny had put a Hexa class in front of him, it was for a reason. Even knowing he was outclassed, even knowing he was about to die for nothing, he raised his sword and charged. Duke Terian almost felt bad for him, said it would be a waste to kill a rising talent like that. But then he shattered Agric's sword in 1 strike and ran him through the heart. Broa flew across the battlefield, slammed into the dirt, and bled out staring at the sky, thinking the same thing he'd thought his whole life. All I ever wanted was a family. Everything goes black. But the darkness lifts the moment he opens his eyes. The first thing he sees is a couple trying to play with him, or rather with their son. His father soon picks him up with a huge smile and calls him Dane Sogress. He says the boy should become an amazing. Then his mother, Lily Sogress, snatches him from her husband's arms and insists he'll grow into a perfect assassin instead. Archon, the protagonist Sogress, and his wife keep arguing over what their son should become. They seem to be riding home in a carriage, and the whole trip is spent on that same debate. Lily says slipping through shadows, killing targets, and escaping clean is far cooler, while his father insists the spear is the most complete and beautiful martial art. That's how our hero's new life begins. Just when he thought he was finished on that battlefield, he somehow reincarnates. The twist is that he's reborn in the Altion Empire, his old enemy, as the youngest son of a certain count. When the carriage finally stops on the estate, his parents settle on a compromise and decide to teach him both skills. Even so, Lily still says their son will be an assassin, while Archon just laughs and insists Dane will become a spearman. The carriage driver signals that they've arrived, and both parents look surprised. They were so busy arguing that they lost track of time. The husband gets out first and offers his wife a hand. He helps her down, while Egret can't help feeling embarrassed watching his father act so whipped. Still, that feeling vanishes when his eyes go wide at the sheer scale of the castle. Once they get inside, Lily notices how happy Dane seems to be home again. And honestly, why wouldn't he be? With a house like this and parents this rich, his talents might grow more easily than he ever imagined. 2 months pass after that day, and we find Lily talking to her son as he starts to babble. She's thrilled to hear his first little sounds, and Dane is just as amazed by it himself. He'd never experienced anything like that before. Back in his old life, chances to be around small children were rare on the battlefield. The few he did see were often wrapped in bandages and crying because they had nowhere to go, many mourning parents who had vanished in the destruction. Compared to that, this new home feels blessed and safe, and he's relieved he won't go hungry here. Suddenly, his father bursts into the room excitedly holding a spear. He proudly announces that this is called a spear. It seems our boy is not a fan of his dad's over-the-top energy. He can barely believe this man is his father, the strongest Hexa-class spearman in the Empire, known as Archon Dane Sogress. He doesn't look much like a war hero, but he really is one, famous as the Blue Tornado. His wife gets mad and starts pushing him away from the baby, asking how he could walk into their son's room carrying something so sharp. Under her glare, he shrinks and meekly says he just wanted to show it to MC. But she gives off such a deadly aura that he instantly folds, especially when she reminds him they agreed not to teach the boy anything until he was old enough. It's no wonder this grown man is trembling under that stare, because his wife is the Empire's top assassin. She warns that if he keeps this up, she'll start teaching Dane stealth while he's still little. He tries to argue that early training is normal now, and even points out that one famous magic family, House Teleport, puts a staff beside a baby the moment it's born. That only makes her angrier, and she snaps back, asking if his spear looks like a staff now. He then explains that his parents care so much about his future because his 2 older sisters chose paths that have nothing to do with spears or assassination. Next, we see both sisters playing with their little brother so much that his cheeks start to hurt. One of them, Arabella, laughs and says he looks even cuter now, with puffed-up cheeks. Dane tells us more about Arabella, revealing that her talent for magic put her on the path of a mage from childhood. At just 12, she had already reached 3rd circle rank. Since the highest rank is 9 circles, that makes her a genius already past the beginner stage. Arabella asks her baby brother if he wants to learn magic from her later, saying she's tired of studying alone every day and would love to teach him a thing or two. While Arabella is full of energy, Claire is the complete opposite. Quiet and shy, she softly says she could teach him summoning someday, since it's a useful skill to have. Just like Arabella, Claire is gifted too. She made her first summon at 7, and now she can control 2 summons at the same time. Arabella then teases Claire and tells her to touch him, saying he's super soft. Claire hesitates, unsure if she should. Meanwhile, Dane acts cute and friendly and thinks back to how he first assumed Claire didn't like him. Now he realizes she's probably just jealous because he's the youngest now and gets all the attention. Eventually, Claire reaches out and gently touches his nose. She lights up right away and blurts out how soft he really is. Then she touches him again and promises to teach him everything once he grows up. Dane can't help thinking it's a bit much how everyone keeps trying to push their own specialty onto him. His father is a 6th-class spearman. His mother is a gifted assassin, even if retired, and his oldest sister is a magic genius. Then there's Claire, who's also a genius summoner. The house of Count Sogress is the perfect noble family, the kind of home he always dreamed of. He starts to wonder if there's even any point in chasing revenge in this new life. Sure, his death was tragic, but that was a battlefield. It almost feels silly to want revenge on someone who beat him fairly. The whole family gathers in the hall, arguing warmly over which path would suit Dane best. Watching this loving scene fills him with warmth. That makes the protagonist smile. This is the kind of family he always wanted, and he's glad he was born here. But then things start getting out of hand and everyone begins arguing with each other. Now he's not so sure this really counts as a peaceful family. Next, we learn about a special tradition in House Sogress, the choosing ceremony. When a child in the family turns 1, several objects are placed on a table in front of them, and people try to guess the child's future from whatever they pick. Since Dane just turned 1 today, it's his turn to choose a class. The guests whisper about how his sisters became a mage and a summoner, and wonder what young Master MC will pick. So everyone heads to the ceremony hall to find out. Once the guests gather in the hall, Dane is seated near 4 items, each tied to a different class. As the crowd gathers around the table, his mother tells him to simply choose what he likes. Even so, he has no clue what to pick. He glances at his father, who clearly wants him to choose the spear. He's already imagining the protagonist being drawn to the dragon-tail spearhead. That spearhead is made from rare dough crayon, and when mana is poured into it, it becomes as sharp and heavy as the user's mana allows. His mother, on the other hand, feels Dane is far too handsome to become an assassin. Even so, she's sure he'll choose the dagger. It isn't ordinary. It's called Night Horn, made from ethereal ore that can hold every element and store several poisons. Like his parents, MC's sister is certain he'll become a great mage and choose the pouch to carry on that legacy. It's a special subspace item, something only mages or people with magic talent can use. Meanwhile, Shy Claire quietly wonders if Dane might become a summoner. The item in front of him is a summoning sign, a tool used by summoners. With it, they receive a code based on their talent and use that to call their summons. But he is completely lost because he can somehow hear what all his family members are thinking. After a while, he lets out a sigh and finally makes his choice. He starts crawling toward the items, and the crowd grows more excited by the second. As he picks up speed, his parents and sisters light up and cheer him on in their own ways. His father wants him to pick something sturdy, while his mother pushes for something short and sharp. Then, as he gets close, all the items on the table begin glowing yellow. Dane has no idea what's going on, and his family is just as confused. The guests, though, quickly realize that all 4 items reacted at once, something no one has ever seen. They can't help thinking young master, the protagonist may be a once-in-a-generation genius. Dane is stunned too. He remembers being talented in his past life, but this time he feels like he's on a whole different level. Little Arabella asks her father what they're supposed to do since this has never happened before, but both parents are just as lost, realizing they may have to teach him all 4 paths. Of course, that leaves the other 2 young ladies shocked, while MC only gives them a warm smile. Time passes, and now we're in the training hall. Weapons can be heard clashing, and the one sparring with his father is Dane. He's grown a lot since the last time we saw him. His father beams with pride, pleased that he has already mastered the technique he taught him. The protagonist thanks him, and we learn he's now 7 years old. As they share a light laugh, a man suddenly walks in. Dane looks over with curiosity and sees that the man is carrying a spear. Agric was clearly waiting for it to arrive, so he quickly takes it and hands it to MC as an early birthday gift. He says he planned to give it to him at the banquet, but wanted to do it before his mother gave hers. Agric adds that he spent 2 years preparing the spear and had it specially made by a famous craftsman in the capital. Then he wishes Dane an early happy 7th birthday. He instantly drops his old stick and grabs the spear, saying it's amazing and he's definitely going to use it. He loves the way the black shaft and silver spearhead look together. On top of that, it's shockingly light. When his father asks if he likes it, Dane says he loves it. He's so excited that he starts testing it right away. His father then asks if he knows the difference between a sword and a spear. The protagonist explains that a spear's reach lets you keep enemies at a distance and its tiny point gives it great piercing power. His father agrees, but warns that the spear can actually be harder to use than a sword once you get stronger. Its biggest weakness is simple: for an attack to work, you need enough distance from your target. Still, he tells Dane not to worry too much, since every weapon has strengths and weaknesses. Even swords, often called the perfect weapon, can fail in certain situations. Hearing that, MC says he'll remember it. His father spins the spear and invites him to train so he can show him something. Dane is left speechless by the force coming off his father. It's the first time he's seen the overwhelming power of a 6th-class lancer. The mana pouring from him is crushing. After charging up, his father thrusts the spear, and the space around the tip begins to warp. He explains that the distortion happens because he released mana through the spear, using the core's trait of focusing magical power into one point. He says he heard about that from his sister, and explains that as a person gains more cores, they can go beyond normal physical limits. That means their limits keep expanding. He also thinks back to his past life, when he had a quadruple core, and realizes all this knowledge comes from that old life. His father grins, happy his son has studied so well, and reminds him that he himself now has 6 mana cores. Dane acts shocked, though inside he thinks that if he hadn't died before, he could have reached 6 cores too. Then his father tells him to try the new spear. The protagonist hesitates a little, but his father tells him to clear his mind, forget his worries, and just thrust. Dane nods, and as he grips the spear, he remembers that in his past life, he never cared much for spears. Once he discovered his skill with the sword, he only treated them as a backup, but now he's finally ready to truly try one. After taking his stance, he closes his eyes while his father notices how solid his form is. He can't help smiling, because it took 7 years to master that technique himself. Since Dane is still so young, he doubts he can really pull it off. But the moment MC thrusts the spear, reality seems to twist, completely shattering his father's expectations. He never imagined seeing a miracle like this. Startled, he blurts out and asks his son how he knows so much. Once Dane finishes the technique, the man rushes over, laughing and praising him for doing an incredible job. He explains that when he thrust, he focused mana into a single point and pushed it into the spear tip. The instant the mana reached the tip, he cut off the flow. His father goes wild hearing that and asks if he formed a mana core. The protagonist says yes, claiming he tried it after reading a book on mana core creation and luckily succeeded. Of course, that part is a lie. The truth is, he formed it while practicing mana breathing. His father kneels to meet his eyes, unable to hide how proud he feels. He's sure his son will one day become an incredible warrior. Dane just gives a small smile, already thinking of all the surprises he still has in store. Meanwhile, his father wonders if he'll really become a mage, a lancer, an assassin, and a summoner all at once. That night, MC's 7th birthday celebration finally begins. Guests start filling the castle, and the hall is packed with music and laughter. Everyone is having a great time. Duke Bolt, the same man who killed Dane in his past life, is also at the party. As soon as Agric sees him, Bolt calls him over. Agric addresses him properly as Duke, but Bolt tells him to drop the formal talk and speak normally. As we know, Bolt leads the Empire's top house, the Duchy of Terian. Agric quickly whispers that too many people are watching, so they have to keep up appearances. The Duke says he can do as he likes, then asks where his son is. Agric calls for him and tells him to greet Duke Terian. The moment Dane hears that title, his mind flashes back to his last meeting with the man. When the protagonist finally stands before the Duke, he introduces himself as MC and bows, saying it's an honor to meet him. The Duke laughs, impressed by the boy's manners, and asks if he is also learning the spear. Agric says yes. Just then, a young lady walks up behind Duke Bolt, and when Dane Sogress sees her, he freezes for a moment in surprise. The girl politely greets Count the protagonist Sogress right away. She politely bows and introduces herself as Layla Terian, the youngest daughter of House Terian. After that, the party went on. The guests kept enjoying the music and the pleasant night, but Arkan, Dane, and Bolt couldn't relax because Baroness Terian was still sick. Bolt had tried every cure he could find, yet nothing worked. Arkan hoped it was only temporary and that his friend's wife would recover soon. Even so, Bolt warned that if he suddenly vanished, it meant her condition had gotten worse and he'd use a teleport scroll to rush back to the capital. Still, today was Dane's birthday, and the boy had somehow disappeared. Bolt thought MC was unusually sharp for his age, and wanted to talk with him more. Arkan had no idea where his son was, and he also noticed that little Layla was gone too. Finding them wasn't hard. They had gone off for a walk together. Most likely they were bored of another dull noble party. What they were talking about, though, was anyone's guess. Layla especially was chatty. She hated being dragged to noble events with her father, but this time she was glad she came. She had heard he was handsome, yet under the moonlight he looked even better, and she liked being there. He was glad she felt that way. Unlike the capital, his family's land was calm and peaceful. That was why Layla envied him. At her home, something was always going on. Nobles came every day with business offers, and sometimes even the imperial family showed up. Worst of all, every time visitors came, she had to dress up and greet them properly. She hated that. What she really wanted was simple clothes and a whole day to train with her sword. The protagonist was surprised that such a small, harmless-looking girl trained with a sword instead of magic. He liked his quiet territory too. It was nothing like the busy capital, and that gave him plenty of time to practice with the spear he loved. Layla was surprised at first, then remembered his father's nickname, and it all clicked. She had heard many times how amazing the Blue Whirlwind was, and since Dane trained so much with a spear, she assumed he wanted to enter the academy too. But that wasn't why he trained. Layla was caught off guard by that answer. To her, training hard to get into the academy was the obvious choice. She had heard getting in was incredibly hard. MC, though, had no doubt he'd be accepted. He trained because he wanted to be even stronger after he got in. Layla could hardly believe that confidence, so she asked what he'd do if he failed. Even then, he wouldn't get upset or quit. He'd just try again. And if he failed a second time too, he'd take it as a sign that it wasn't his path. Layla couldn't believe he could be so calm about his future, so she asked if he wasn't scared of letting down his family and home. He wasn't worried at all. Compared to his past life, this was nothing. Layla, on the other hand, could only envy him. In her family, failure was unacceptable. Even though he had spent 7 years around nobles, he was still amazed by how petty they could be over things like that. As for Layla, he had no doubt she would do well. When she heard him encourage her, she lit up and quickly offered to show him her sword skills. The protagonist was a little surprised by her excitement, but once Layla got a chance to practice with a sword, there was no stopping her. She immediately asked where the training ground was, and Dane had to take her there, hoping nothing would go wrong. At the training ground, Layla didn't hold back. She moved through one form after another like an experienced swordswoman. To a beginner, her moves would have looked flawless, but MC was far from a beginner. Watching closely, he had to admit her shifts from attack to defense and back were smooth and her timing was excellent. Still, there was one problem. After a while, her rhythm broke and she lost some of that smooth flow. Breathing hard after finishing, a pleased Layla asked what he thought. At first, Dane wasn't fully honest and told her she looked amazing, and that he enjoyed watching. Layla was clearly happy to hear that, but he decided to tell her the truth. He could see room for improvement. After the third form, for example, she was taking an extra half step she didn't need, and the same thing happened in the next forms. Those repeated half steps made the later sword forms slip slightly out of line. That criticism left Layla speechless. She even looked close to tears, and Dane started thinking he had been too blunt. He began to apologize, saying maybe he was wrong, since it had been a long time since he'd watched a true swordsman train. But he worried for nothing. Layla quickly pulled herself together and gripped her sword more firmly. Now she understood her mistake. She started the training forms again, and this time they were nearly perfect. The protagonist's advice had been exactly what she was missing. Her joy and gratitude overflowed, and she even hugged Dane. He tried to pull away, but it didn't work very well. Layla was completely amazed by how much he knew about swordsmanship. He spotted in one moment what her teachers had never pointed out. She promised she'd remember his help. Eventually, she let him go after nearly crushing him in the process. Then she almost nicked him with her sword. That little lady seriously needed to learn some order. MC was caught off guard by the sudden hug, though he couldn't say he disliked it. Of course, their quiet moment didn't last long. Servants were already shouting and searching for them everywhere. They had taken enough of a break from the banquet, so they hurried back before they were discovered at the training ground. When they returned, Dane became the center of attention as his parents formally congratulated him on his birthday and on discovering his first manticore, and of course, they gave him a gift, a brooch with the family crest, like the ones his older sisters had. His mother told him to treasure it, because from now on the brooch would be proof of his status and honor. After his parents finished, the other guests joined in too. He had now truly earned the name he, and no one there doubted he would grow into a fine man like his father. The protagonist's parents were overjoyed, and so was he. In both his lives, this was the first time he had received such warm congratulations from so many people. Then the whole hall suddenly shook. Guests started shouting, trying to figure out what was happening, an earthquake or an enemy attack. MC got worried too, but his father quickly calmed him and said there was no reason to be afraid. Arkin knew exactly what was going on. He had hoped for a peaceful day, but apparently his daughter hadn't listened. Dane had no idea. Then sparks flashed near the ceiling of the hall, and a portal opened above the frightened guests in an instant. The guests were stunned when a small figure flew out of that portal, defying all common sense, and landed without any trouble. It was Dane's older sister, Arabella, and in her opinion, she wasn't late at all. The guests still couldn't close their mouths. A young lady using teleportation magic was shocking enough. Normally, even opening a small portal required reaching at least 5 chains. He wasn't impressed by her power. He was annoyed by how loud and dramatic she was. But once the guests barely settled down, an enormous monster appeared in the sky. A huge wyvern with a rider on its back. This time, Lady Claire was the one who scared everyone. She was in a bad mood, though. She had been just one step too late to beat her sister. As soon as she arrived, people started whispering that they had heard she was a gifted summoner, but no one expected her to control a wyvern at only 16 years old. At last, they were home again, and together they stood before their parents and brother to wish their favorite little brother a happy birthday. Dane. After those flashy entrances, the protagonist's sisters quickly shoved their gifts into his hands while wishing their little brother a happy birthday. He thanked Arabella and Claire for coming home. Even with their studies keeping them busy, both girls were excited to watch him open the presents. Duke Arkin was almost in tears over how special his son was being treated. On his own birthday, his daughters had only sent him a letter. Dane opened the box Arabella gave him, and inside was a ring that worked as a handy dimensional bag. She had designed the artifact herself. The subspace magic used to make it belong to a very high level, and Arabella's famous teacher had placed it into the ring. Everyone knew how hard it was to put subspace magic into any item. Arabella took the ring and warmly held her brother's hand to put it on. She must have spent a long time designing an artifact strong enough to hold an entire subspace. She had also tied the ring to MC's mana signature, so no one else could use it. It was made only for her little brother, a truly unique item. Lizzie examined the ring and saw a faint wave of mana running through it, which meant it had been made with top-quality magic stones. Arabella explained that all Dane had to do was pour a little mana into the ring, and the subspace would open. That made it far easier to use than a normal dimensional bag, which alone made it priceless. As far as he remembered, tools like this were usually seen only with the wealthy on the battlefield. Only noble commanders and high-ranking mages had something so useful. The ring. It would also grow with him and fit his body as he got older. The protagonist tried pouring mana into the ring, and a green portal opened in front of him. Duke Arkin was stunned to see his son do it so easily. It looked effortless. Claire, Duke Baltermian, and Layla were all amazed by that bright burst of magic. Dane opened the subspace even faster than Arabella had years ago. There was no doubt now he was a genius. It would be a huge breakthrough if he could grow both a mana core and a mage circle at the same time. After the magic display, Claire walked over and handed her little brother her gift. MC opened it slowly, thanking her with real warmth. Inside the wooden box sat a strange-looking egg on a soft cloth. Confused, he picked it up and asked what it was. Claire quickly warned him to be careful. This was no normal egg. The whole family was curious about the odd present, but Claire only told Dane the truth. In a whisper, she said it was a familiar. She got it by accident while trying to summon Dakaron. Even Claire had no idea what would hatch, but everyone knew how valuable a familiar could be. He tried to picture what might come out of that weird egg. He had heard of familiars before. Unlike summons, they were something else entirely. Once called forth, a familiar could stay in the real world for good. Claire told him to keep the egg secret until it finally hatched, and he promised he would. All that whispering annoyed Arabella, who felt left out. Claire also told Dane to feed the egg his mana twice a day, once in the morning and once at night, so it would accept him as its master. Lily was just happy her little boy was getting such amazing gifts. It showed how much her children cared about each other. Once the gifts were done, Duke Arkin cleared his throat and reminded his daughters to at least greet their parents. They had shown up after saying they might not make it, and still hadn't properly said hello. Realizing their mistake, the girls awkwardly greeted their father. Duke Arkin was soft when it came to his daughters, so he didn't mind much. He was simply glad to see them again. Since leaving to follow their careers, they rarely came home, so he was happy they looked well. From a distance, Layla watched the Dane family laughing and talking so warmly with each other. She couldn't help comparing them to her own family. The protagonist noticed her staring and turned his head. He caught the drop in her mood as she quietly stepped away. Even in a lively crowd of nobles, she looked lonely and sad, and he wondered why. The banquet ended, and the next day arrived. Duke Bothermian had stayed the night and was now walking through Dane's territory. He kept thinking about how gifted Arabella was. As expected from the Academy's top mage, her talent was on another level. She seemed like a perfect match for the Duke's son, the Academy's best swordsman. If the two houses joined through marriage, they could form a force strong enough to challenge even the imperial family. If that happened, no one would dare mess with either house or their children. So Duke Bothermian decided to bring up a possible engagement between the oldest children during today's talk with Arkan. On his way to meet the other Duke, Bothermian heard steel clashing nearby. It came from the training field, so someone was working on their technique very early in the morning. That someone was Dane, fully focused on spear practice. He had become dangerous with the weapon. With years of training under his father and insane discipline, he had long since become ready for real combat. MC's focus was incredible. He moved with the smooth control of a seasoned fighter, chaining one deadly strike after another. Then he pushed even faster and raised the pace again. Soon his arms were a blur as he unleashed a storm of thrusts in just moments. Curiosity got the better of Duke Bothermian, so he watched the boy train from afar. He was pleasantly surprised to see the youngest Dane pushing himself that hard. With his trained eye, he could tell his technique was polished far beyond his age. His movements and focus didn't belong to a 7-year-old. Even his simplest attacks were refined to a frightening degree. Everything was done so perfectly that even veteran spearmen could learn from him. When Dane finished the final sequence, he was breathing hard. Duke Bothermian was deeply impressed from start to finish. What he had just seen felt impossible. He had heard rumors about the protagonist's absurd talent, even back when he was just a baby, but he had always dismissed them as exaggerations. Now he knew they were real. After a short break, MC started practicing again. This time he focused on his movements and stance. As one of the strongest swordsmen in the region, Duke Bothermian couldn't ignore how much the boy's posture resembled that of a master swordsman. The Duke started to wonder if Dane had somehow already learned swordsmanship at a high level, despite being so young. At last, he noticed someone watching from the doorway. He raised his spear, ready to strike, and told the spy to come out instead of hiding. Duke Bothermian was so caught up in watching that a child had found him. Not exactly a proud moment for a skilled warrior. The more he thought about the protagonist's movements, the more familiar they felt. He was sure he had seen that same footwork somewhere in his past life. So the Duke stepped out, apologized for interrupting the private training, and said he hadn't meant anything suspicious. Once Dane saw it was Duke Bothermian, he felt bad for speaking so sharply to him. Even though he had lived in this body for 7 years, this was still the man who defeated and killed him in his past life. Remembering his etiquette lessons, MC formally greeted the Duke. Duke Bothermian admitted he had been drawn in by the Rising Star's morning training and apologized again. He stayed calm and said it was forgiven. The Duke found it amusing that the boy spoke to him with such fearless confidence. Now that he was closer, Dane noticed the boy's body showed almost no shaking or real fatigue after that brutal session. At the same age, he himself couldn't have matched that. The Duke praised the protagonist's thrusting technique, saying he clearly inherited Arkan's gift with the spear. He also noted that the spear itself was finely made. Mamsie thanked him politely for recognizing his skill, and the older man smiled. This boy wasn't just deadly, he also knew exactly what to say. Compared to him, the Duke's own son had neither such skill nor manners at 7. That thought made Bothermian consider arranging a marriage between Layla and Dane as well, so he casually mentioned that his daughter trained in swordsmanship too. Since they were close in age, he suggested they look out for each other when they entered the academy one day. He kept answering with perfect manners, and the Duke liked how direct he was. In the end, Bothermian apologized for delaying his training any longer. But before leaving the training hall, he asked one more thing. Had the boy studied swordsmanship too? Dane had slipped up in front of the Duke. His old habits must have come out without him noticing, and with Bothermian's sharp eyes, even tiny signs were enough. The protagonist answered that he had only read a few books on basic swordsmanship and had never trained in it for real. The Duke still found it strange that the boy gave off something like raw battlefield instinct, but common sense said an inexperienced child couldn't have that kind of killing intent. Finally, the Duke left him alone and said goodbye, and Dane walked him out. Bothermian also invited MC to visit him if he ever came to the capital in the future. The swordsman had taken a personal interest in his talent. The protagonist wondered if the man still remembered him. Just thinking about beating the one who ended his life before made his blood boil. If he built a solid foundation and prepared step by step, he was sure he could surpass the Duke. One of Dane's goals in this life was to defeat the mighty Bothermian. As MC kept training, he lost track of time, and Hernano had to come get him. The attendant was always nearby in the shadows, ready whenever he was needed. With how quietly Hernano moved, he figured the guy might have real talent for stealth and assassination skills. Today everyone was busy getting ready for the second banquet. Some nobles had already started arriving, since gathering more than 30 noble families on the exact same day was difficult. As for the protagonist's sisters, they had already opened a teleport gate and gone back to the academy. They had no choice. Midterms were coming up soon. For now, it was time for Dane to get cleaned up and dressed too. He made a note to examine his sister's gifts more closely later. After the hard training session, MC was washed up and dressed. He entered the family hall with his mother and father, and mingled with the nobles. He had to use all his etiquette training as he spent the whole night talking with high society. As the birthday boy, he was put on display all night, with everyone's attention fixed on him. At last, he escaped the banquet hall and got some air. Noble life was exhausting, and his schedule was even worse than usual because of his birthday. Still, he could always find some peace in the garden. Mr. Gardener had worked hard to make that place special, a calm, beautiful spot that brought peace. Dane looked at the flowers in full bloom while butterflies fluttered nearby. Flowers held more mana than most things in nature, or so his older sister once told him. Since he had a little time alone, he decided to test that idea for himself. The protagonist Sogress closed his eyes and focused on the natural magic moving through the air. Without opening them, he slowly started to grasp what his sister meant. He could feel the mana inside the flowers. Even though he'd been training in many fields, his mage and summoner skills still hadn't shown much progress. That made it hard to decide where he should spend his time. Having too many talents was actually a problem right now. He was suffering from success. After a few minutes immersed in the garden's natural mana, he finally saw the flow inside the flowers. He could hardly believe something so small held such strong mana. If someone could sense nature's flow and make it their own, that power might settle in the body and form a magic circle. That was exactly what was happening now. His body's huge mana affinity made it much easier. He could clearly see what most people could only faintly sense. Just one trip to the garden had sharpened his mana sense by a lot. What used to be blurry was now much clearer. He was on the edge of understanding how magic really worked when something suddenly snapped. At the same time, two young nobles wandered into the garden, bored of the adults' empty talk. They were brothers, and the older redhead was already annoyed that everyone kept talking about the genius, Dane Sogress. He stomped straight through the flower bed, crushing flowers as he went. The red-headed brothers got turned around in the huge garden and happened to spot MC standing there, distracted. One look at his clothes and they mistakenly decided he was a servant, then started yelling at him. He did not like that disrespect at all. The brat even had the nerve to order him to lead them to the exit. Dane noticed what they were doing to the flowers and shouted for them to stop stepping on them. The red-headed brat somehow got offended after being called out. He asked why they were ruining the flower bed instead of using the garden paths. Seeing he was small, the redhead just got even more annoying. Then came the usual noble kid move, showing off his family name. The protagonist couldn't care less. To him, they were just two thugs wrecking his garden. The redhead hated being called a brute, so he proved the point by grabbing Dane by the collar. He and his brother were sons of Count Tyron, one of the castle's guests. Hearing that name brought back a memory from MC's past life. Count Tyron was the noble he captured after a pathetic defeat on the battlefield. He remembered him as a deeply annoying man, one of the worst kinds of nobles. Judging by the brat in front of him, like father like son, fit perfectly. The red-headed brat kept bragging that his family was famous in the capital. He even claimed their house could make the protagonist vanish without a trace, so he'd better watch what he said. Dane had met plenty of idiots like this before. He knew words would never get through that thick skull full of air. The boy raised his fist and swung at him, still thinking he was only beating up a mere servant. Dane wasn't going to allow that. He slammed his forehead right into the brat's nose with full force. It was a brutal hit that nearly crushed it. The younger brother called out in panic to his older brother. He checked on the redhead, who had dropped to the ground from the blow. When the boy wiped his nose and saw blood, he started freaking out like he'd never bled before. The moment he saw the blood on his hand, his rage exploded, and he threatened to kill MC. Dane found that funny and calmly told him to try. The redhead wanted blood for blood. His little brother had enough sense to stop him, but the older one was far too proud to listen. He threw a punch and he calmly dodged by hopping back. The gap between them was huge. The amateur couldn't touch him at all. As Dane let him wear himself out, he noticed the boy's footwork was sloppy, like he'd never held a weapon in his life. That made him think the brat might be a mage or a summoner. The punches kept coming, but not one got close to landing on the protagonist, Sogress. Blood still ran from the redhead's nose as his patience ran out. MC kept toying with him through pure movement, and then an idea hit him. Maybe he could use the magic flow he sensed from the flowers and force his will into it. If that worked, he should be able to compress that power into a physical form. This was as good a chance as any to test it in a real fight. The younger brother watched from the side with his mouth hanging open. Dane Sogress planted his feet and gathered magic into his hands. He imagined a sphere of pure mana and fired it at the boy's stomach. The blast was strong enough to throw the redhead painfully onto the grass, tearing up the ground on the way. He screamed in pain, his body and pride both wrecked. The little brother rushed over to check on his defeated brother in the flower bed. Dane Sogress was honestly more worried about the ruined flowers than the brat's condition. But the red-headed fool was stubborn. He still got back up. After seeing him use magic, he demanded to know who he was. The younger brother kept trying to stop him, but pride mattered more to him than any consequences. Then the brat drew on the mana in his body and began opening a sinister-looking portal. The protagonist Sogress was surprised to see something so familiar. This was summoner magic. Mana spun and thickened until a translucent wolf started to descend to the ground. It looked bloodthirsty, bearing sharp fangs as it growled. The redhead laughed wildly and called the beast Gempu. Then he finally gave his name, Reincarnated, and said Dane was about to learn what happened when he messed with someone like him. MC Sogress heard the brat order the wolf to tear him apart, but he wasn't impressed by such a simple summon. He was used to seeing Claire call out terrifying beasts like Ivan. Digron stayed back while Genpu charged at the motionless him. Dane only looked the wolf in the eyes and didn't move. Genpu must have sensed that attacking him would end badly, so the wolf turned right around. Its aura changed at once. Like all hostility toward the protagonist, Sogress had completely vanished. The Tyron brothers were stunned. Digron's pride and joy had apparently turned against him. Now the big wolf was acting downright submissive to MC. Digron screamed for it to rip out his throat, but the beast ignored him. Instead, the big pup happily wagged its tail at the protagonist. Sensing no ill intent, the protagonist gently petted the good boy. Even he had no idea how this happened. Thinking about it, Claire's summons had always liked him too. Even Wyvern played with him sometimes. Back then, he figured it was just because they were family. But now there was no blood tie at all, and this summon was still friendly. That could mean he had an unusually high affinity with summoned creatures, or maybe Genpu's opinion of his awful summoner had hit rock bottom. Digron couldn't understand any of it. He had never heard of a summon betraying its master. Dane Sogress was winning on every front and kept taunting Digron to come at him himself. The younger brother was practically begging him to stop embarrassing himself and accept the loss, but Digron still wanted to fight. The little brother desperately needed this mess to end. Caught up in his brother's stupidity, the poor kid had wet himself in fear. He started crying, and Dija called him embarrassing. Dane Sogress only made it worse by pointing out there was a bath in the castle basement. Digicron used his younger brother's accident as an excuse to retreat. As if he hadn't embarrassed himself enough, he ordered MC to stay in the garden. He just looked at the pathetic loser in disgust. Digicron didn't even take his summon with him. So the protagonist stayed in the garden and kept testing his new understanding of mana. He tried a trick Claire had taught him before. He found what was left of the weak bond between that brat Digicron and Genpu, cut it and carefully rewrote it with his own magic. Just like that, he and the wolf became connected. Without using a proper summoning ritual, he pulled it off through nothing but his high affinity with summoned beasts. Now he had truly succeeded as a summoner. While enjoying that victory, Dane Sogress heard a familiar, annoying voice calling for him. Digicron Tyron, the spoiled brat, had run to his father and tattled that some boy in the garden bullied him, then pointed right at MC. What a coward. Holding his nose to slow the bleeding, he complained that he had attacked him and even broken his bond with his summon. The huge Mogar Tyron stomped forward and loudly introduced himself as head of the Count Tyron family, one of the great noble houses of the capital. He demanded to know if the protagonist had really messed up his son's face and stolen his summon. Dane wasn't the type to back down from a pig, so he stood firm and admitted what he'd done. He also noticed Mogar Tyron was much fatter now than when he had captured the man in his past life. Peace had clearly treated him well, even if he'd been useless on the battlefield. Mogar kept throwing his weight around, saying he couldn't let this pass. Anyone who touched his sons was not something he could ignore. He kept pressing MC with demanding questions, and finally told the boy to state his name. Our boy lifted his head proudly and formally introduced himself as him Sogress. The protagonist Sogress, the youngest son of Arkan the protagonist Sogress, Lord of the South and head of the protagonist Sogress family. The boy says, he gives them a full royal-style introduction, and it leaves both father and son stunned. Without realizing it, they had insulted the birthday boy. They had picked a fight with the famous rising star of the South. The rude pair is clearly shaken by this sudden meeting with the youngest son of House Dane Sogress. Thinking about great noble houses, he remembers how Agra captured him in the war, and how he did nothing important after that, making the other nobles laugh at him. Now he sees a chance to turn things around. Smear Count MC Sogress's name and use it to demand mining rights. If it works, the nobles who mocked him might soon be bowing to him. With that in mind, the fat fool turns to our boy and asks if he is the birthday boy, him. He just nods and confirms it. The fat man can barely hide his annoyance. He definitely did not come here to celebrate some kid's birthday. Then he points at his bratty son and asks Dane Sogress how he plans to make up for the shame he caused his son. The protagonist not only hurt a guest, he also took their summon, which he calls a serious crime. His rotten son jumps in too and backs him up. The brat tells MC this is his last day. Then the fat man threatens to speak to Count MC himself and make him answer for all of it. MC simply hears him out and says that before he goes running to his father, his son should apologize first. That sends the fat man into a rage. He demands to know what nonsense Dane is talking about, while his son grinds his teeth beside him. But he makes it clear, yes, he hit the boy and hurt him, but it was self-defense after his life was threatened, and he didn't steal their summon either. Genpu chose to follow him. The trashy son quickly argues that there's no way Genpu would do that, and tells his father the protagonist is lying. That's when the father stops to think. He remembers hearing that the second daughter of House Sogress is a genius summoner, so maybe she taught MC how to forcibly break the bond between a summon and its master. The fat man keeps going back and forth with our boy, and Dane Sogress can't help thinking this whole thing is exhausting. Eventually Mogar calms down a little. After talking so much, even his jaw is starting to hurt. He tells him he's done arguing, and says they should go hear what Count Sogress has to say about all this. Speak of the devil, the Count himself arrives with Duke Terian. Of course, both the useless son and his father are completely shaken when they see Count Sogress. And seeing Duke Terian here only makes them panic more. As night falls, the red-haired boy gives his version of the story to the Count. He claims he and his little brother got lost in the garden, so he asked Dane Sogress to guide them. He keeps spinning lies while the protagonist stands behind him, calm, wondering why his father is actually listening to this non-stop nonsense. Still, that doesn't really surprise him. Count Sogress cares deeply about his family and their name, but he isn't the kind of man who takes sides without thinking. He knows how to tell right from wrong. After finishing his story, the red-haired boy claims MC suddenly headbutted him and kept using that strange move to mock him. He says he called Genpu to scare MC, but MC stole the summon and tried to strike back. As soon as Digran finishes, Mogar steps up and tells the Count he only meant to warn him. Even so, he insists that taking someone else's summon is clearly wrong and can't be ignored. At last, Count Sogress speaks. He tells Mogar he won't judge the matter after hearing only one side. First, he wants to hear the protagonist, then decide after looking at everything fairly. He also assures Mogar that if he's worried about bias, Duke Terian will give his opinion too. The Duke smiles faintly and says that if it matters that much, he can handle it. Mogar starts sweating hard, frustrated. He knows this is going badly, and bringing in Terian only makes it worse. He's not happy about it at all. Count Sogress gives his son permission to explain, and Dane Sogress begins by saying that what Mogar's son said wasn't completely false, but only parts of it were true. He explains that the flowers carefully raised in the garden had been trampled, so he told Mogar's son to leave. That made the boy furious, and the fight started from there. Of course, the fat man and his son are stunned by that blunt truth, with the boy even trying to deny it and calling MC Sogress a liar. But the Count tells Dane Sogress to continue. So our boy explains that when Mogar's son called Genpu, the order was to kill him. He also makes it clear he didn't steal the summon. Genpu came to him on its own and responded to his goodwill. The Duke is honestly shocked to hear a 7-year-old speak so smoothly, with such calm and such careful words. Sogress once again states that he never stole anyone's summon. Mogar loses his temper, stomping the ground and calling the whole thing absurd. He says it's impossible for a summon to submit to someone who isn't even a summoner, insisting Dane Sogress must have used some shady trick. But the protagonist calmly tells him he was born with a natural affinity for summons, and one that isn't closely tied to its master could follow someone like him. Mogar refuses to believe it, while our boy simply says it's the truth. Mogar's face twists like he's badly constipated, and all he can say is that the boy is making things up. Then the Duke cuts in and suggests they prove it with the summon itself. Count MC turns to his son and asks if he can prove it, and MC says yes. Meanwhile, Mogar shoots his son a deadly look for dragging him into this mess, while the spoiled brat starts panicking because he has no idea what he'll do if he can't summon Genpu. When the brat tries to call Genpu, he fails completely, and his father yells at him right away. Meanwhile, Dane Sogress just smiles, knowing he already cut the bond, so of course there's no way the boy can summon Genpu anymore. Then he says he'll demonstrate it himself by calling Genpu, but to do that he needs the summoning sign. Mogar's son has. The spoiled boy gets angry and questions how the protagonist dares ask for his sign. He starts rambling, but Count the protagonist cuts him off, reminding him that by his own claim, even with the sign, MC shouldn't be able to summon Genpu, so there's no harm in trying. Mogar sweats, realizing he has no choice, and reluctantly tells his spoiled son Digran to hand it over. The redhead is almost in tears, but his father just tells him to hurry up. Once Dane Sogress has the sign, he starts his magic and explains that a summoning sign usually carries a unique code tied to its summoner, so no one else should be able to use it. But Genpu had already been filled with his mana, so the sign is only a tool now. And Genpu is already linked to him. The moment he calls for Genpu, the monster appears and starts licking his cheeks. The Count and the Duke are both amazed, while Mogar and Digran tremble after their lie is exposed. The Duke finds it incredible and wonders if Dane Sogress has also been studying swordsmanship. His father confirms that he has, though he admits he doesn't fully know how skilled his son really is. The fat man, on the other hand, realizes he's in serious trouble now that his whole plan has failed. The Count then turns to him and asks if he now admits he was telling the truth. The fat man quickly tries to act casual, laughing and saying maybe they just misunderstood and thought the protagonist stole their summon. He also claims his son wasn't really trying to kill the protagonist, then asks Digran to confirm it. Shaking, Digran agrees and says he only meant to scare MC, but our boy is furious watching these scumbags try to slip away from blame so easily. Before the two lords can give their final judgment on the matter, a lady steps in, surprising everyone there, especially him, Sogress, whose eyes go wide when he sees Lila. The moment she arrives, she says Digran is not telling the truth. Her father quickly asks why she's here, and she says she heard his voice while out for a walk. Before saying more, she politely greets the fat man and Count Dane Sogress. The fat man stammers as he returns the greeting, clearly shocked to run into the Duke's daughter. The protagonist gets right to the point and asks about her claim that Digran was lying. She confidently confirms it, saying she heard their earlier conversation during her walk. Digran immediately starts to panic at the thought that she heard everything, because that is very bad news for him. Then she starts laying out all the juicy details, and our boy can't help smiling, as this unexpected turn somehow swings things back in his favor. A little later, the fat man orders his goofy son to hurry up and apologize to Count MC Sogress. The boy mutters that he was wrong, but the Count tells him to apologize to MC, not to him. The fat man quickly shoves his son toward him, telling him to apologize properly at once. The spoiled boy looks uneasy and hesitates, then stammers out a weak fake apology. Dane is nowhere near satisfied. He can tell it isn't sincere, it's only forced because their lie got exposed once an outside witness stepped in. The protagonist doesn't buy it at all. He doesn't really want to accept such a weak apology, but remembering his past, he chooses the more mature path and decides to show some grace. So Danny accepts the spoiled boy's apology. The kid lights up right away, thanking him over and over for letting it go. His father also exhales in relief, realizing how close he came to losing everything. The Duke, who may one day become Danny's father-in-law, can't help thinking he was right about Danny being special. After all, Danny had every reason to stand his ground, since the other side was clearly wrong from the very start. In the end, the Count makes it clear that since Danny accepted the apology, the matter is closed. Still, he stresses that he had no intention of letting it slide, especially because Tigran attacked Danny intending to kill him. The fat father breaks into a cold sweat when he sees how furious the Count is. The moment he tries to speak, the Count cuts him off and orders him to take his family and leave the castle at once. That news shakes the fat man to his core. If he's thrown out now, his reputation is finished, so he becomes desperate to stay in the castle no matter what. He grabs the Count's hand and begs for mercy, saying he'll do anything Dane asks. He just wants to be forgiven this once. But the Count quickly pulls his hand away and makes it clear he has no use for him. He adds that soldiers will arrive soon to escort him out officially. With that, he storms off with his son, leaving the fat man behind, still begging for forgiveness. Dane also tells Duke Terian that it's time to go, and the Duke calls for his daughter as they start to leave. As they walk away, Danny looks back at them, feeling satisfied that they're finally getting what they deserve. They started this whole mess, so it's only fair they face the result. Anyway, he learned something important today. His father is actually pretty scary when he's angry. Then Duke Terian asks if it's true that he beat Magard's spoiled son with a mana bullet, and Danny quickly confirms it. The Duke can't stop praising him, saying Danny is gifted not just with the spear, but also in summoning and magic. It's so impressive that he doubts history has seen talent like this before. Danny's proud father smiles and says he's proud to have such an exceptional son. Meanwhile, Danny quietly takes in all the praise while Layla struggles to believe what she's hearing. The Duke adds that talent alone isn't what makes Danny stand out. He's also incredibly calm. Most kids lose their heads in a fight and stubbornly insist they're right, but not him. The Duke is sure this boy will grow into a fine man. His father gives Dane a light pat on the head and says it's too soon to know that for sure. They'll have to wait until he's fully grown. He also points out that everything ended peacefully thanks to Layla. Without her testimony, things could have gotten ugly. Hearing that, Duke Terian is clearly surprised that the Sogress family thinks so highly of Layla. He doesn't waste the chance and tries to play up her role, hinting that if the Count values her that much, maybe they should start talking about marriage. MC is caught off guard and can tell just how eager the Duke is to marry off his daughter. To get out of that conversation, he quickly changes the subject, saying the sun is going down and it's almost time for the banquet. With that, he rushes off, saying he'll meet them in the hall. Terian then tells his daughter to head back calmly with Dane. He hurries after the Count, saying he wants a quick talk with him, leaving the two kids behind. As they walk, Layla turns to him and asks why the summon ignored its summoner and listened to him instead. She says she's watched famous summoners duel many times in the capital, but she's never seen anything like that. He shrugs and admits he doesn't really know either. It just happened. Of course, Layla makes an annoyed face, knowing the protagonist is hiding the truth on purpose, even though she was the one who helped him out earlier. But he stays calm and reminds her that he also helped her before, when he assisted with her sword training. Layla thinks back to that moment and reluctantly admits he has a point, so Dane decides that since they've each helped the other once, they can do it again. He tells her she can ask whatever she wants. Instantly, the girl lights up and blurts out that she wants to learn it right now. MC is caught off guard by how impatient she is and wonders what could be so urgent, so he asks what she wants to learn. She quickly says she wants him to teach her mana bullet. Dane asks why she's in such a rush, and Layla says she wants to get stronger and fast. She hopes to form at least 2 mana cores before entering the academy. He wonders why she's pushing herself so hard when she's still so young, but he gets his answer right away. She wants to grow stronger soon to make her mother happy. Her mother loves her deeply, and Layla is sure getting stronger would make her proud. When he hears her mention her mother, the protagonist remembers adults saying Countess Terian has been bedridden. With that in mind, he feels like he can't really refuse to help her. Layla does a little happy dance and says she's ready to start tomorrow. Honestly, she'd even start tonight if she could, especially since she doesn't know how long she'll stay at the mansion. MC just shakes his head and tells her they can begin whenever she wants. He assures her that once she understands how magic flows, learning mana bullet won't be too hard. Layla then eagerly asks what he wants in return for teaching her. Dane stays silent, making it obvious that what he wants won't be as simple as showing someone how to fire magic bullets. The scene shifts to the banquet hall, where guests are whispering about that fat father Tyron. Word is spread that Count Tyron was thrown out of the castle and everyone wants to know what he did to deserve that. Some say Tyron's eldest son caused trouble by picking a fight with young master him and ended up getting taught a lesson. They laugh among themselves, amused that the fat man came all this way just to be humiliated and embarrassed. Another rumor going around is that young master the protagonist is an amazing summoner. One guest wonders if that means house the protagonist will now become a famous house of summoners. But another cuts in and says that's not all. Young master MC can also use magic, which many of them can hardly believe. Then a large mustached man introduces himself to him as Baron Opent. He asks if he knows anything about open territory in the east. He politely bows his head and says he's heard the land is famous for grilled trout and sapphires. The man laughs and says that's exactly right. He proudly adds that House Opent's trout and sapphires are the best on the continent. Then he nudges his daughter forward, saying he almost forgot to introduce her. The girl steps up and introduces herself as Silvio Opent. She politely greets Dane, who is clearly surprised and awkwardly returns the greeting with his own name. I have no idea why he's so nervous around her, but we're about to find out. She moves right up to him with a mischievous look and whispers that she heard he's the one who will inherit House the protagonist in the future. Dane gives an unsure reply, and Silvio excitedly tells him to stop pretending he doesn't know. She says she's heard he's talented in many ways, then bluntly adds that she'll be under his care from now on, especially since they might become family one day. And there it is, his nervousness makes perfect sense. This girl is unbelievably direct and doesn't hesitate for a second. Right then, Layla walks in while Sylvia is still in the middle of holding hands with MC. Not surprisingly, Sylvia is startled the moment she sees a possible rival, while Layla shoots him a sharp look and demands to know who this lady is. Sylvia recognizes Layla right away and warmly greets her, introducing herself as the Baron's eldest daughter, Opent. Layla tries to answer politely, but the anger on her face makes it obvious she's far from pleased, even as she says it's nice to meet Sylvia. The two girls trade smiles that might as well be trying to kill each other. Watching them reminds Dane of an old memory, and he can tell they're both completely ready to fight. Before long, Layla grabs his hand and says she's borrowing him for now because they already had plans. She gives him a hard stare and asks if he remembers. Of course, poor the protagonist has no clue what she means, but he agrees anyway, apologizes to Sylvia, and says they can talk later. Sylvia forces a smile and tells him they definitely will talk again later. As Layla pulls Dane away, Sylvia can't help feeling annoyed that this girl just snatched him from her. Layla, on the other hand, is still far from calm. She's completely irritated by that girl's nerve, acting like she could take MC away from her. MC just stands there stunned under Layla's fierce gaze. He can't help thinking that even the beloved daughter of the Duke, the second most powerful man in the capital after the Emperor, somehow can't match the young lady from the Eastern Barony. So it's no surprise that Sylvia backed down so easily. Once he and Layla are outside, she starts pressing him about Sylvia. She wonders if there's a chance he might get engaged to her, but he quickly shuts that down and insists they were only talking, just greeting. That idea instantly lifts Layla's mood, and even the protagonist notices it. After a short walk, they reach the secret spot only MC knows about. He's sure nobody will bother them here. The moment they step into the hidden place, Layla lights up and does a little happy dance, thrilled by it. She's also glad no one will know if they do anything there. Dane agrees, it really is a great place to train. But before they start, he asks if she's ever felt mana before. Layla says she has, a little, but not enough to form a mana core. She adds that she tried absorbing mana through breathing. That tells him she still hasn't reached the emission stage. He learned to sense mana naturally on the battlefield, so he's surprised a noble house taught her even this much. So he starts with the basics and tells her the first step is feeling the mana she absorbs. Layla looks confused, and the protagonist explains that if she wants to release mana, she first has to control the mana inside her. The key is imagination. He tells her to close her eyes and picture the mana spinning inside her. After a moment, she tries, but nothing happens. From her face, Dane can tell she didn't really get it. Layla gives it another shot, but again, nothing happens. Frustrated, she asks MC why it still isn't working. He calms her down, saying that's normal for a first try, and tells her to focus again. Meanwhile, Count Dane is secretly watching the two kids. He can't help feeling proud that his son is already teaching someone at such a young age. To him, it really feels like he has grown up. Then Duke Terian suddenly sneaks up beside him and asks what the hell he's doing there. The question nearly stops the Count's heart. The Duke quickly tells him not to panic and asks if he's spying on two lovebirds enjoying time alone. Count Dane raises a brow, asks what he means by lovebirds, and wants to know how he even found him. The Duke laughs, saying the Count did a terrible job hiding, especially for the husband of the Empire's legendary assassin. Count, the protagonist, has no idea how to respond after getting caught spying. The Duke teases him, saying if the lord of the castle goes around snooping on people, others will start talking. Annoyed, the overprotective father insists he was only following his son. The Duke laughs and points out he was just following his daughter too. Turns out both fathers are hopeless. So they stand there side by side like a pair of teenagers, spying on their children. Back with the kids, Dane opens his dimensional bag, and the girl is amazed he already has something like that. When he says his older sister recently made it for him as a gift, she gets jealous. Unlike his sister, her older brother stopped paying much attention to her after they entered the academy. Dane then pulls out a mirror from the bag, and she casually asks what it's for. He says he brought it in case it might help. It's easier to picture something while looking at yourself than relying only on imagination. So he tells the curious girl to stand in front of the mirror, where she can see herself fully. She quickly takes her place in front of it, and starts her little magic dance again. This time Dane can tell she's serious. She takes a deep breath, while both loving parents quietly crouch on the ground to keep watching. Duke Terian points out that Lilia seems to like MC. He asks if that's really true, and the Duke says yes. Lilia usually doesn't warm up to people this fast. Count Dane says that's surprising, since she seems like such a bright child. Duke Terian goes quiet for a moment, then says she only seems bright on the outside. He explains that after her siblings left for the academy, her mother became bedridden, so they couldn't stay close like before. Since then, opening up to others has been hard for her. The Count asks that if he already knows all that, why does he always act so cold toward his daughter? Terian looks honestly moved that the Count noticed, and admits he does it on purpose. He says he raised his older children with too much affection, and they grew spoiled, but Count Dane tells him not to assume Lilia will turn out the same way. She'll only end up hurt, and now it makes sense why she asked the protagonist for help instead of her father. Terian points at his friend and jokes that he's nagging like the old days, but the Count fires back, asking when he ever did that, especially since what he said is true. The Duke changes the subject, and asks when he plans to send his son to the capital. If he sends him to the Cal house, he says their doors will be open and the boy can stay at the castle of Cal. Count Dane falls quiet and looks back at his son. Seeing him happy, he simply says he'll let MC choose for himself. He's free to pick his own path, just like his older sisters. We also miss him watching the two loving fathers, clearly embarrassed by how openly they're spying. But in the end, she just smiles, realizing parental love makes them act strange, and decides not to ruin the moment by pretending she saw nothing. Back with the children, Lilia thanks Dane for helping her, and calls him a real genius. She admits that even though everyone calls her gifted, next to him she feels weak. As the protagonist casually looks around to check whether the parents have finally slipped away, he assures her this is only the start and that she'll definitely become stronger too. She then asks if he's going to the academy, since that's where all the Empire's geniuses gather. He says he still isn't sure, and doesn't think he needs it, because he can get very strong just by training on his own. The girl calls that short-sighted, and reminds him the academy isn't only for studying, it's where nobles start building their faction, and make connections early. Dane is impressed that a 7-year-old girl understands the real world so well. He finally answers that he already knows all that, but he still doesn't want to go yet. There's a mountain of books in the library he hasn't read, and he still has a lot to learn from his parents. Lily admits that's fair, but asks if he doesn't want to play with kids his own age, especially since she heard his older sisters also attend the academy. Running out of answers, MC says maybe he'll go in the future if he feels like it. She tells him to visit her house when he plans to come to the capital, and they promise to meet again. Then she remembers to ask when he'll make his request now that he taught her how to use mana bullets. He just shakes his head and says he'll tell her when he comes to the capital. That shocks her, and she lets out a loud cry of disbelief. At last, the day she leaves arrives. When Lilia's carriage begins rolling down the road, Dane looks at a stone-like object in his hand, a gift from his future father-in-law. The story cuts back to when the Duke gave him the strange item. When he asked what it was, the man said it was a birthday gift, and hoped he'd like it. He also explains that House Thermian stands for vengeance, the sword, and the forge, and that their line began with an ancestor who was a blacksmith. Because of him, their house owns the best forge in the Empire. Really, the best on the whole continent. Every weapon made by the Thermians to protect the Empire came from that forge. Of course, Dane already knows this. From his past knowledge, every kind of ore in the world can be found there, and all kinds of weapons and mystical artifacts are made in the greatest forge on the continent. Then the Duke reveals that if the protagonist shows this insignia at the forge, they'll make whatever weapon he wants. So this rock-like item is actually an insignia, a certified token proving the honor and skill of the one who holds it. Count MC is completely stunned to see the Duke give away something so valuable, something even the Imperial family wants. The Duke simply pats the boy's head and tells his future son-in-law to grow well and help his father. His future wife gives him one last wave before they part. Back in the present, his mother crouches beside him. Seeing how down he looks, she asks if he's upset because they left. He admits it, saying Lilia was basically his first friend. His mother comforts him, saying that once he goes to the capital, he'll see her again, and by then he'll be even more handsome, which is sure to impress her. She's probably right. He can't stay here forever, and he'll have plenty of chances to meet her again later. So he quietly wishes her happiness until they meet again. Meanwhile, as the Duke rides in his carriage, his mind is still on Dane. He finds it strange that every time he looks at the boy, he remembers Agric, the warrior who showed the skill of a triple-class fighter at a very young age. He's sure that if Agric had lived, he might have become one of the Drain Empire's hexaclass knights. That's why he hopes to see Dane again once he's grown stronger. A few days later, our boy is sitting alone in front of the egg. He's been feeding it mana every morning and night, and now he wonders if he's overdoing it. The egg holds a strange familiar, Even someone who isn't a summoner can pour mana into it before it hatches and claim it as their master, letting them keep control of a summon that would normally be temporary. Still, he knows his mana has to match the familiar, and there are probably other hard conditions he hasn't met yet. He's heard that some eggs never hatch at all because those conditions are never fulfilled, so he hopes this one isn't like that. Even after changing the flow and strength of his mana, nothing happens. After pushing himself hard one more time, he sets the egg back down, thinking he was greedy to expect results so fast. Then the butler shows up at the door and asks if Danny is ready. Right then, the egg reacts and starts making noises. Danny rushes to it, sure he really did hear something. The butler hurries in too, asking what that sound was. Danny tells him to wait while he checks the egg first. But once again, he ends up disappointed and realizes he got excited for nothing. He can't feel any change. When the butler asks if the egg reacted, Danny says no, it was probably just his imagination. Once he gets to the training hall, he starts by practicing swordsmanship. After seeing those flawless moves, the butler lights up. He even claps and asks when Danny learned to use a sword. Danny brushes it off, saying he just wanted to swing it a little. The butler keeps praising him, calling him a genius who's talented with the sword too. Looking at the blade, Danny thinks about how fun it was to learn a new weapon like the spear, but he also missed using a sword. His father watched him too closely for that, so he's glad he hasn't lost his touch. The butler quickly goes to get snacks and comes back with a full tray, telling Danny to eat something before training again. Meanwhile, we move to Count Dane's Sogress, staring out the window, lost in thought. He's been a little worn out from arranging this banquet every year, but at least it showed him that many nobles are watching the south. Most of them want a good relationship with him now, which is a nice change. Since the war ended, the south has enjoyed great weather and all the comforts nobles can't resist, so maybe that interest should have been obvious. Even so, it's nothing compared to the attention Danny is getting. The trouble with Count Tamian's eldest son went far beyond Dane's expectations, yet Danny handled it calmly and like an adult. He laid everything out clearly for the grown-ups, and then confidently showed off his talent. He can't help thinking his son is too mature for his age. Sometimes he wishes Danny would act a little more like other kids and relax a bit. As the time for training gets close, he heads to the training hall. He takes the legendary spear, Dragentail, planning to let Danny hold it today. But the second he steps in with the spear, he freezes when he sees Danny wielding a sword. Now he starts wondering why his son chose a sword, and his mind jumps to the past. He's sure that cursed Duke must have said something. Otherwise, there's no way Danny would be using a sword after all that spear training. He just stands there watching his son pull off amazing moves with the blade. Seriously, Danny looks like he knows exactly what he's doing. The power he shows is something even skilled swordsmen would struggle to match. It makes Dane wonder when he learned all this. One thing is clear, Danny is gifted with the sword too. At last he calls out and asks when Danny learned those moves. Looks like Danny's secret is finally out, so he decides it's better to tell his father the truth. He admits he never actually learned any of it. That only leaves the protagonist even more confused, wondering if this is another hidden talent. He starts thinking out loud. Danny can handle the spear, magic, assassination, summoning, and now swordsmanship too. Then he adds that if it were anyone else, he'd never believe a child could be talented in all those fields. So he asks Danny if he's curious about the world beyond these walls. Danny looks confused, unsure what his father means. Then his father tells him that if he wants to see the outside world, he should go. He truly believes this country may be too small for his son's huge talent, and if Danny stays here, he'll be the one who loses. A wave of sadness hits Danny when he realizes his father has accepted he can't keep him forever, so he finally says he'd be happy to learn about the world outside. Hearing that, his father smiles and gets straight to the point. It's time to prepare his son for the real world. He admits it hurts a little to see his son leave, but he knows he has to respect Danny's wishes. Then he shows him the spear, saying he brought something special today. It doesn't take Danny long to realize what it is, and his father clears up any doubt by reminding him this is Dragentail, the spear that reacted to him on his first birthday. He holds it out and tells Danny to take it. The moment Danny grabs the spear, it reacts, and he feels an incredible surge of power running through it. His father laughs and says it's reacting far more strongly than when Danny was only 1 year old. And honestly, who could blame it? Then he proudly tells his son he plans to make him master the spear before he leaves, so he'd better be ready. He promises that one day Dragentail will be his, but first he has to become strong enough to wield it with pride. Danny eagerly promises to work hard and honor his father's teachings. Later, back in his room, Danny's mind is racing with thoughts about the outside world. He's always been curious about it, even during those long days on the battlefield. As a soldier, all he really knew was war, setting camp, cleaning weapons, eating bland food, and waiting for the next battle. The only ways out were for the war to end or for him to die fighting, and honestly, those felt like his only choices. But now a normal life is finally in front of him, and he can barely imagine what exists beyond the battlefield. Still, as Dane Sogress, he knows he has to take this chance. He has no idea how the world will use his talents, how people will receive him, or what he might achieve out there, but for the first time, he can travel, explore, and chase whatever he wants. At first, all he wanted was to stay and enjoy the warmth of this place. But after his father's question, his thinking changed. He finally chose to step out into the world, and he's truly excited about it. As he's thinking about that, his mother walks into his room, catching him off guard. He asks when she came in. She says he was so deep in thought that he didn't even hear her knock. But honestly, she's probably lying. She's an assassin, so she likely slipped in without a sound. Then she asks if he really is curious about the world outside the country, and he says yes, explaining that his father told him it would be a waste for him to stay here. After thinking it over, he admits he wants to see the outside world too. Then he starts apologizing to his mother, but she hugs him and says there's nothing to be sorry for. He reminds her his sisters aren't here, and worries about leaving for the wider world. She reassures him that it's fine, because she knows how amazing his talents are. She adds that even if he chose not to go, the outside world would call for him anyway. She admits it would be wonderful if he could stay with his mother longer, but the world won't allow that, so she tells him to go and chase what he wants. He promises that even after leaving home, he'll come back often and tell her about everything he sees. His mother thanks him and says it sounds like she finally needs to teach him before sending him into the world, just like his father is about to teach him. When he asks what kind of lessons she means, she excitedly says she'll teach him everything about assassination. She keeps going on about all the skills and knowledge she has, and Danny can already tell this is going to mean several exhausting days before he even leaves. Overall, she says she'll teach him a lot, and he assures her he'll do his best to learn. As he looks at her, he can't help thinking he's about to get special lessons from his mother, full of love. Many years pass, and the scene shifts to the southern region of the Altian Empire, the county of Sugri, a land known for its warm climate and rich natural resources. This place became one of the empire's key regions, helping keep it strong during the war. Thanks to Count Sugri's generous rule, it is peaceful and welcoming. Now that the war is over, the last small rebel forces have been captured, bringing lasting peace to everyone. On a bright day, people chat excitedly about how young Master Dane Sugri visited one of the shops recently. They can't stop talking about how the shopkeeper's oldest daughter literally fainted when she saw him. The ladies gossip that he gets more handsome every day, and say they'd love to see his face at least once. There's even a rumor that he's still single, giving them a little hope. But one friend quickly reminds the other that he's only 14 and tells her to stop drooling over an underage boy. One of the women then says people are starting to doubt Dane is really just 14. He's already as tall as Count Sugri, and some even say he could pass for a 20-year-old. Anyway, that's enough gossip. Let's see how much our boy has grown. We shift to the outskirts of MC's county, an area filled with ancient magic called the Forest of the Last Days. Dane is there on a special mission his mother Lily gave him. He carries a spear in one hand and a piece of cloth in the other, likely some kind of map. Whatever it is, he's already picked his route. With only 3 hours left before sunset, he knows he has to get out before dark, so he starts moving through the forest with ninja-like speed. The key to this mission is simple: don't get caught by his enemies. Dane has to avoid the traps and nests his mother set while making it through a forest packed with danger. After moving for a while, he finally lands on the ground. He takes a deep breath, pulls in the air and energy around him for a moment, then lets it out again. Once he blends into his surroundings and focuses on staying hidden, he starts noticing traps all around him. Thin, nearly invisible wires stretched across the area. He knows every trap will go off the second he touches them. Wires. It's a basic setup, but that's what makes it dangerous. Luckily, this one looks manageable. Then rat-like monsters rush into the clearing, and the second they spot Dane, they waste no time charging him. There's a whole pack, and he clearly didn't expect them here. Even worse, they're all coming straight at him fast. Before they hit the wires and trigger the traps, he has to deal with them quickly. But if he slips and touches a trap himself, things could get even worse. Still, there's no time to waste. He has to move. Dane breaks into a run, and the moment the rats trigger the traps, sharp needles shoot in from every direction, skewering the unlucky beasts caught in the cross pattern. So that was his plan all along. Lead them into the trap. He's glad it worked and saved him the trouble of fighting them himself. But then he spots one rat that's still alive. As he closes the gap, the monster leaps right at him. Dane keeps fighting the last of the house beast, and the rodent is almost as fast as he is. The giant rat suddenly stops and turns for another attack. This time it uses range, spitting a strange substance from its mouth. Dane quickly reads the situation. He doesn't know what it is, but that spit definitely looks dangerous. He spins his spear and knocks the attack away. Gritting his teeth, he realizes he can't waste any more time on this tough rat. Blocking will only slow him down, so now it's time to strike back. A blue aura gathers around his body as he locks onto the target. Then, with a burst of blinding moves, he shows off his incredible spear skill. He moves freely through the air while tracking the enemy perfectly, and the beast's head is split clean in two. Dane doesn't even stop to look. He just leaves at once and continues the mission. By sunset, he reaches the endpoint of the test. He's completely drained, gasping and doing his best not to throw up. At least he finally made it out of the forest alive. Suddenly, he feels a fierce presence coming from the woods and worries the fight isn't over. He jumps to his feet, regretting that he let his guard down to rest. Just as he's about to face it, he stops. It's only his mother, Lily. She let him sense her on purpose to test his reaction, and he passed. On top of that, his total time was 3 hours and 30 minutes, even faster than Lily's old record. She had watched the whole time. After all, no mother would leave her son alone in a place that dangerous. Lily knew better than anyone how gifted he was, but being his mother made it different. After this test, which Dane basically mastered, Lily couldn't find a single flaw in his survival skills or adaptability. She gently pinched his cheeks and said that, at this rate, he could already be recruited as an assassin. To celebrate his successful run, Lily brought out her most treasured possession as the Empire's greatest assassin, her dagger. She felt it suited her son better now. From this moment on, Dane would be the owner of Nighthorn. With a bright smile, Lily handed the legendary weapon to him, since she had no more use for it anyway. Nighthorn was forged from the mysterious etrel ore, a material that can take on the properties of any object. If he wanted, he could use it to store every poison in the world, mixing and absorbing them for his own use. The protagonist sincerely thanked his mother for such a precious gift and promised to take good care of Nighthorn. That also marked the end of his assassin training with Lily. Just as they were getting ready to head home, the mother and son heard a rough scream nearby. It seemed to come from deep inside the forest, so they went to check it out. A few days later, inside the Annex Tower of Danes County, a man wakes up in one of the guest rooms, coughing and shouting in terror. With long white hair and a beard, he looks totally lost, struggling to catch his breath. Once he finally looks around the fancy room, he wonders where he is. The last thing he remembers is eating a mushroom in that cursed forest. The door creaks open, and Dane walks in, carrying water. He tells the man not to move much because he's still going through detox. MC explains that the old man must have accidentally eaten a red-nosed poisonous mushroom. Luckily, he and Lily found him in time. The old man remembers seeing those mushrooms but never thought they were that deadly. If they had arrived a little later, he'd already be rotting. The protagonist hands him a cup of water, knowing how thirsty he must be. As the young man watches him closely, he notices a belt with the Nixian magic tower crest among the old man's things, so this clearly isn't some ordinary person. If Nighthorn hadn't absorbed the poison wrecking his body, the old man would have died. After calming down a little, the man asks where he is, and Dane plainly says they're in the Annex Tower of the County of MC. The old man must have gotten lost in the southern region. Poisoned by those cursed mushrooms, he somehow walked all the way south. He tells him to rest for now and wait for the Count to come see him. He also introduces himself as the Count's youngest son, Dane. That catches the old man's attention right away. He's heard of Arabella, the genius desired by every magic tower in the Empire. The protagonist also explains they found the old man in the forest while he was training with his mother. The old man nearly spits out his water when he hears that insane forest had tormented him. Even as an 8-circle mage, he got lost, and when he cast a spell, the twisted mana flow backfired and wrecked his whole body. That forest is packed with ancient mana, and hidden traps are scattered all through it. Since it belongs to House Dane, it's naturally dangerous for anyone outside the family. And because of that ancient magic, the mana flow is completely different from what modern mages are used to. For one of them, it's the worst possible place to be. The old man finally realizes he truly would have died if MC hadn't saved him. He also sees that the boy in front of him might be a once-in-a-generation talent if he can train freely in that hellish place. He even made the antidote he desperately needed to survive. From his looks, the boy was still in his teens, yet even at that age he was able to make an antidote that required deep knowledge and exact preparation skills. The old man couldn't believe how blessed House Dane was. They already had 2 generational geniuses in magic and summoning, and now even the youngest son seemed like a monster. If the continent were still at war, House, the protagonist, could easily have become the strongest noble house in the Altean Empire. The old man thanks MC and admits he owes him his life. He's a little taken aback by the boy's bold attitude, but says he always repays his debts. First, he introduces himself properly. This old man is Sidron Gauss, the former head of the Nixian Magic Tower. Proud of his name and rank, he tells Dane to ask for whatever he wants. He only smiles at that show of modesty. He can tell this wandering old mage is the type who keeps everything he owns in a subspace. Sidron is thrown off by how calm the protagonist stays after hearing his title. Most people would be shocked or nervous in front of a tower master, but the boy doesn't flinch at all. Trying to recover his dignity, Cedric urges him again to ask for anything. Dane pauses for a second, seeming to think over his next words. Cedric smiles, expecting a chance to prove how dependable he is, but MC simply says he needs more time to think about his reward. He never gives Cedric the satisfaction of feeling important, and in the end, MC turns to the door and wishes the great mage a quick recovery, telling him to get some more rest. Once the boy finally leaves the room, Cedric just sits there on the bed, stunned by his indifference. No one had ever treated Sidron like he was just some regular mage. The old man starts thinking he might leave after only a day or two. But not this time. He had just met an interesting kid in the south, and now he wanted to learn more about him. Dane casually told Herman who Sidron was, and the attendant excitedly explained that 8-chain mages sit at the very top, the best of the best. That meant someone with huge power now owed him a favor. Magic towers, after all, work like independent powers on this continent, almost like sovereign nations. So Cedric was an incredibly important person. Even so, it was strange that the head of a magic tower had been wandering through that forest. Then again, this was no normal forest. Mages treat it as forbidden ground and call it the Forest of Last Days. Just hearing that name tells you regular people should never go near it. Dane looked at the sword in his hand and told Herman to get him a new one. The ones he had been using were already too short and too light for him. Luckily, they had plenty of weapons from the war trophies the Count brought back. By tomorrow, the protagonist could start training with a proper longsword. For now, he would finish training with the lighter blade. Then he remembered the crest Duke Terian had given him, a free pass to forge any weapon he wanted. 7 years had passed since then. Looking back, Dane remembered those days fondly. If he ever went to the capital, his first stop would definitely be the Duke's land. After training, MC met his father outside the hall. He had thought his father still had business away from the castle, but to his surprise, he came back early. Things had wrapped up faster than expected, so the Count rushed home to check on the head of the magic tower, recovering in a guest room. He hoped Cedric Goss could help Arabella. After all, she would need a strong teacher. Dane had thought the same thing. Maybe the Tower Master could guide his sister, but he wasn't sure the old man could handle her attitude. He had heard Arabella once punched a senior for being annoying. Either way, Count Sogress praised his son for saving a life. Sure, he had only done what needed to be done, but it was still something not everyone could pull off. The protagonist had truly grown into an amazing young man. As the years passed, it got harder and harder for Count Dane Sogress to even catch a glimpse of his daughters. Arabella had finished her extended term and was choosing a magic tower, while Claire had become an assistant professor. That's the price of having exceptional children. Of course, Claire and Arabella were outstanding on their own, but the Count also had big hopes for his only son. He often wondered how the world would deal with a man carrying so many gifts. The Count looked forward to the day his rival, Balt Terian, would see how far Dane had come. It had been years since he was reborn as the son of House MC Sogress, yet the thought of crossing swords with Duke Terian still fired him up. Anyway, he also wondered how Layla was doing in the capital. Her last letter had come maybe a year ago. He was looking forward to seeing what she had been up to once he reached the capital. A few days later, Cedric complained he was going crazy in the guest room. He still hadn't fully recovered. The doctor told him not to go far and strictly banned him from using magic. His mana backlash still hadn't been cleared, and the poison in his body wasn't fully gone either. He needed more time to rest. Cedric didn't have much choice. He hadn't been unable to use magic in a long time, so this was at least a change of pace. Still, staying locked up all day was too much, so he left the room even though he didn't know the annex. The doctor worried the old man would cause trouble, and that he'd be the one dealing with it. In just a few days, the maids had already started rumors about the strange old guest. People say mages are either geniuses or crazy. Some servants saw Cedric walking up and down the annex stairs over and over, and now he was spending hours just staring at the flowers in the garden. They had heard he was supposed to be a mighty mage, but to them, he just looked like a weird old man. They even worried about young Arabella. Cedric, meanwhile, was completely charmed by the beautifully made garden on the estate. He never would have guessed it had been arranged with such amazing magical skill. Dane walked up to the old man. He had searched all over before finally finding Cedric in the garden. Cedric clearly didn't enjoy being stuck in a strange place until he was fully healed, but everyone was only trying to help him. Even so, the area really was a nice place to rest and recover. He could see why so many nobles came south during vacation season. Dane loved the south, so it was a shame he would be leaving soon. Curious, Cedric asked the boy where he was headed. The protagonist casually said he would soon be going to the capital, and Cedric assumed he was bound for the academy. After all, both of his sisters were already well known there. While the daughters of House MC Sogress were famous for their incredible talent, Cedric was even more curious about MC's gift, so he poured mana into his eyes and decided to check for himself. Inside the boy's body was a raging wave of raw power. Cedric's eyes widened. He had never seen mana this dense. The boy's power was on a whole other level. If other geniuses his age were streams, Dane was a rushing torrent tearing through everything in its path. Normally, that much power in someone so young would be unstable and ready to explode. But not here. He quickly noticed the old man inspecting his mana without permission and called it rude. Cedric awkwardly stopped and praised him for catching it. He apologized and admitted it may have been thoughtless. Inside, though, he still couldn't understand how Dane kept such wild power under control. In all his years as an archmage, the boy was a one-of-a-kind case. Confused by the old man's reaction, the protagonist wondered what he had seen. Cedric had been so focused on the amount and density of MC's mana that he only now realized the boy didn't have a magic circle. With that much mana, forming one should have been easy. The old man's face twisted in horror as he realized what must have happened. Looking closer at his heart, Cedric saw 2 mana cores. Sure, making 2 mana cores at that age was unbelievable, but the old mage looked furious that he had chosen this path. To him, having that insane amount of mana and using it just to handle a spear was madness. Cedric thought turning that power into cores instead of circles was almost a crime. In his eyes, Dane had turned away from the greatest magical talent he had ever seen. Confused, the protagonist asked if he couldn't simply use both mana cores and magic circles. That only made the grumpy old man even angrier. He grabbed his head in frustration, overwhelmed by all that wasted potential. He didn't even know where to start explaining how badly MC had trapped himself. Cedric asked if he knew why magic swordsmen usually have short lives. It's because they carry both mana cores and magic circles at the same time, and those two systems keep clashing. When that happens, compressed mana from the core flows into the circle, If the circle can't handle that force, it shatters into pieces. Dane understood the idea, but he hadn't realized it could be that serious. Cedric had gotten so irritable because he was watching the world's greatest talent get wasted on training with a spear. Worried, he asked if that meant magic was impossible for him. Now, Cedric said it wasn't impossible, but casting spells that need refined mana without a circle was, in theory, nearly impossible. On top of that, many had tried this path, and every case Cedric had personally seen ended in failure. Even so, the protagonist wasn't discouraged. He had never really tried it properly before. He just felt he could cast spells without refining mana through a magic circle. Cedric thought the boy had lost his mind. Dane didn't waste time. He used what he already knew and started reshaping a magic code. After adjusting the runes and the mana in the air, everything came together smoothly. Once the code was rearranged, he produced a fire spell with a strong blast. Every doubt in his mind vanished the moment it worked. It was only a basic one-chain spell, but he had cast magic without a magic circle. Cedric's jaw dropped. Common sense said someone without a magic circle shouldn't be able to cast spells. In all his years leading the Nixian magic tower, he had never seen anything like it. Dane kept going, changing the code again and creating a mana barrier around his body. He explained that Arabella had discovered his high affinity for magic, and he wondered if that was why he could do impossible things with mana. Maybe that was part of it, but what he was doing went far beyond theory. Cedric Gauss had stood at the top of the magic world for a long time. This was the first time he felt what ordinary people feel when they face true monsters of talent. He was watching an inborn gift that could shake the world. Meanwhile, Dane was just amused that the spells had actually worked. The old Archmage's knees trembled with excitement. MC had unmatched mana affinity and power purer and denser than anyone else in the world. The boy was truly extraordinary, a once-in-a-lifetime genius. Cedric couldn't hold back anymore. Right away, he asked him if he wanted to become his personal disciple. The old man pushed hard, trying to convince Dane to accept his teaching, because letting that kind of talent go unused would be a loss for the whole world. The protagonist was starting to get tired of his persistence when Cedric asked if he knew any two-chain spells. The boy had never learned two-chain magic codes, so he couldn't cast a higher-level spell. Cedric laughed and bragged that if MC became his student, he'd be casting 8-chain spells before long. Even so, MC politely turned him down. Cedric's patience was running out when Agric stepped in and laughed at how close the Archmage was getting to his son. When asked what they were talking about, Agric honestly said the old man kept trying to make Dane his disciple, even after being refused several times. At least Cedric knew how to act in front of the head of the house, praising his potential to become a great mage someday. He stressed that the protagonist's future was brighter than anyone could imagine, since he could already use chain-level magic without a circle. As a true warrior, Count Agric understood just how unbelievable that was. At this point, the Count had almost stopped being shocked by his son's inhuman feats. Dane didn't even know the basics of spells, yet he could cast them naturally. The Count also praised the former head of the Magic Tower for seeing MC's talent right away. But talent wasn't enough of a word. MC was a genius who could truly become an unmatched magic lancer. The moment Count Agric heard that, he pictured his son giving up the spear and taking up a sword. His good mood vanished, and the anger in the room was obvious. The title of Magic Swordsman clearly did not sit well with Agric. Dane shivered when Sidran said the one word that should never be spoken in front of his father. Not noticing the mood at all, Sidran kept pushing the idea of him becoming a magic swordsman. He even promised to take full responsibility and turn the boy into the strongest fighter in the Empire. By the time he noticed the Count's expression, it was already too late. Count Agric shouted at the top of his lungs that his son would never become a magic swordsman. Sidran argued that sword and magic were a perfect match for a genius fit for both, but Agric kept yelling that his boy would not become a magic swordsman. If anything, he'd become a magic lancer. Sidran finally understood what the real problem was. Dane just stayed as quiet as possible while his father calmed down. Poor Sidran had never met a family as strange as the Sogress family. For a mage, taking on a disciple carries huge meaning. Powerful mages usually choose their successors through a rite called inheritance. It's a tradition that goes back to ancient times, even long after formal magic education became common. What Sidran wanted was not just a disciple but someone to inherit his life's work and the legacy before it. The fact that an 8-chain archmage was still this desperate to recruit him gave Dane a lot more confidence in his own talent and future. He could feel a strange new emotion stirring inside him. Now that he understood the basics of magic, he remembered a gift Arabella had left him years ago, a crystal ball he could use if he wanted to see his sister. Right now, getting Arabella's opinion sounded helpful. Dane took out the crystal ball and poured mana into it. He called Arabella telepathically while she was studying in the academy library. When she finally recognized his voice, she was stunned. Arabella dropped what she was doing and smiled, happy that her little brother had contacted her. As expected, even Arabella was shocked to hear that the protagonist had used a one-chain spell without a magic circle. She already knew his mana affinity was absurdly high, but not to this level. Since the circle mainly purifies and moves mana, she guessed Dane's mana might already be pure enough to use as it is. To test that, Arabella wanted to send a mana stone to the device in MC's room and check the purity of his mana. It was lucky he had Arabella to help with things like this. She was already a well-known 6-chain mage, and her support was deeply reassuring. Arabella believed that since the protagonist could already use chain-level magic, drawing attention at the academy would be unavoidable, even though that was the last thing he wanted. Still, there was no stopping it. Talent always draws eyes, but Arabella promised she'd crush anyone who tried to bully her little brother. Speaking of bullies, Dane asked about the rumor that she broke the nose of an upperclassman, the second son of the dual duchy. Just thinking about that clingy jerk made Arabella mad, realizing she was taking the call in a public place. She tried to calm herself down. In any case, she guessed MC's mana purity might keep increasing over time, and that was one possibility they had to consider. Sadly, the talk had to end when one of her professors called for her. They said goodbye, and Arabella promised to send the mana stone. It finally hit Dane that he might be walking a path no one had ever walked before. With mana this pure, he joked that maybe a dragon's heart was beating in his chest or something. Meanwhile, Sidran was still stuck in the annex recovering. He had used mana to inspect him, and that made his magic backlash worse, so he might have to stay there even longer. If the boy would just accept his offer, Sidran could pass on one of the greatest legacies in magic. He kept wondering what he could do to lure the protagonist over. If even 8-chain magic wasn't enough to tempt him, maybe he should offer some priceless artifact or pass down an inheritance refined through many generations. But if he handed over his treasures too soon, Dane might trick him and leave him with nothing. While he was still racking his brain for ideas, MC knocked on the door. Sidran wondered if the boy had come to apologize or maybe changed his mind about the offer. Dane had come to see the old bat because he had something to say. Sidran instantly assumed he had finally decided to become his disciple, but he quickly shut that idea down. No, it wasn't that he had no interest in magic. Sidran asked if he already had a master, but that wasn't it either. Thinking he was being toyed with, Sidran asked what the boy wanted. It was simple. The protagonist still didn't know the rearrangement code for 2-chain magic. Learning from his sister would be hard since she was far away, so the best choice was to learn from Sidran, a real archmage, and since the old man still owed him for the rescue, refusing right away would be hard. Dane admitted he didn't want to walk only the path of a mage. He wasn't going to become just a magic lancer either. He wanted to be a summoner magic lancer assassin. As far as Sidran knew, nothing that ridiculous even existed. Hell, MC said he'd even add swordsman to that title. The sheer absurdity of the boy's dream left Sidran speechless. To chase something that wild, he had drawn a clear line and refused to become the former Magic Tower chief's disciple. From his tone, Sidran could tell the boy had already made up his mind. Then an idea struck him. The old mage stood up and asked if Dane would be interested in a letter of recommendation. Since he planned to enter the academy, one from the former head of the Nixion Magic Tower would greatly raise his standing. The protagonist thought about it for a moment and decided it wasn't a bad offer at all. He accepted the letter, and while they were at it, he had one more request. Cedric laughed to himself, thinking the boy had finally come around. Maybe now he could start securing his hold over this unmatched genius. Seeing the old man in a generous mood, Dane asked if he could also learn the rearrangement code for 2-chain magic. For someone like Sidran, that shouldn't be hard. After all, he knew the rearrangement code for every existing 2-chain spell. MC was still young, so a recommendation letter and a few 2-chain spell codes were hardly too much to give. Even if he wasn't in top condition, Sidran could start teaching right away. He quietly smiled to himself, knowing he had just pulled off a big win. He held out his hand and said that with all of this, Sidran's debt for being saved should now be fully repaid. The old bat had said it himself. Since he owed Dane so much, the boy could ask for anything. So that was exactly what he was doing. Sidran did not like being played like that. He had really thought he was finally getting a disciple. But the protagonist's answer to the invitation hadn't changed at all. It was a big no. The old man had been outsmarted by a 14-year-old. Still refusing to give up, Cedric argued that the boy had asked for 2 things when he only owed 1 favor. Dane disagreed. First, he had saved the old man's unconscious body in the forest. Second, he had neutralized the poison wrecking Cedran's body. He could have also mentioned carrying the unconscious old man all the way to the annex, but he decided to count that as a bonus. Cedric had no comeback. He was completely and logically beaten. He honestly wondered how a child this bold even existed in this world. In the end, Sidran and Dane set their lessons for the training hall. The old man had partly accepted that he might never get MC as an official disciple, but he could still keep trying to win the boy over if he changed his mind someday. Cedric simply could not bear to let talent like this go to waste. The lesson finally began. First, they had to deal with the fact that Dane was using chain-level magic without a circle. He would need to focus hard, because the rearrangement code for 2-chain magic was far more complex than 1-chain. Countless young mages never even reach that stage and give up instead. He listened closely, glad to have such an experienced teacher. Cedran saw the light in the boy's eyes and made sure not to go easy on him. He still had his pride as an archmage to maintain, after all. 2-chain codes are on a completely different level, because the caster has to calculate the mana amount personally. The magic density in the air and even the state of the body both matter at the same time. Magic is so hard and complicated that most people quit. Cedran gave the full complex explanation, expecting Dane to ask for a simpler one. When he asked if the boy needed anything explained, the protagonist just smiled and told him to keep going. For MC, learning not only how magic codes are rearranged, but also things he had never known before was eye-opening. To make sure he truly understood, Agric asked him to explain the laws behind magical rearrangement. From Dane's notes, the first law was this: coexistence. Magical power can exist in the physical world and alongside other sources of mana. Through that coexistence, mages use both their own power and the mana around them to cast spells. The second law was conservation. If magical power gathers enough elemental matter, it can show different traits through that stored energy. Dane didn't just understand magic deeply, he was already adding his own ideas to it. Most people would think magic theory was boring, but that wasn't true for him. The boy had talent, tools, and a real hunger to learn. How could anyone be a more perfect mage candidate? As the lesson went on, Agric explained that magic codes grow far more complex with each added chain. Rather than stay in theory, he decided a demonstration would be easier. He skillfully drew out a small amount of mana and built a simple magic grid to show a one-chain spell in its most basic form. But from 2 chains on, everything gets much harder. He changed the mana fragment into a spinning mass of runes and power, showing the rearrangement code for 2-chain magic. Dane fixed his eyes on the display, paying close attention to how complex the nodes were. Agric then shaped the code into the 2-chain fire spell, Fire Arrow. With magic codes, repetition is what leads to mastery. The old man figured he was finally seeing just how hard magic could be. By his estimate, most people needed at least a year to move from a 1-chain code to a 2-chain one. No matter how smart someone is, the human mind can only grasp one piece of the code at a time. Agric thought he could guide Dane's progress over about a week, teaching him the methods step by step for mastering 2-chain codes. But the protagonist already wanted to try and Agric allowed it, expecting the boy to fail badly. But the moment MC began drawing mana out of his body to make the first code, Agric felt like he was watching a master at work. The boy focused and used his hands to shape the pure mana spinning in the air. Soon he formed the same grid Agric had shown as the basic structure of a chain code. The lines had exact length and width, made with scary precision, and the old man was stunned. Dane could have stopped there and still been called a genius, but where's the fun in that? Instead, he broke apart the mana grid and slowly turned it into a swirl of mana in the air. Agric was speechless when he saw a perfect copy of the 2-chain rearrangement code he had demonstrated just once. Asked how he did it so fast, he simply said he copied it by watching and memorizing the rules and patterns. He pictured every factor in his head while building the code, and it came surprisingly easily. Agric was amazed again and again. Even as a magic genius, he had needed time to reach 2-chain magic. Yet a boy without a magic circle did it in just a few minutes. As if he wanted to give the old man a heart attack, Dane then said he would try casting Fire Arrow too. He moved the mana and runes around his body with flawless speed. At last, he rearranged the code perfectly, and created several fire arrows. Agric stared at the completed arrows, refusing to believe what he was seeing. Watching this boy push the old man into an existential crisis. If he had grown up with the protagonist's talent, he might have already reached his dream of 9-chain magic. Dane easily controlled the fire arrows, sending them around the training hall, while the Archmage tried to recover. Even MC was surprised that everything came so naturally all at once. One thing was clear: the world would go crazy if it saw a circleless mage pulling off magic like this. Agric knew his talent had to stay hidden before all kinds of shady people came after him. And on top of that, he still hadn't given up on making the boy his disciple. Since the protagonist had picked up the first code so easily, they could move on and learn even more. Agric started to think he might need to be careful about what he wrote in Dane's recommendation letter to the academy. At the end of the day, MC lay in bed thinking about the lesson. He decided to properly learn both theory and practice. When he thought about his past life, he remembered being forced into a life where he didn't even have the chance to study magic. In those days when he never knew when he might die in battle, finding time to learn magic was a luxury he couldn't afford. He was too busy swinging a sword and trying to stay alive. To some extent, magic put more weight on theory than on simply casting spells. And in this life, he had the time, the resources, and the talent to want to learn much more. Dane could combine the theory he learned from Arabella with the talent he was born with, and now even simple guidance could lead to explosive growth. Since he was being taught by a former tower master, he couldn't help wondering what kind of magic he'd learn in the coming days. About half a month later, Dane went to his father with a request to make something called a magic reagent. They didn't have the materials, so he would need to leave the territory. His father was a little surprised by his son's progress. Agric backed him up, assuring him that the boy was ready for reagents, now that he had already mastered 4 rearrangement codes. Normally, even a genius would need a month to learn one. Count, the protagonist, also knew that magic reagents were hard to find. The protagonist had only learned about them by reading books in the family's magic library. Agric had already accepted that the boy was simply built differently. He was even glad MC cared about something as dull as magic reagents. In the end, the Count agreed, thinking it would be a great experience for his son. Since he was leaving anyway, Dane could also see his territory for himself. He smiled and thanked his father for trusting him to go out on his own. He set off on a short trip to the outer parts of the Sogress territory. With him were Agric and Herman. Even out there, the people of the county looked at the protagonist and spoke of him with deep respect. The protagonist returned their warm feelings with kindness and a smile. During the trip, Agric guessed that Count Dane must be a kind lord, judging by how happy his people were. The South really had a lot going for it. Great snacks, nice weather, and good people too. That kind of sight was extremely rare in the capital. That's why MC loved this territory so much. Their small group traveled through the outer region for a while, heading to the magic supply shop. He had never been there before, so he asked Herman to lead the way. The three of them sped up and soon reached the shop. The shopkeeper was shocked to see the famous young master, the protagonist, walk into her small store. She praised his silver hair and bright emerald eyes, and the protagonist thanked her. Lately, not many people from the local lands had come by to buy magic supplies. Luckily, many travelers interested in magic had kept her business alive. The shopkeeper also recognized Ugric, the former lord of the magic tower, and said how grateful she was to have him there. The old man was clearly pleased to finally be recognized. She invited them to look around as much as they wanted and asked them to call if they needed anything. Since it was MC's first time in a magic shop, Ugric told him to explore freely while he spoke with the merchant. With one quick glance, Dane could already spot all kinds of interesting items. There were potions, gems, amulets, and all sorts of magical goods, though something about the place gave him a strange sense of déjà vu. On top of that, he noticed that touching the products let him feel their magical reaction. He just chalked it up to his high affinity and kept looking around. Then a soft bell-like sound rang in his ears, almost calling for his attention. He felt an especially strong reaction from one side of the shop. When he moved closer, the owner told him that everything on that side was only decoration. Ugric called Dane over to look at some potion ingredients together. The old man had already picked a few raw materials, like moonroot, which could be used in at least 50 different potions. The owner assured them she personally processed her ingredients and kept them top quality. Still, he was very curious about the strange sound. As he walked deeper into the pile of decorations, he felt an odd power pulling at him. Then he turned and spotted a stone giving off pure mana. It had to be the source of the sound. Dane hurried toward it, almost like his body was moving on its own. Seeing his young master act strangely, Herman rushed over in concern. To him, the protagonist was only staring at an ordinary stone fixed to the wall as decoration. MC didn't know what was happening, but the stone was clearly calling to him. He pulled it from the wall and held it in his hands. Just as he suspected, pouring more magic into it made the reaction even stronger. It was possible the object was reacting only to his magic. Meanwhile, Ugric was still picking out raw ingredients all over the shop. Dane went to the owner and asked about the stone he had just removed from the wall. Like she'd said before, it was only decoration. But what kind of decoration gives off a stronger magic reaction than anything else in the store? Ugric asked if she had been tricked into buying it, and she admitted that a few years ago, a traveling merchant had given her a large package as payment. When she excitedly opened it, she found only that plain stone inside. She still held out hope and asked a mage to appraise it, but it was confirmed to be ordinary. Based on how Dane reacted to it, this clearly wasn't an ordinary stone. The shop owner urged the young master to pay attention to her real stock instead of wasting time on a rock. She tried showing him all kinds of rare magic items, but he was still fixated on the strange stone in his hand. It was the only thing he wanted. She even showed him a scroll card that could read names on its own and store information for records. In the end, the protagonist bought both the scroll and the useless stone. He was sure this wasn't something he could just leave behind. Even Ugric couldn't figure out what the boy was thinking. On the way back, the old bat asked if Dane was really into decorations, or if he truly believed the stone had something special about it. Once MC explained that the slab reacted to his magic, Ugric didn't dismiss it. He still couldn't see anything unusual, but now he was curious too. Since the streets were crowded, the small group hurried back to the castle. Ugric set up a priceless testing device to help Dane learn what the stone really was. He was sure he could judge it properly. A mage had already checked it and found nothing, but Ugric proudly said no evaluator was better than his machine. He had poured all his money into this top-level tool for appraisals, and believed it could analyze anything placed on it. Both of them were eager to learn what was hidden in that plain-looking stone slab. Ugric placed it on the platform and told Dane to pour magic into it to trigger a response. The moment he did that, the stone gave off a dense burst of magic power. It lit up inside the device, and its glow twisted into something complex. Ugric watched the flare closely, his eyes locked on the slab. Seeing his tool finally uncover the stone's secret, Ugric could hold his head high again. After being shown up by the boy so many times, mana streamed out of the slab and formed runes in the air. Dane understood right away what they were seeing. Since Ugric had been teaching him about this for weeks, there was magical code inside the stone, but the old bat said this was no normal code. It was amazing. Floating around them was a structure unlike anything they had seen before, maybe as complex as a 6 or even 7-chain code. So the magic stone had hidden code inside it, and the protagonist mana seemed to be the key. It only reacted to him. They had managed to pull the code out, but figuring out what it was and why it answered only to Dane's magic was a whole different problem. Even Ugric, skilled as he was, had never seen this kind of magic before. Still, his pride as a mage made him determined to crack it. If he could, they might learn what made MC's magic so different. While he and Ugric worked hard to decode the magic at the training grounds, Arabella was busy with research of her own in a private lab at the academy. It was packed with books and magical tools, all neatly arranged from her many studies. She had stored a sample of her little brother's mana in a magic stone and confirmed there really was something strange about Dane's power. His magic had a trait that matched no known type. She ran countless tests and read piles of papers, but still couldn't place which branch of magic this anomaly belonged to. She tried everything: magical reagents, portals, magical engineering, but nothing gave her an answer. Even so, she was sure the truth was hidden somewhere. Then she suddenly remembered hearing about a long-lost field of magic that had vanished from the magical world. Maybe Dane's power was tied to that forgotten art. Arabella started digging through stacks of books, trying to remember where she had put an old tome. It covered alchemy, divination, spiritualism, necromancy, and an early form of magical code. As she searched, another dusty book dropped from the shelf. She picked it up and realized it was an ancient magic text. That made her remember she had once studied the vanished magical kingdom of Arcana, a civilization said to have existed over 2,000 years ago, and inherited older magic from an even earlier age. They were believed to use forms of magic that no longer existed. Arabella laughed the thought off. Ancient magic had disappeared long ago, so Dane's power couldn't really be tied to something that old. Still, she had nothing to lose at this point, so she tried something unusual. She placed the crystal holding the protagonist's mana into her magical typewriter and used the ancient magic book as a reference. After a few moments of focus, Arabella opened her eyes in shock. The crystal was reacting. She quickly wrote down the mana's properties, her mind racing as she wondered whether Dane's magic was tied to alchemy, divination, or something else entirely. She could accept any answer as long as it wasn't necromancy. When she finished reviewing her results, it felt like she had been struck by lightning. All she could say was, "What kind of discovery is this?" Back at the training grounds, Dane and Agric were still trying to force more reactions out of the stone. After a while, Agric finally broke the seal on the slab. Inside, there was something else. The old man carefully reached in and pulled the object out. It was a simple accessory, a silver bracelet giving off dense magic power. To most people, it looked like an ordinary bracelet from a market stall. Agric first guessed the material might be rare, but it seemed normal. Since the stone only reacted to MC's mana, Agric suspected the bracelet would do the same. MC put it on his wrist. At first it hung loosely, like it was too big for him, but then it reacted. The bracelet lit up, resonating with the magic in his body. Just as expected, it responded only to him. Strange glowing characters started appearing from the bracelet. Agric leaned in for a closer look, while Dane eagerly asked if the old mage could read the symbols. To the protagonist's surprise, Agric's face broke into a huge grin. They were ancient runes, letters nobody in the current world could read. By ancient, Agric meant the language of the lost kingdom of Arcana. MC only knew a little about Arcana from what Arabella told him as a child. She said it was an age when magic ruled every part of life. Then suddenly and mysteriously, that golden era ended, leaving behind only a few relics and legends. And now this strange line of magical code sealed inside a stone had become another piece of that old puzzle. Agric always knew his magic was unusual, but he never imagined it would connect to the ancient kingdom of Arcana. That only made him want him as an apprentice even more. After all, the Forest of the Last Days, which had even defeated Agric, was said to be filled with traces of Arcana's disruptive magic. The protagonist's connection to that ancient power finally made sense. Sadly, all they had right now were a few unreadable lines of text. Agric told Dane to take all the time he needed to investigate the mystery, but warned him to keep it secret for now. Then their quiet study was interrupted by a terrible sound echoing across MC's territory, making both of them freeze. Something awful seemed to be coming. The familiar alarm caught them off guard, and the old man quickly assumed it was a monster attack warning. That was enough to get him excited. Now that his body was almost fully healed, he was eager to test himself again and repay the kindness his household had shown him. The old man eagerly told the protagonist not to just stand there and to grab a spear or anything useful, but the protagonist stayed still, barely showing any reaction. Then he quietly slipped a hand inside his coat and pulled out a pendant. Agric raised a brow, asking what he was holding and why the alarm sound was coming from it. MC then told the excited old man it had nothing to do with monsters. It actually meant his older sister was trying to contact him. The old man's excitement instantly deflated, and he grumbled that he should have said so sooner. Dane only laughed awkwardly, reminding him that it should already be obvious there was no reason for monsters to be in this area. With that cleared up, the protagonist answered his sister's call while the old man stood there looking disappointed. As soon as the connection opened, she asked why he took so long. MC apologized and asked why she had called. She started sharing something important about his magical code, but quickly stopped and asked if someone was beside him. Just hearing her mention magical code was enough for Dane to realize she had discovered the truth. His power was ancient magic. The old man overheard and let out a sharp cry, demanding to know how she figured that out. While they kept talking, he explained their side too. When he and Agric examined some stones, they also found out his magic belonged to an ancient magical realm. The giveaway was simple. The stone reacted only to his mana. Agric meanwhile ground his teeth in frustration. Finding that out just by analyzing the protagonist's magic was insane. He already knew she was a genius, but her talent was even greater than he thought. Arabella then asked if anyone else knew his secret. MC quickly said no. She let out a relieved sigh and told both MC and Agric to keep it hidden, because if the truth got out, he wouldn't be able to handle the consequences. She also apologized to Agric for jumping into the topic without introducing herself first. The old man only laughed, saying he already knew plenty about her through him. And as for keeping his magic secret, he promised not a single soul would hear about it. If that secret gets out, the protagonist wouldn't be the only one in trouble. The whole Sogress house would suffer for it. Arabella praises the old man for catching that right away, saying that's exactly what she'd expect from a wise mage. Cedric then asks if this call is being recorded, and she says it isn't. She explains the moment the call ends, it'll be erased at once. That eases him a little, and he adds that he plans to return to the magic tower to look into this himself. Arabella thanks him, but he brushes it off, saying he's only doing what any mage should do, so she doesn't owe him anything. Then he brings up the magic tower again. He heard she's been looking for one to join, so he asks if she's decided which one she wants. Arabella instantly catches what he's hinting at and tries to dodge the question, saying she isn't considering Nixon Magic Tower since it doesn't focus on the field she cares about. That annoys the old man all over again. He was already wondering where Dane got his brains from, and now it's obvious his sister is just as sharp. Still, he keeps that to himself and only laughs, saying she doesn't have to join their tower anyway. Watching this, MC gets a little nervous, especially after how blunt his sister was. Anyway, she ends the topic by saying they can talk about the details later. After a quick exchange of goodbyes, she cuts the connection. Sidrid remarks that their sister has grown into someone pretty amazing, and Dane agrees, adding that the artifact in front of them was made by her too. He says this compact crystal ball is especially popular with young mages. The old man smiles and admits it's impressive, though the frustration on his face is hard to miss as he says he doesn't need something like that. Once a mage reaches the 8th chain, he says wasting time chatting isn't something they do. He can tell why he's saying that. If the old man doesn't want a trendy item like this, it probably just means he has no friends. Later, the protagonist tells his parents everything about the ancient magic. His mother looks worried, but his father calmly says that if anyone targets the protagonist, they'll make them pay. His mother agrees right away when it comes to her son's safety. She won't hold back. Emo feels a little awkward seeing how fiercely protective they are, but he also knows there's nothing safer than being protected by both of them. Then Agric says that if he is right, their bloodline may carry ancient magic dormant within it. His wife agrees and wonders whether any of their ancestors had it too, so she plans to check her side of the family. It's a pretty interesting idea, and Dane can't help wondering what they might find if both sides of the family look into it. Even if it doesn't matter much to him, it still makes him curious. After that, his mother reminds him he's already gone beyond what this place can offer. If he stays longer, it could slow his growth, so he should start thinking about going to the capital. That mention of the capital catches him off guard, and his parents remind him he has to be at least 14 to enter the academy. Now that he's finally that age, there's no reason to wait. Arabella admits he wanted to keep Dane home for another year or two, but there isn't much left for him to learn here. His mother gently rests a hand on his and says he can leave whenever he wants. They make it clear the choice is his. The protagonist is surprised they've already accepted that he has to leave this place someday. His father says he's sure his son will make him proud and urges him to go use his talent to the fullest. Dane smiles and says he understands what they both mean, and he promises to get ready for the academy. The three of them smile as the choice is settled, and now MC is excited to move on to the next stage of his life. Later, he tells Sidrin he's decided to leave the manor. The old man asks if he really plans to go, and he says yes, though it's a little earlier than he first planned. The old man supports the choice, saying it would be a waste to keep his talent stuck here. He also warns the protagonist not to show everything he can do all at once. The academy values talent, but not everyone there will be happy to see it. Some people will get jealous. Dane already knows that, since Arabella warned him before and even told him about some ridiculous things she had to deal with herself. The old man adds that average people have a hard time surviving in the academy under those conditions, but he assures MC that House Terian is not one of those weak families. That makes him think of Layla and the promise he made to visit her as soon as he reached the capital. He knows that if he doesn't, she'll be really disappointed in him. He also remembers the crest Duke Terian gave him, so he decides to think carefully about what kind of weapon he wants before heading there. The old man then reminds him that only 3 months remain before the academy starts, so he should leave in about 2 months. Dane agrees and then asks what the old man plans to do. Sidrin says he's going back to the magic tower because there's something he needs to handle. He thanks the protagonist for helping with his boredom, and to return the favor, he'll pass along any clue he finds about this ancient magic. MC is honestly grateful. The old man says that with so little time left, lessons should come first. He wants to speed things up so they can finish before MC leaves, but warns him that the 3rd chain is much harder than the 2nd. He promises he'll study hard to reach that level. Then he says he prepared a gift for the old man. Sidrin perks up at once, clearly curious about what it could be. Dane pulls out a box and says his sister sent it yesterday through teleportation magic. He explains that it's a very popular item among young people right now. This version is a brand new compact crystal ball that hasn't even been released yet. Arabella designed it herself, and he managed to get one as a favor. The old man snatches it up right away, and looks thrilled to have it for himself. He praises how pretty it is, and even though he insists he doesn't need something like this, he still says he'll gladly accept the protagonist's gift. No matter how much he denies it, his face makes it obvious he's completely excited to own it now. Dane then spends his time teaching the old man how to use the crystal, like any teenager explaining something to their grandparent. Later that night, back in his room, he thinks about how much he still has to do in the 2 months he has left. He admits his main interest is summoning, so he decides his goal will be to take summoning classes, receive a summoning sign, and get the chance to take the qualification exam. Since Clary is an assistant teacher, he hopes he'll get to see her often while attending those lessons. Thinking about summoning reminds him he almost forgot to feed magic into his familiar, so he quickly picks up the egg and pours some of his magic into it. For 7 straight years, Dane has carefully infused that egg with magic every morning and night, and still nothing has happened. Even so, the magic isn't disappearing somewhere else. The familiar is absorbing it, so he's sure the egg will hatch someday. The next scene shifts to the academy, where students are talking about the entrance exams. There are 2 parts, a general test and a specialty test. The general one covers things like the Empire's culture, history, and similar topics, but Dane shouldn't have any trouble with that. Arabella explains all of this to her brother through the crystal, and assures him that doing well on this part matters, because it affects his admission score. After that comes the specialty exam. As the name suggests, he has to choose a field and take a test in it, and the content depends on the teacher. Arabella is sure that part will be easy for him too. MC remembers that she passed hers without much trouble, and she just grins, saying it was easy for her. Then she reveals that once he picks a field, he can't change it, so he needs to choose carefully from the start. She adds that she'd really love it if he chose magic. While Dane swings his sword on the training grounds, he gives an awkward smile, realizing she still hasn't given up on trying to pull him into the magic program. To get her off his back, he says he'll think about it, then asks if there really isn't any other way to change specialties after enrolling, like she said. Arabella explains that's usually how it works. The only real option is to graduate and come back, though he can still take classes in other fields. But once he reaches the 3rd year, students usually aren't allowed to take advanced classes outside their own track. In other words, he gets one real chance to choose. She also mentions that for someone as talented as him, there's a self-directed course system. Dane is immediately interested and asks how that differs from the normal courses. His sister casually says that unless he plans to fail, she wouldn't recommend it, because no one has ever passed that exam so far. That only makes him more interested, and the way he pauses for a moment tells his sister he's seriously thinking about trying something bold. Still, he quickly assures her he won't do anything reckless, and says he'll contact her again later. Once the call ends, Arabella wonders if she's pushing too hard about the magic program. Even so, she still believes it's the best choice. That's still the best path for him. Just then, a student comes over to tell Arabella that the professor is looking for her. Later, Sidran keeps his promise and prepares a recommendation letter for Dane. The protagonist is genuinely happy to see that Sidran really wrote it. The old man proudly says he didn't just throw together a basic letter. He took extra care to make it stand out and show the protagonist real talent and potential. For Sidran, this was a sincere effort, so he tells the protagonist he should feel a little honored. MC smiles right away and promises Sidran he'll live up to his expectations. Still, the old man grumbles that it would have been much better if he had agreed to become his disciple. Technically, they already have that kind of master-disciple bond, but Sidran doubts he will ever truly call him his master. And honestly, Dane's awkward smile makes it pretty clear he doesn't want to see him that way. Moving on, Sidran asks if the protagonist is done getting ready. The protagonist says there isn't much to pack since the academy dorms already have what students need. Cedric agrees the place is excellent, but adds that only a small group really gets the best of it. Even so, there's no way MC should lose to those arrogant nobles. He lets out an uneasy laugh, since from what he's heard, the academy is full of spoiled noble troublemakers. Cedric warns him to remember one thing: that place is full of kids ready to bare their fangs the moment they think he's looking down on them. The protagonist thinks it over and realizes it sounds just like the law of the battlefield, something he knows very well. He assures the old man he'll remember. Cedric then tells him to contact him anytime he needs something. Now that he has that compact crystal, he should make good use of it. Hearing that, MC figures Cedric must be leaving soon, and the old man quickly confirms it. Surprised, MC guessed right. He reminds him that staying here would be awkward, since his father offered him a spot as mage advisor. Still, that's something to think about later, when he has nothing else to do. Cedric is sure he understands, especially since there's plenty of work waiting at the magic tower. It doesn't take the protagonist long to realize he must mean research into ancient magic. The old man then thanks MC, and our boy thanks him back for all the time he spent on a kid like him. The two share a smile, both hoping to meet again soon, and Cedric can hardly wait to see how much Dane will grow in the future. With that, he starts to leave and tells him not to come out and see him off, since that would feel a little awkward. He wishes him a safe trip, but he can't help feeling a little sad inside. He's grown pretty close to the old man. The next day, the protagonist's father asks if he'll be leaving now that Cedric has safely departed. MC says all his preparations are done. His father then remarks to his wife that with their son leaving too, the castle will feel empty. She quickly tells him not to be so down about it. In fact, she's relieved MC is finally heading out. What worries her most is not wanting her son to run into trouble on the way to the academy. Her husband assures her that since Dane will use the teleport gate Arabella prepared, nothing should go wrong. The loving mother smiles and admits she's worrying for nothing after all. Still, she feels proud of the children she raised, especially compared to other houses, where the kids are too busy fighting each other over the succession. His father says that day will come for House Sogress too, and they'll have to choose. Even so, he believes any of the siblings would be fit to inherit. Right then, the protagonist walks into the room and his parents greet him warmly. His father asks if he's ready to leave, while his mother asks if he's bringing Nighthorn and the token she gave him. Dane answers with a bright smile, saying he has both. His mother reminds him to take that token to the place she mentioned and show it if he ever needs help getting out of trouble. MC says he'll remember, though he's curious about those people and asks if they're old co-workers or friends of hers. She replies that they really are some of her closest old companions. It's been a long time since she last saw them, but she's sure they'd be more than willing to help. As soon as Count Sogress hears this exchange, his face tightens like he's in real pain. He's worried that if Dane follows his mother's advice, he could cross paths with a full-blown assassin. So he quickly cuts in, telling his son to find the Duke instead, and stay with him until he enters the academy. Hearing that, his affectionate mother starts tearing up, sad that her son has grown so much, and is now leaving. Her husband gently tells her there's no need to cry, and says she should send him off with smiles and kind words. Meanwhile, the protagonist gathers his resolve. He'd always planned to leave, but part of him still felt reluctant. Now though, it's finally time to go. Herman escorts him to the teleport gate while his father watches from the window. At the same time, a suspicious figure moves under Count Sogress's orders. The Count tells his man, Dillad, to follow Dane carefully and make sure he reaches the teleport gate safely. Dillad accepts the order and moves out. Elsewhere in the castle, MC's devoted mother has also summoned her familiar Shadow. Just as expected, she gives the same order. Make sure he teleports away safely. Shadow accepts and leaves at once. When Dane arrives at the teleport site, Herman is stunned, seeing the huge machine for the first time. The protagonist also admits it really is impressive. The butler comments that Lady Arabella must be incredible, and MC agrees, saying he understands why it took her a whole year to build it. Excited, Herman asks if stepping onto the platform is enough to trigger the teleport. He tells him yes. He then reflects on how much work she must have poured into it, because teleport magic isn't like other kinds. It needs exact code placement, and magic has to be fed into it the whole time while the code is rearranged before the spell can work. The gate Arabella built is a flawless device where all the conditions for teleportation have already been met. Herman wishes him luck and tells him to stay safe. Dane thanks him back and starts to walk toward the gate. Once he steps in, he pours magic into it to activate it, just like his sister instructed. The portal opens at once, and blue arcane energy wraps around him as the teleport begins. The next moment, the scene shifts to a busy street with people going about their day. In the middle of it, our boy appears on horseback. A big grin spreads across his face when he realizes this is the entrance to the capital city, Artenia. As he moves through the crowd, an unfamiliar voice calls out, saying it has been waiting for him. The man in front of him looks like a knight and introduces himself as Luik Asmar, captain of the 1st Knight Corps of House Termion. The protagonist is a little overwhelmed that the captain himself came to greet him. He never expected that. The knight says he and his men will escort the protagonist from here on. Then he turns his head and orders his knights to clear the way, and the soldiers obey without hesitation. As they move on, MC says he's glad to be in Luik Asmar's care, and the knight says it's an honor to escort him. Dane starts feeling something strange in his chest. He never imagined he'd enter the heart of the Terian Empire, the place he hated most, and do it as someone seen as full of promise. As they continue through the city, he hears street vendors shouting to sell their goods, and is surprised by how much this place has. He didn't expect the capital to be so lively. The knight then says they've finally reached the lands of House Termion. That immediately lifts Dane's spirits, and when he looks ahead, he's completely amazed by the place. Still, he can't shake the feeling that something is off, like someone is watching him, and he wonders if he's just imagining it. As the protagonist nears the entrance, the household staff welcome him warmly, which catches him totally off guard. Their perfect manners and natural discipline stand in sharp contrast to what he's used to in the south. When Dane finally stands before Duke Termion, he quickly greets the head of the house and bows all the way to the floor in respect. Termion accepts the greeting warmly and invites him inside, eager to hear all about his tiring journey. Once inside, Termion comments on how much Dane has changed since he last saw him 7 years ago. He says even children a year or two older wouldn't match MC's presence and bearing, and adds that Count Sogress must be proud. Though this place may not compare to Count Sogress's castles, he still tells MC to enjoy his stay until the academy entrance exam. He also promises to assign a servant to handle anything he needs. He thanks him and quickly asks about Layla, wanting to know how she's doing and what she's been up to. Termion says she's mostly fine, then asks if the protagonist has had any recent conflict with her. MC asks what he means, and Termion explains that lately, whenever MC's name comes up, Layla always seems a little upset. MC quickly says he doesn't remember any disagreement with Layla. Termion thinks Layla may just be stressed about the academy exam, though he's sure she'll pass without much trouble. Dane wonders what made her act so oddly, and figures it might just be puberty. Then Terian tells him to get some rest for now and says they can talk again later, adding that he should be nice. The protagonist has no idea what that means, but Terian just says he'll understand soon enough. A servant leads MC to his room, and he looks around thinking he'll be staying there for a week until the entrance exam. Still, the room feels way too fancy for a guest room. He drops his bag, starts unpacking, and plans to find the training grounds after that. Right then, someone walks into the room without knocking. She says she'll take him to the training grounds. The moment Dane hears that voice, he knows exactly who's behind him. When he turns around, he sees Layla. She's grown a lot since the last time they met. Looking annoyed, she asks why he took so long to get here. Clearly upset that she had to wait all this time. He can't hide how happy he is to see her, and he quickly asks how she's been. Layla says she's been great, but before they catch up, he has to deal with her anger. She's still mad that he didn't send her any letters for a long time, even though he promised he would. She asks why he never wrote over the past few years, or at least told her when he was coming. Dane, clearly caught off guard, admits he totally forgot and apologizes. Of course, Layla isn't buying that weak excuse. He tries to remind her that at least he really showed up like he promised. He says he was so busy getting ready for the capital that everything else slipped his mind, then begs her to let it go just this once. She pouts, still obviously annoyed, and the protagonist can see it all over her face, so he asks how he can make it up to her, apologizes again, and promises to do whatever she wants. Layla raises an eyebrow and asks if he really means that. Dane gives an awkward smile and agrees, hoping it'll calm her down. Then he asks what she wants him to do to make up for it. After thinking for a second, Layla suggests a sparring match. MC is surprised. That was not what he expected. Still, he agrees. Layla lets out a smug little laugh, asking if he's sure he won't regret it. She says she's much stronger now, and not the crybaby who used to learn mana release from him. Her confidence catches Dane off guard. It makes him think she really has changed a lot in the last 7 years. Speaking of that, he remembers she once wrote that she won a competition. Layla looks surprised he remembered and explains it was the Danterway Cup hosted by the royal family. He recalls that it was a tournament for kids under 15. She confirms it and says the matches were tough, adding that if he had entered, the two of them would have made it to the finals together. He tells her they can finally make up for that now. Then Layla asks if he's really okay with training so close to the entrance exam, since getting hurt could cause trouble for him. Dane shrugs and says she doesn't need to worry, though deep down he wonders why getting hurt would even come up. With that settled, she decides they'll fight tomorrow, since it's already too late today. The next day, they meet outside, ready to spar. Layla asks if he brought a practice weapon, because she doesn't want to hear that he's still using a blunt weapon. Dane reminds her this is only a light match, so training weapons makes sense. He also points out that no matter how much she's trained, she can't prepare for every situation, and asks what she'd do if she got hurt. She confidently says not to worry, the best healer in the Empire is right here in the estate, but the protagonist brings up a fair point. What if something serious happens before the healer can do anything? Layla stumbles for an answer, and he tells her that if she wants to use a bladed weapon, she needs to be mentally ready for the risk. She wonders why he's making such a big deal out of a simple spar. In the end, she gives in and agrees to use practice weapons, then tells a servant to bring them. While the servant is gone, Dane looks at her and feels honestly glad to see how confident she's become. Just like the rumors say, it may not be long before she reaches the level of her two older brothers who are both active knights. There's even a real chance House Terian could soon have its first female leader. MC wonders if teaching her mana release was the turning point that helped her grow this much. It really seems that way. From Layla's side, she feels thankful to him. Because of his guidance, she learned the basics of magic control much faster than others her age, and she's already formed 2 mana cores. She waited a long time for this day, and part of her wonders if Dane would feel bad if she won. At last, the servant returns with the gear they asked for. Once he is armed with a training spear, he loosens up for a moment to get his muscles ready. Then he settles into his stance and asks if she's ready. Layla says she is, and raises her training sword. She remembers fighting a spearman in the Dunter Cup, and he wasn't that hard to beat. A spear works best at long range, so once the distance closes, it loses a lot of its edge. With that in mind, she charges at Dane without thinking to strike him. But before Layla can even touch him with her sword, the protagonist vanishes, leaving her stunned. Before she can even figure out where he went, his spear is already on her, marking the hit. The match ends before it really begins. She spins around and asks when he got there. Dane reminds her she's lucky they're using practice weapons. If those were real blades, she'd be in serious trouble. Layla refuses to accept that she lost because she's sure her sword reached him first. Just betrayed that she beat. MC immediately offers her another try, but warns that the same trick won't work twice, so she'd better move carefully. Layla steadies herself, telling herself she only lost because she was nervous after not seeing him for so long. This time, she swears she won't hold back at all. Then Layla notices her father standing on the balcony watching everything. Dane sees the Duke too and is surprised he came just to judge his daughter's ability with his own eyes. He understands that kind of protective father. After Layla won the Danter Cup, the Duke was probably worried about how hard she'd been pushing herself. He believes this match will ease those worries once the Duke sees her real potential. Layla feels even more driven with her father watching, and wants to prove herself by going all out in this final round. Dane nods and tells her to show him everything she's got. Once they start again, their exchange becomes incredibly fast. This time, Layla is truly going all out. Even so, Dane tells her she still has farther to go, pushing her to try harder. The Duke can't help smiling, proud of his daughter. So far, they look fairly even, and he wants to see how it ends. But all at once, something changes. A strange, dangerous feeling fills the air, and the Duke notices the protagonist's easy smile is gone, replaced by the face of a real fighter ready for battle. That sight feels oddly familiar to him. As their duel goes on, Layla throws everything she has at Dane, but it's obvious she can't match him. Her next sloppy move leaves her wide open, and MC quickly sweeps her off balance, making sure she doesn't fall too hard. Duke Terian doesn't look pleased watching his daughter keep losing. He asks his knight Agric if this will finally knock down Layla's pride a bit. Agric says the Duke already knows what's going on, so his opinion probably isn't needed. Terian agrees. He says he noticed the signs before the Danter Cup, but after winning it, Layla changed completely. While the fight keeps going, the Duke mentions that he thought about having a serious talk with her, but decided it would be better if she realized it on her own. Agric agrees with that. Then Terian asks his knight once again how many manticores Dane might have absorbed. Given his talent, Agric guesses at least 3. Terian quickly disagrees, saying it's probably 2, with only a tiny chance it's 3. Agric asks why he thinks that. Terian tells him to look closer. What's crushing Layla isn't Dane's spear skill or even his greater speed. It's his tactical movement, something Layla has never faced before. The focus shifts back to Layla, who's completely thrown off by how the protagonist answers every move she makes. MC explains that her slow actions make it easy for him to read what she'll do. Every one of her attacks is too easy to predict, giving him the advantage, the upper hand. Watching the match, Terian asks Asmar if he can see the spirit of a seasoned swordsman in Dane. Asmar agrees right away, but says it makes no sense. How could someone this young have that much experience? Terian admits he's wondering the same thing. He then thinks back to Layla's biggest growth spurt, which happened 7 years ago. It was after they returned from an inspection in the south. Meeting him back then changed her a lot, and Terian is sure this time will too. Asmar agrees and says the boy surprises him too. Layla may have won the Danter Cup, but against the protagonist, she's clearly outmatched. It really looks like Count the protagonist trained him hard. But Duke Terian doesn't buy that. In his view, MC isn't the kind of person who trains someone harshly. More than that, he doesn't look like someone who would need that kind of training at all. Asmar isn't sure what the Duke is getting at, so Terian spells it out. This boy isn't ordinary. He was born with overwhelming talent, a real genius. He even thinks Dane probably skipped the Danter Cup for one simple reason. He just didn't care. Asmar nods on the outside, but deep down he thinks that sounds absurd. Every boy and girl in the Empire dreams of the Danter Cup, winning it, so why wouldn't he want it? Terian goes on, reminding him that no one his age has skills anywhere close to his. Right as he says that, his daughter drops to her knees from exhaustion. Looking at her, Terian thinks this may be exactly what she needs to knock down some of her pride. He hopes Layla finally sees her limits in this sparring session. If she can drop the arrogance and focus on improving with the sword, she could leave all her brothers behind. From Layla's side, this is one humiliation after another. She's finally starting to understand that Dane isn't just tough, he's on a totally different level. She knew they were different, but not by this much. Seeing how worn out she is, the protagonist decides to call it for today. So he was doing exactly what Duke Terian wanted, reminding Layla that she isn't the best. As they walk, she's clearly upset and demands to know how he got so good. Dane casually says he just practiced hard. That answer only makes her more upset. To Layla, it sounds like he's brushing off all the effort she's put into her own training, like he's saying she just didn't work as hard as he did. Still merciless. MC tells her she simply needs to train harder. With that, he starts to leave. But Layla isn't the type to give up. She says next time she won't lose. Dane, already expecting their next match, barely responds, leaving her to think about what he means to her. To Layla, he is the only person her age she truly respects. At the same time, he's the one she wants most to beat. She wants to prove she isn't just some child waiting to be taught. But no matter how hard she tries, he always feels out of reach. Even so, she tells herself to wait and see. Next time, she'll win. A few days later, we learn the Imperial Academy entrance exam is more than just a test. It's basically a huge event. Talented people from all over the Empire come to the capital with their families to take part. That means thousands arrive in the city at once. This year, around 6,000 applicants signed up. There were no requirements besides paying the exam fee, which made it open to everyone. Even so, the competition was brutal. Almost 2/3 failed the first test. Now that the first round is over, 2,000 candidates remain, getting ready for the next challenge, the specialization exam. Inside the academy, the important staff gather to talk about the flood of applicants. Since over 2,000 passed the first test, things are about to get busy. One asks how many will make it this time, and a woman answers, confidently, no more than 200. Everyone starts guessing what kind of students will pass. The man leading the talk is Professor De Novo, head of the magic department. The woman speaking is Ingrid, head of spear fencing. De Novo asks when the results will be posted, saying he wants to know who ranked first. Someone casually says the top scorer in spear fighting will probably be the girl from House Termian. She won the Danter Cup and no one doubts Duke Termian raised his children well. The discussion continues with Delphine, the sharp-eyed head of summoning. Next to her sits Esternad, head of the swordsmanship department. While everyone keeps guessing who the top student will be, Dane Foss sits there quietly. Then he cuts in, calling out all their empty guesses. He pulls out a letter and everyone's attention shifts to it. When they ask what it is, Dane Foss explains that it's a recommendation letter from Sidron, marked with the mana seal of the Nixon Magic Tower. That leaves the room stunned. After all these years, Sidron has finally recommended someone he thinks is worthy. Even then, some still insist there's no way this person could beat the Danner Cup winner. But Danevi isn't done. He reminds them that Sidron, who never takes disciples, personally sent this recommendation. And that's not all. The child is only 14 years old and already a three-circle mage. Now everyone wants to know who this prodigy is. Danevia lets the suspense build, then finally says the name, Dane of House, the protagonist. The room goes completely silent. What makes it even more shocking is that there are already 2 geniuses from House Dane enrolled at the academy, and now a third is coming. Everyone knows that will definitely draw attention. Esternad points out that House MC is famous for spear skill, so getting a recommendation from a mage makes no sense. It looks like MC may become famous for magic instead. Lady Ingrid thinks the same. She assumed he would apply for spear fencing, so this is a pretty big twist. Denevo, on the other hand, is thrilled. With his sister Arabella already in the magic department, he would make it even stronger. After all, the Imperial Academy is best known for its magic. Suddenly, a woman rushes into the meeting to announce that the test results are in. The results show 1,367 students admitted to swordsmanship, 227 to magic, and only 152 to summoning. The swordsmanship department's numbers are huge, especially compared to the others, and everyone is impressed. Esternad looks proud, happy to see so many joining his department. He's sure our boy must be one of them. The professors quickly scan the results, eager to see where Dane was placed. But to everyone's shock, his name isn't in any of the departments. An old man asks if there are any applicants not listed. The messenger quickly says there is one entry under the autonomous major. The moment she says that, the whole room freezes. Then she drops another bomb. Dane got the highest score on the first test out of all 6,000 applicants. Once again, everyone is left stunned, and one of them blurts out in disbelief. Later, we catch up with the protagonist. It's already been a month since he arrived at the academy. Time flew, and that spar with Layla feels like yesterday. But now they've already finished the first test, and are waiting for the results. Luckily, it wasn't too hard. Then Layla runs up to him, eager to talk about the one thing on her mind, the rankings. She can't wait to find out where he placed. We already know he got first, which isn't surprising to us. For Layla, though, it's another painful loss. As Dane's rival, she can't hide how annoyed she is at being beaten again. MC, on the other hand, is clearly pleased to see that frustrated look again. He still wants to knock down this bold girl who acts like being number 1 belongs to her. Still irritated, Layla asks how he managed to study so well. He says he focused on old exam questions his sister sent him. Even then, he says it was tough, especially the military science part. Still, Dane had one clear advantage. Military science wasn't new to him. He had lived through battle in his past life. Layla, though, can't understand why 14-year-olds are being tested on war strategy and military politics. The protagonist only makes it worse when he casually says he thought it was fun. That annoys her even more, and she asks if he hit his head. As far as she's concerned, military science, art, music, and even the history of the Drenic Empire are things no normal 14-year-old should know much about. MC fires back in his usual blunt way, saying this is his field. He learned plenty while living on the battlefield. Then Layla asks what he picked for the second test. To her surprise, he says he chose number 3. That completely catches her off guard, because it means he signed up for the autonomous major. With every new thing she learns about him, she gets more worked up. She demands to know what other talents he's hiding besides spear skill and summoning magic. He just smiles and dodges the question, promising he'll tell her soon. Frustrated, she tells him to say it now and asks why he picked the autonomous track. No matter how she looks at it, she can't understand his choice. The protagonist calmly says it's because he wants to study all of them. Layla quickly reminds him that the autonomous course has a terrible pass rate. Dane stays calm and says he heard students in that course can take any class they want, even in the moosh, until graduation. They also don't have to lock into one major, and they can even do research with professors from any department. Layla narrows her eyes and asks if he really thinks people fail just because they don't know those perks. She even wonders if he picked it just to avoid being in the same department as her. He denies it, which only makes her push harder. She demands to know how he plans to pass and what other skills he's hiding besides spear work and summoning. Seeing how stubborn and worked up she is, MC briefly thinks about telling her more. Honestly, he just finds her annoying and wishes she would talk less. The scene shifts to the academy, where the teachers are talking about Dane. To pass the autonomous major exam, a student has to clear tests from 3 departments, so all the professors had to gather. They're shocked that he really plans to take it: spear throwing, magic, and summoning. Those fields clash so much that passing all 3 is almost impossible. Professor Delfiniso says some students have passed 2 tests before, but most fail every one. Donavo agrees, saying it's smarter to focus on one path, spears for a spear user or magic for a mage. Applying to just one major is the safest and smartest move. The autonomous major has existed for 200 years, and almost nobody has passed all its tests. Back when it was first made, the standards weren't this harsh. Centuries ago, during the Age of Conquest, the Academy needed every talented person it could get. If someone had potential in any field, they were trained and used, but that's not how things work now. The rules kept getting stricter, and students would rather master one skill than be average at many. One professor even asks why this major still exists when no one applies or passes. Donavo reminds them it's a symbol, a mark of honor, meant only for the Empire's finest talents. Delfiniso says it barely matters anymore and has faded to the point that it exists almost only in name. Donavo adds that he checked the records and found that in the last 1,000 years, only 2 people passed. One quit, and the other was the previous emperor. Hearing that, Professor Ingrid says that unless someone is a true genius, passing the autonomous major is impossible. Delfiniso then points out that the protagonist is the youngest son of the war hero Arcanso Sogress, so he isn't from an ordinary family. She admits she's curious to see what he can do. The teachers also consider that MC might just be an arrogant kid. If they go easy on him, there's a chance he might somehow pass. But as professors, they can't afford to do a sloppy job. Either way, Donavo is interested. If Dane is bold enough to challenge one of the Academy's symbols, he wants to see it himself. At last, the second exam begins. Standing before the teachers, he gives his name and says he applied for the Imperial Academy's Autonomous Major program. Donavo asks if he understands how serious that choice is. The protagonist clearly did his homework. He answers with confidence that he knows he must pass the exams for the 3 majors he picked. Ingrid reminds him it's still not too late to back out. She respects Count Mimsy Sogress, the Empire's greatest spearman, and doesn't want his son to fail and go home in shame. Dane thanks her for the concern, but makes it clear he came here ready to do his best. The teachers expected that. If he were the type to quit after a few warnings, he never would have applied in the first place. With that settled, Donavo explains that the exam will have 3 separate tests tied to the majors the protagonist chose. If he fails even one, he automatically fails the whole thing. Now that the rules are clear, Donavo signals the head of the summoning department, Professor Delfiniso, to begin the test. She steps in front of Dane, and he remembers her reputation. From what he's heard, she reached the top among summoners in the Alteon Empire and holds the record for calling 3 creatures above 2nd rank at the same time. She finally speaks, saying, the summoning test is simple. MC just has to impress her, however he can with his summoning skills. That excites him. He was hoping for an open test without strict rules, but instead of showing off some flashy trick, he asks if she can summon something. That catches her off guard. She immediately asks what the hell he means. Even the other teachers are confused. No applicant would normally ask a professor to perform a summon. It also makes Donavo wonder what he is planning. Since he has no mark, he expected him to talk about summoning theory, but now he thinks he may want to see a real summon up close. Delfiniso doesn't like this brat telling her what to do, but she agrees to grant the request. Still, she warns him that this isn't something he sees every day, so he better watch carefully. Then she begins the spell, and as the huge magic circle forms, the pressure from it pushes everything around aside. Even the teachers are impressed when the beast finally appears. The mad summon, Huter Arc. One terrifying roar from the monster is enough to make everyone rethink their life choices. According to Dane, this creature is the fiercest among 3rd-rank summons, and is known for attacking anyone it sees except its summoner. He honestly didn't expect to witness something like this in an entrance exam, but now things just got a lot more interesting. Now that she did what he asked, Delfiniso tells the protagonist to show her what he had in mind. The people watching are stunned too, because even among 4th-rank creatures, the Huter Arc is one of the most savage. Even several double-class knights attacking at once would struggle to bring it down. Even Ingrid can't understand why Delfiniso summoned something this extreme. Meanwhile, Dane simply keeps walking toward the beast, which makes Delfiniso panic. She quickly tells him to get back because the monster will obviously attack if he gets too close. MC ignores her. After stepping dangerously near it, he calmly says he's trying to prove his skill as a summoner. Delfiniso gets that, but says she never told him to throw himself into danger, just to prove it. Dane only raises a hand and tells her not to worry about the command. With a firm gesture and a few words to the beast, that massive monster that looked so terrifying suddenly bows and starts acting like a tame pet under his control. Everyone is left speechless as Dane keeps petting that terrifying creature like it's just a stray cat. Even the beast's owner, Delfiniso, reacts the same way. After all, there's no way fierce Huter Arc should be tamed that easily. Then she suddenly notices the mana thread linked to Huter Arc. Even though the color is faint and it isn't full submission, it completely erased the beast's hostility. They're seeing it happen right in front of them, but still can't fully believe it. Delfiniso wonders if Dane analyzed the mana thread in an instant as he approached Huter Arc, then made a similar one to connect himself to it. Since the protagonist has no mark, this would be the best method for him as a summoner. She realizes this boy has incredible talent. It even goes beyond the praise she once got from her own teachers. With talent like this, she can only imagine how far he'll go. At last, she steps forward and tells MC that's more than enough to judge his ability. She praises his courage, calm judgment, and strong basics before officially passing him. The other two teachers are deeply impressed. This is not something they see often. Later that night, when Dane returns to Duke Termian's palace, he tells Layla what happened. She's stunned to hear the test ended in just 20 minutes. As much as she hates to admit it, she grudgingly accepts that he's now the top student. He quickly reminds her that she ranked first in the swordsmanship department, so she's an amazing student too. Of course, Layla refuses to accept that, and can only sulk in frustration. The protagonist tries to cheer her up by reminding her that her father even threw a party to celebrate her passing. But Layla can't get past how huge the gap between her and the protagonist feels. To her, Dane doesn't seem like a rival anymore. He feels like an unstoppable force of nature. In the end, she just walks away without a word. Later, MC meets Duke Termian, who tells him to leave her alone if she wants space. He worries that sulking like this may not be good for her. But the Duke assures him Layla will get over it with time. Then he changes the subject, and asks if he told his father about passing the test. He's sure. Count him Sogress would be proud to hear it. The protagonist says yes, and that everyone back home was really happy. The Duke smiles and reminds Dane that getting into the autonomous department is no small thing. Even people at the school were shocked by it. Now that the exams are over, he tells him to rest and get ready for enrollment. MC thanks the Duke for the care and guidance. Termian then brings up another matter, asking if MC has thought about what he wants to forge. MC says he's considering making a sword, though he hasn't fully decided yet. Then, when the Duke asks why, he says he's still growing. He also doesn't know what kind of sword he wants yet, so he'd rather think it through before making a request he can't take back. Termian finds that pretty amusing. Then the butler arrives and tells the Duke that the Duchess wants to see him, so he steps away, leaving Dane to think about how the Duchess's illness has stayed the same for years. Just then, Layla shows up and says her mother's condition thankfully hasn't gotten worse, but it hasn't improved either. It's been like that for years. The protagonist feels bad for her, especially since he's never seen anyone in a family stay this sick for so long. Still, he doesn't dare pretend he knows exactly how Layla feels about it. 2 days later, we're back at the academy. The host welcomes the new students of the Imperial Academy and introduces himself as the headmaster, Archibald Homet. He praises them for reaching such a respected place after fierce competition, saying the Empire's future looks bright with talents like these. This year, he says, there are many outstanding freshmen, but among them is one truly special student, someone who passed the autonomous department exam. Including this new student, only 2 people have done that in the last 100 years, and Dane passed with unanimous approval from the Deans of Magic, Spear, and Summoning. The crowd is stunned. Passing the autonomous test sounds almost impossible, and then the headmaster calls forward the top student, MC Sogress. He walks up to the stage without a hint of fear, while the crowd erupts. They can't believe someone this young cleared the autonomous exam. All around, people are talking about Dane and the Sogress family, including the protagonist Sogress himself and the rest of the family. Nearby, Duke Termian warmly praises the protagonist Sogress for raising such an amazing child. He can't help feeling disappointed in himself, thinking he's achieved nothing with his own 2 children. His daughter is entering the academy, but neither son is here. One is away on a mission, and the other ran off. Meanwhile, Dane Sogress seems to have everything lined up with his daughters, and Termian can't help feeling a little jealous. Looking at his daughter, he grows quiet and sad, regretting that her mother can't be here for this special day. As MC stands in the spotlight with everyone watching him, Delphus quickly asks his sister if he was always good with summoning from a young age. She answers right away, like it's obvious. Of course he was. That's what Delphiniso expected, and now he's even more sure the protagonist was born with natural sympathy. To him, the protagonist is a rare case, far better than most summoners even without any visible summoner's mark. Then MC's sister wonders out loud if his high sympathy could let him summon beings from beyond the horizon. That refers to another world, the place summoners originally came from, and the link to it was lost over 100 years ago. After thinking it over, Delphiniso says it might be possible. If summons can choose their summoners, then he may really be able to do it. Meanwhile, the headmaster comes over and finally meets the protagonist face to face. He hands him a paper and says he has high hopes that this remarkable student will show his full talent at the academy. Dane takes it proudly and thanks him with a smile. After that, the students gather into lines for the oath ceremony, led by the first-year representative. Later, MC gets lost in his thoughts, enjoying the shine of his first big achievement. He finally made it into the academy, and it took a lot to get here. Now he refuses to waste this second chance at life. This is only the beginning, and he plans to go much further. The next scene moves to the academy's main hall. A few representatives wrap up their opening speeches, and the students get a short break before the next event. They're told to grab some snacks and rest for a bit. During the break, Layla starts lecturing Dane like a worried wife. She warns that after his success, lots of people will be watching him, some with good intentions, some with bad ones. She tells him to be careful with any offers and think before acting. He brushes it off, saying he can handle himself, but Layla keeps going and brings up clubs. He makes it clear he's not interested in any of them. By now, older students are already hunting for talented freshmen to recruit into their clubs and groups. Thinking about it, Dane remembers his older sister saying the academy had a lot of fun clubs. Then suddenly, an excited upperclassman shouts the protagonist's name, trying to recruit him. A crowd forms almost instantly, and everyone starts yelling over each other to get MC into their clubs. In just minutes, the whole thing turns chaotic, but Layla quickly grabs his hand and runs, dragging him along as they try to escape the madness. Sadly, their way out gets blocked by more desperate students trying to recruit Dane for their own clubs. The whole place falls into chaos, with students shouting non-stop about how great their clubs are while Layla keeps running like their lives depend on it, pulling the protagonist behind her. Even moving that fast isn't enough. The crowd keeps chasing them. MC, while running, can't help thinking this feels oddly familiar. He's used to being chased by enemy soldiers, but getting chased for being the top student is definitely a new experience. Then the story shifts to another part of the academy, where we meet Keltis Redfield. He's walking along calmly, minding his own business. Nearby, some older students whisper as they watch him. He clearly has a reputation, and we're about to learn what kind. It turns out Keltis returned from serving as commander of the Imperial Knights and immediately took the role of professor. Around the academy, he's respected as one of the best and most impressive teachers. The funny part is that Keltis has no interest in being some perfect professor, and his easy life is about to end. The reason is simple. For the first time in decades, the autonomous department has a new student. Until now, Keltis had it easy. He could casually write papers and still do fine. But now he'll actually have to prepare real lessons. From Keltis's point of view, he's quietly thinking freshman orientation should already be over. He clearly isn't happy that someone joined the autonomous department, especially while he's the acting head of it. Then he notices Dane standing outside his office. He calls out to him, surprised that he came so early. As always, he greets his teacher respectfully. Once they settle into the office, we hear Keltis's thoughts and he's obviously annoyed. He worked hard to reach this position just so he could enjoy some peace. Teaching students was never the goal. If he wanted to train people, he would have stayed with the Knights. Still, since there's no turning back, he asks the protagonist why he chose the autonomous department, and the protagonist says he doesn't want to be locked into one field yet. Keltis asks if he plans to choose one later. MC says yes, eventually he will. But for now, he doesn't want to waste the rare chance to study in the autonomous department. That answer makes Keltis even more bothered because it sounds like he really will be stuck teaching Dane. Then he remembers he skipped the swordsmanship test. To Keltis, that probably means the boy isn't confident with a blade. Seeing an opening, he asks if the protagonist knows anything about swordsmanship. The question catches the protagonist off guard, so Keltis quickly says he's not trying to insult him. But as a student of the autonomous department and with Keltis as his teacher, he thinks MC should know at least something about the sword. It's a strange request, and he can tell his teacher isn't thrilled to have him here, so he answers plainly. He's not interested in swordsmanship. That's exactly what Keltis wanted to hear. He immediately says he wants to test the protagonist's skills. You see, Keltis has the right to evaluate him, and if Dane's sword skills are as bad as he thinks, this lazy professor can use that as a reason to push him out of the department. So Keltis heads to the training grounds to test MC's talent in swordsmanship. Once they arrive, he points to the swords on the wall and tells Dane to pick whichever one he wants. He looks through the collection, and while he checks all those blades, he wonders why a place meant for scholars has a room like this at all. There haven't even been autonomous students in decades, so why keep so many weapons here? After a moment, the protagonist shrugs and picks a sword at random. Keltis asks if he's sure, and MC says yes without any hesitation. With the weapon chosen, Keltis explains the rules. If he can touch him even once, he passes. To make it easier, Keltis limits himself to no more than 2 steps during the fight. Dane accepts the terms right away, and the two take their positions. Keltis feels relieved but also uneasy. He's glad the protagonist agreed so quickly, yet that confidence is unsettling. Almost like MC thinks he can actually win. The moment the match begins, Dane rushes straight at Keltis. He swings his blade, trying to tag his teacher, but Keltis slips aside with ease. Even so, the teacher notices something right away. He is fast, faster than he expected. For a second, Keltis wonders if this kid really does belong in the autonomous department, but there's no time to dwell on it. The protagonist keeps pressing, his attacks relentless, and more accurate with each swing. At one point, Keltis comes within inches of getting hit, and that sends a chill down his spine. When Dane swings again, Keltis has no choice but to draw his own sword and block. If he had reacted even a little slower, the match would have ended right there and not in his favor. What shocks him even more is MC's swordsmanship. It's rough, almost wild, but clearly effective. Keltis is now sure this boy really can handle a blade. This isn't beginner's luck. MC is unpredictable, and that makes him dangerous. After the quick exchange, Dane steps back, breathing hard. Keltis watches him closely, and the way the boy stands throws him off. It reminds him of a swordsman he once saw on the battlefield. What unsettles Keltis most is that his stance isn't polished like a knight's or a noble's swordsman's. It's raw and unusual, shaped by real experience instead of formal lessons. Still, there's no time to think. The protagonist rushes in again, and their blades crash together once more. The speed of their exchange is shocking. Their movements blur, steel clashing in a wild rhythm. Cultist can't believe what he's seeing. None of this makes sense. He never imagined this would happen. He's a hexaclass swordsman, one of the elite, and yet he has to pour a serious amount of mana into this just to keep up with a 14-year-old boy. It's frustrating and thrilling at the same time, a sign of Dane's huge potential and a challenge Cultist never expected from a simple test. He even starts to slip with his footing, despite trying to stay within the two-step limit he promised. Every strike from MC feels heavier, and the way the boy fights pulls at something in his memory. It feels strangely familiar. Cultist's mind drifts back to the battlefield, where he once faced a lone knight with that same wild and unbreakable energy. He remembers being stunned by a warrior that fearless, someone who fought with reckless abandon, carrying no crest or banner. That madman tore across the battlefield, a force of chaos. Everyone struggled to stop. As the memory fades, Cultist snaps back to the present, just in time to feel the cold touch of Dane's blade against him. He was tagged. He gives a small smile at the win, but he doesn't laugh, especially since that would insult his teacher. Instead, he innocently says, "I think my sword hit you." As much as Cultist hates to admit it, a promise is a promise. He has to keep his word, so Cultist reluctantly lets Dane pass. The protagonist finally relaxes too. Keeping up with Cultist wasn't easy. If the teacher hadn't limited himself, the protagonist knows he wouldn't have stood a chance. Cultist feels just as overwhelmed. He can't deny the absurd talent hidden in this boy. Even with a handicap, MC should never have been able to push a hexaclass professor like him this far. Now he understands why he wasn't worried about the swordsmanship test. With talent like this, it's no surprise. Turning to the protagonist, he asks why he didn't join the swordsmanship department instead. The protagonist simply says he thought his family would be upset if he did, and that leaves Cultist confused, since that answer doesn't make much sense. But then he thinks about it. MC's father is a spear genius, and his sisters are gifted in magic and summoning. Then it clicks. Why MC applied to all three departments. He was trying to meet his family's expectations. Cultist finally understands the truth, the hard way. It was never that he lacked confidence in swordsmanship. He just didn't want to train in it. With the test over, Dane gets permission to leave. He bows politely and thanks Cultist before heading out in silence. As the teacher watches him go, a harsh truth sinks in. His plan to push this boy away and keep his easy life has failed. There's no simple escape now. As the door closes, Cultist shuts his eyes. His thoughts drift to the past, to a talk he once had with a colleague. He had asked about the night up ahead, and the answer was Egric. Later, Dane meets his second sister, who's pretty shocked to hear he passed the test. As far as she knows, Professor Cultist isn't the kind of man who lets anyone pass that easily. That professor barely even shows up to faculty meetings, and the only time he did was because the director called him personally. He absolutely hates being bothered. Basically, he does whatever he wants, and that's exactly why she was so worried about her brother. She's relieved nothing happened to him. Her reaction makes Dane think. Normally, his second sister would have celebrated his win, but instead, she just looks glad he's safe. That's one of the reasons he likes her so much. She truly cares about his well-being. Then his oldest sister comes running over. As the three siblings gather, whispers spread through the students. Everyone is amazed to see all the children of House Sogress in one place. People already thought the house was impressive because of Arabella and Claire, and now the youngest is proving to be just as remarkable. Later, Dane meets a senior named Max Hauer, who introduces himself. He says he handles the dorm's general operations. The dorms are split into 3 wings, with students assigned by grades. The top one is Dantare Hall, named after the first emperor. Since the protagonist is the top student and passed the main autonomous exam, Max tells him he'll stay there. He goes on about the place, restaurants, training rooms, libraries, lounges, even magic projection rooms. He also mentions some secret facilities. MC has no idea what that means, but he doesn't push and just listens. Max adds that while he probably won't need to worry, students can be removed from Dantare Hall if their grades drop. He also points out that Arabella and Claire stayed there until graduation, which only adds more weight to his name. Once everything is explained, Max hands the protagonist the key to his room and mentions there's a spare. If MC ever loses it, he can come back for a replacement. The senior also warns him about the strange students around here. They're not bad, he says, but sometimes you'll wonder what's wrong with them. Max tells him to see for himself, and if he has questions, he can reach him through the crystal internet ball. With that, Dane heads to his room. As he walks, he can't help noticing how luxurious the place is, but something feels off too. He doesn't sense a single person around. It's like everyone vanished. Feeling uneasy, he expands his senses. Almost at once, he picks up a faint smell of oil. Then he hears the barely audible sound of gears turning. That's enough for him to realize it's a trap, and he's already in it. But instead of panicking, he just gives a sarcastic smile at how sloppy this setup is. The people behind it are watching through a window. They have no idea why Dane stopped moving, so they start wondering if he figured out he walked into a trap. But the guy with glasses, Arnold, says there's no way. According to him, the Collards Dawes have been hunters for hundreds of years, so they know all about setting traps. He's actually the eldest son of the Collard barony, Arnold Collard, a third year in the shooting department. One of the students worries this prank might go too far, but Arnold assures the timid guy that he removed anything dangerous. It's his first time pulling a prank like this, so he's excited, though some of the others still aren't sure messing with someone from House Sogress is smart. Arnold just reminds them that everyone here went through nasty pranks, so he's been waiting for this, and he's sure Dane will end up totally shaken. One of the students, Priscilla Nariel, a fourth year from the theology department and House Nariel, raises a concern. Since he's the top student and in the autonomous department, she worries this prank won't go like the others. On top of that, both his sisters are geniuses, so if he's autonomous, he might be an even bigger one. Some of them even doubt the traps will work, but Arnold is sure he couldn't have noticed them. He made sure to paint the traps to hide them, and even oiled them so they wouldn't make any mechanical noise. Finally, Dane starts moving again, and that fills those idiots with excitement. Since he knows exactly where the traps are, he deliberately triggers the first one. A water balloon drops, but the protagonist, already expecting it, bursts it with a mana bullet. Then comes the next trap, one with a truly awful smell. Arnold is losing his mind, unable to believe Dane found every trap. He insists it's all just coincidence. Priscilla Nariel isn't so sure it is, but Arnold tells her he put the easy traps first as a warm-up and saved the big one for the end. He's certain Dane will fall for that one. While his other two friends decide to trust Arnold's traps, Priscilla stays doubtful. And just like expected, MC gets through them like they're nothing, ready for whatever comes next. After spotting where each trap was placed in the hall, Dane smiled and moved in. When he triggered the first one, several boxing gloves shot at him from different angles. Thanks to his footwork, that trap was basically nothing. Next came a Looney Tunes-style drop trap, which he dodged while feathers burst everywhere. Right after that, bronze poles shot up from the floor to skewer and embarrass him. But those were useless too. Watching trap after trap fail, the upperclassmen were stunned. Still, that was to be expected from the young master of House Dane Sogress. A few years ago, even Dane's older sisters got caught by tricks like these during their first-year initiation. Arnold Collard was close to giving up. They had worked hard to build and hide those traps, yet the protagonist got through them like it was nothing. It almost looked like he knew exactly where each one would trigger, but Arnold's pride as a hunter wouldn't let him quit. He was sure the final trap would finally scare the freshmen. Curious, Priscilla asked what the last trap was. With a grin, Arnold refused to spoil it and told everyone to keep watching if they wanted to see his big finish. In the hallway, Danny stopped when something that looked like a giant mythical beast appeared before him, a dragon, or something close to it. The final set of traps used summons, a dragon and a terrifying death-like figure shaped like a skeletal deer. They towered over Danny and charged at him like they meant to kill. Even so, Dan Sogress stayed calm and studied them. He was only surprised that someone would use such strong summons in a prank, until he noticed something was off. Sure, the beast's heads and bodies looked solid enough, but the same couldn't be said for the lower parts. If you look closely, the fake summons start glitching and bending where the hallway corners meet. Smiling, Danny figured it out. They were just illusions. Loud, scary, and made to intimidate, but still fake. There was no way some random prankster could control creatures that powerful. A normal student would have run away in terror right there. Once he saw through it, this last trap became even easier than the others. No need to dodge or stop, that would only waste mana. All he had to do was change the flow in the air so the illusion couldn't hold together. As mana gathered in his hands, the upperclassmen in the next room grew confused. Instead of running, Danny looked completely unfazed. Seeing that, Arnold got a bad feeling. He never expected a first year to spot a complex illusion so fast. That was absurd. Older students would have trouble doing that. Priscilla shivered, already sure their whole plan had fallen apart. After gathering enough mana, Danny fired a spinning wave of pure energy straight ahead. It sliced through the dragon's image without a second thought. When it hit the right spots, the illusion started breaking apart and smoke began to fill the hallway. With his level of magic control, doing something like this was as easy as breathing for the young prodigy. Honestly, Danny found this whole mean little welcome pretty boring. Now that the path was clear, it was time to find the one who made it. The moment he found the culprits nearby, screams burst through the hall. The older students ran for their lives while a fierce Edorak chased them down. Since Arnold was the trap expert, the group turned to him, asking what they were supposed to do, but nobody had any answer for a counterattack. This dangerous. When Edric cornered them, the beast let out a bloody roar that froze them in fear. Everyone screamed. Just before the wild creature could bare its fangs at the helpless victims, Danny stepped in and put a stop to it. His way of flushing out the rats hiding in the next room worked perfectly. The instant they heard his voice, the upperclassmen turned to Danny in shock. They begged him to do something, realizing this was probably his doing. They promised to apologize for their childish prank if he would just save them and get that furry, bloodthirsty monster away. Danny lifted a hand as strange runes filled the air and mana swirled at his command. A huge portal opened behind Edorak, locking down its movement and slowly pulling it in, monster and all. With one more wave, Danny shut the portal and Edorak vanished like it had never been there. Arnold and the others were speechless. The proud heir of the hunting clan even wondered if that beast had been another illusion. After a few seconds, the upperclassmen awkwardly got back on their feet. One of them cleared his throat and admitted the initiation had been a total disaster. Then the guy with glasses stepped up and introduced himself as Dragan Valentin, a fifth-year alchemy student. He casually added that he was the only direct heir of Marquis Valentin and offered Danny a handshake. Dragan even threw in a few compliments, saying Danny was handsome and well-built, which made sense considering how famous Danny's sisters are for their beauty and talent. Not sure what this guy was going on about. Danny chose to stay polite, shook Dragan's hand and returned the greeting. The glasses guy kept praising Danny for how well he spotted and avoided every trap. Everyone had heard he was the first student in the independent department in decades, so really they should have expected to lose. Then Dragan slyly pointed out that Arnold had set everything up. He went on to say Arnold was the heir of House Collard, famous for its skill in hunting. Hearing that, Arnold looked embarrassed. Danny smiled when he learned who the mastermind was behind the trap-filled hallway in the dorm. Trying to smooth things over, Dragan asked everyone to introduce themselves properly. The blonde girl was Priscilla, a fourth-year theology student. Dragan warned Danny not to bother the lady, since she dreamed of becoming a cleric, not waiting for anyone else to speak for her. Priscilla declared that she was a kind and beautiful young lady and the abandoned child of House Nariel. She explained that joining theology meant giving up adult dreams and everything that comes with them. Danny smiled awkwardly and stammered out a polite reply. When their hands touched, Priscilla's eyes widened like she had seen a ghost. From that tiny bit of skin contact alone, she felt a mana density unlike anything she had ever known before. No one Danny's age should have that much power. It was ridiculous, so overwhelming it shook everything. Priscilla thought she understood about magic. She stared at her hand in disbelief, while Danny seemed to expect that reaction. Still annoyed that his traps had failed, Arnold was frustrated. He refused to believe they were making such a big deal out of mana density that was just above average. Meanwhile, the others switched into damage control mode. Charles Hasbro stepped up and introduced himself as a second-year martial arts student. He quickly made it clear that he was nothing like those gross pests from the physical beauty club. Danny remembered seeing those buff gym rats trying to recruit people earlier. Charles added that while muscles matter, martial arts isn't just about showing off giant biceps. He even invited Danny to check out the course if he was interested. The only one who still hadn't introduced himself was the trap maker. The others urged Arnold to swallow his pride and greet the freshman like a normal person. But the heir of House Collard stayed sulking like a spoiled kid. A moment later, he finally gave in and shook Danny's hand. Arnold Collard and Dane Sogress looked each other in the eye. It was obvious Arnold was upset that Danny had wrecked all those carefully made traps. Danny thought about praising him a little so he'd stop pouting. He told Arnold the traps were actually very good and praised his solid knowledge of trap mechanics and trigger placement. Still, to MC's trained assassin eyes, they weren't hidden well enough. He said the paint was the real problem. Arnold was shocked to hear someone criticize his work like that. He went on saying that next time, instead of plain F6 black, he should mix F3 silver and D6 black in a 4:6 ratio. With the shine in that hallway, that mix would be much harder to notice. After thinking it over, Arnold had to admit Dane made sense. Aside from the paint color, the traps were excellent. Any other student without trained eyes would have fallen for them. The others were stunned. Who would have thought a freshman would teach Arnold something about traps? They knew they were seeing greatness in action. With introductions done, the upperclassmen offered to take the protagonist to his room. They walked him through the hall to the place he'd be staying for his school life. Even though they had pranked him, MC felt like these older students might actually be fun to be around. Watching their banter, he couldn't help feeling like he had already found a few playful friends. All in all, things were about to get a lot more interesting. The next morning, Layla scolded Dane for signing up for 6 major related classes in one semester. It made sense in a way. He had 3 tracks and needed 2 classes for each. But with general studies added on top, his schedule was packed. At this rate, he might not even have time to sleep. Most freshmen only take 4 classes at max. Layla urged him to think it through and drop some before the day ended. He assured her he'd be fine. He had even gone further by adding 2 humanities classes and military science too. He was really picking hard mode. Layla couldn't relate at all. Military science had traumatized her back during the first part of the entrance exam, and she lost a ton of points because of it. Still, that was just like the academy's top student. Dane actually liked military science. After that, the two said goodbye and agreed to meet later in swordsmanship class. For first period, Layla was heading to a general studies course. She had chosen cosmetic and skincare studies. Even the fiercest swordswoman of her generation is still a young girl. When the protagonist arrived at his first class, his classmates were already curious about the top student. They couldn't understand why he picked this subject for general studies. Most planned to talk to him after class, but they were worried he might be cold and distant. None of them even tried to hide their whispers. First period was Introduction to Military Science. From what Dane had read the day before, some parts matched what he already knew, while others clashed hard with real war. Theory and practice don't always line up. If they did, no country would ever lose a war. The fact that military science was still taught in a time of peace only showed how important theory and basics really are. When the professor stepped up to the podium, the whole class stood. The big man quickly told everyone to sit down. After a short greeting, he flipped through the textbook. He was middle-aged, with white hair and the look of someone who had seen real war. His name was Francisco Gavios, a military theory instructor. Before anything else, he called attendance, and then began the lecture. From his seat, Dane quietly studied the old man. Right away, he could tell this guy had spent plenty of time on the front lines. That only made MC more excited for the class. The first thing Gavios did was criticize military theory. On a real battlefield, he said, theory alone doesn't work. Soldiers have their own will, and commanders have to weigh victory against the lives of their men. Even so, theory still matters. It gives you the base you need to understand war. This class would help them fix mistakes and learn how military science is really used. Then Gavios looked over the room and wondered how many of these freshmen might become true elites one day. To test them, he asked a simple question. What is the most important thing in war? Out of the whole class, only one student confidently raised a hand. Gavios turned to him, clearly pleased. Of course it was Dane. Without any doubt, he answered that the most important thing in war is the supply line. The professor was genuinely impressed by that answer. He added that victory and a safe return only happen when supply lines are secure. To him, it was interesting that the best answer had come from the top student. Wanting to push Dane further, Gavios asked him to name the 3 most important parts of maintaining supply lines. He answered right away. First was strict military management. A supply line stretching from the capital to the front is long and complicated. If even one person in that chain stops caring about the cause, corruption can slip in easily. And corruption leads straight to shortages. From what the protagonist knew, most supply problems came from greedy people in the middle. Pleased with that first point, Gavios asked him to keep going. Second was standardizing supplies. If things like amount, weight, length, and width all follow the same rules, mass production gets easier. Standardization also speeds up delivery and keeps frontline units from getting confused, which helps them fight at their best. As Dane kept giving confident answers far beyond the textbook, the other students started whispering in confusion. Even Gavios was caught off guard by how sharp his answers were. For the last key point, MC said local procurement mattered most. The longer a war drags on, and the more the first 2 rules break down, the worse the supplies become. Getting supplies locally lets soldiers stay at least a little self-sufficient. They can grow food themselves or buy it from nearby areas. The amount and quality might not be great, but it's enough for emergencies. Dane answered from things he had seen and lived through, not from books. After hearing all that, the whole class was stunned. Gavios was thrilled by such a clear summary of supply line principles, so he asked what year he was in. When he learned he was only a freshman, he was shocked. He couldn't understand how a new student knew so much about war. So Gavios repeated Dane's answer for the rest of the class. What the protagonist described sounded more like the thinking of seasoned soldiers and officers who had lived through many battlefields. Since MC was still so young, there was no way he should know that much. To hide the truth, he said he had heard lots of war stories from his father. Curious, Gavios asked who his father was. When the protagonist said he was the son of Arcan, the protagonist Sogress, the veteran's jaw practically dropped. Once he heard this boy was the son of the Blue Tornado, everything clicked for him. And on top of that, this was Dane, the famous student who passed the autonomous graduation exam. No wonder he stood out so much from other freshmen. More importantly, Gavios explained that the military science taught in this hall would match the kind of answers MC gave. The textbook would just be a guide. The real focus would be on ideas that work in real-life situations. That, after all, was the true goal of military science. Gavios was extremely pleased that such a promising student had joined this time. After first period, students poured out of the lecture halls and filled the academy corridors. Dane came rushing out, annoyed that he had nearly been talked into graduate studies on his very first day. After class, the professor had pulled him aside and offered him a path to go deeper into military science. Recommending graduate school to a freshman was insane. Luckily, his second older sister had already warned him about things like this. Claire told him that if anyone ever offered him a place in the Imperial Graduate School, he should just run. And judging by this, Gavios wasn't the type to give up easily. Pushing that problem aside, Dane took out his map and planned a route to his next class. It was still his first day, so he didn't know the campus well. That wasn't helped by how huge the academy was. He had agreed to meet Layla at the central fountain, which was pretty far from where he was. After checking the map, he finally found the spot. It looked like going through the Mist Garden would be the fastest way to reach his destination. A few minutes later, the protagonist arrived at the so-called Mist Garden. People said that if the weather got even a little cloudy, the whole garden would be swallowed by thick fog. Once that happened, it was easy to lose your sense of direction, so most students avoided the place if they could. On top of that, the Mist Garden had picked up a few creepy ghost stories. Still, Dane thought it seemed nicer than his older sister had described. Since the weather was clear, he figured taking the shortcut would be safe. As he crossed the garden, he suddenly heard a sharp cry for help. Turning toward the voice, MC quickly thought about what to do. Once he pinned down where it was coming from, he realized it was beyond the brush. He took off at once. His mother had always told him that if someone needed help, he should act without hesitation. Since he still had time before his next class, a quick rescue should fit in. With his speed and sharp senses, Dane quickly found the lost student. It was a boy carrying a heavy backpack. He thanked the protagonist for answering his calls and said he thought he was stuck. Thankfully, he wasn't hurt, just worn out from wandering in circles. He introduced himself as Ernest Dillon, a first-year exploration student. MC found it pretty funny that an exploration student had gotten lost on campus. Ernest admitted he got a little too excited exploring the academy. Excited enough to lose his way and run out of energy. From what Dane remembered, Baron Dillon's house was a Western noble family, whose crest showed a ship and a sailor. Ernest was impressed that he knew his family. They were famous for exploration. For generations, his ancestors had crossed wide seas and pushed into unknown lands. Still, looking at Ernest, he didn't exactly seem built for grand adventures, considering how thin he was. Since the protagonist recognized his family, Ernest looked proud and politely asked for his name. The protagonist introduced himself, and when Ernest learned he was the first autonomous department student in 50 years, he nearly fainted from shock. His eyes lit up as he praised his luck for meeting someone so amazing. MC gave an awkward laugh, but then he noticed something around Ernest's neck. The boy said he wasn't hurt anywhere, but there were clear marks on him. Dane spotted bruises and scars around his neck and hands. From what he could tell, they didn't look like the kind of injuries someone got from exploration. Still, he chose not to ask, since it was probably personal. Instead, he steered the talk back to exploration. Ernest eagerly explained that he was obsessed with discovering anything new, people, things, places, you name it. He was always ready to dig deeper. Then he opened his giant backpack and happily showed Dane all his exploration gear, stuffed inside in a messy heap. For now, his goal was to explore the whole academy. On the very first day, the mist garden had already caught his attention. Ernest was sure something was hidden here. The story about fog appearing just because the weather got slightly cloudy made no sense to him, and the protagonist admitted the boy might be onto something. He asked if Ernest had found any clue behind the mist. Sadly, Ernest had no real answer yet. All he had was a gut feeling that some kind of force was at work in this garden, something no one had discovered. He thought maybe no one had bothered to look closely enough. Or maybe some people had tried, but something stopped them. Whatever the reason, no one knew yet, but Ernest wasn't going to give up until he found it. Maybe it was tied to a lost ancient kingdom or a call from beyond the horizon. His excitement about the unknown started to rub off on Dane. Then MC remembered he still had to meet Layla so they could head to class together. They needed to move fast. While Ernest packed up his gear, the clear blue sky slowly became covered with clouds, and rain began to fall. Rain started pouring, and in seconds the whole garden was hit by a sudden storm. That was bad. From what they'd heard, heavy rain makes the fog swallow this place much faster. Escaping would become almost impossible. Just like they feared, the strange mist began rising from the ground itself. This fog could steal a person's sense of direction, and Ernest quickly pulled out a compass, already bracing for the worst. But the strange force made the needle spin wildly, so they had no way to tell which direction to go. Ernest started freaking out. Without the compass, they could wander forever and never make it out. Dane told him to rely on his explorer skills, but this place was beyond him. In a normal area, Ernest might find a way out. The misty garden was different. Something unknown was controlling it. That's when it really hit him. On his very first day, he might actually be trapped here. Already tired, Ernest was getting even slower under the rain and fog. He apologized for dragging the protagonist into this mess and being dead weight. The protagonist calmed him down. They'd be fine. For now, they just needed to wait and watch. Then the fog wrapped around Dane's body and he felt something strangely familiar. Unlike Ernest, who was growing weaker, MC started feeling stronger for some reason. While he adjusted to the mist, Ernest was nearly in tears, blaming himself for getting a classmate stuck in here. Then he froze when a blinding light and a huge wave of energy burst from the young genius. The protagonist's mana rose into view, swirling wildly and pushing the fog away from around him. It moved so violently it almost knocked Ernest to the ground. Watching the mist vanish around Dane, Ernest was completely mesmerized. What was happening? With a steady look, MC told his new friend he knew the way out now. Even if this was the last thing he expected, Dane may have just stumbled into a huge opportunity. There was a real chance he could uncover the Misty Garden's secret today. So the two crossed the garden as if the fog wasn't there. With him leading, his mana kept clearing the way while Ernest stayed close behind. Plenty of mages had tried and failed to solve the mystery of this fog, but the protagonist kept moving deeper without any trouble. Wherever he went, the mist simply broke apart. At that point, Ernest was sure he was standing beside a true genius. After a few more minutes, they finally reached their destination. Ernest first thought they had escaped, but they were nowhere near the exit. Instead of returning to the normal campus grounds, they had gone even deeper and reached the center of the Misty Garden. There, resting above a pool, stood a richly crafted fountain. Ernest never imagined they'd find the magical fountain hidden here. Most students who enter this place come looking for this spot. They gather around it because of a legend Dane had never heard before, so Ernest explained it. People say that if you reach the fountain before the fog fades, you'll be tied to the person you want most. It sounds like just another romance tale wrapped in fantasy, but MC could tell the fountain was unusual. He wondered how its magic had lasted this long. If it's so hard to reach, how does it keep working with no upkeep? Hearing that, Ernest couldn't argue with the logic. If no one is feeding magic into it, then maybe there's some powerful energy source keeping it active for ages, like a battery that never runs out. If that's true, then maybe the entire garden is one giant mechanism. Given how overly complex the layout is, Ernest's guess might actually be right. If the garden really is one huge device powered by something unknown, then this fountain could be an ancient relic. And with so many questions still unanswered, the fog might be tied to it too. Dane stepped up to the fountain and placed his hand on it. The moment he touched it, he became sure of it. Something inside him was reacting. His mana felt like it was meeting an old friend. There was no doubt now. This fountain was giving off ancient magic. When he poured his mana into the structure, hidden symbols and runes appeared. The second Ernest saw them, he jumped. He recognized the writing. It was an ancient secret language. At first he wasn't sure because it had been too blurry, but once Dane touched the fountain, the symbols became clear. This was the language used in the Lost Kingdom of Secret. With his background, studying old languages like this was basic training for explorers in the Dillon family. After all, it would be awful to reach an ancient ruin through all kinds of danger and then get stuck because you can't read the inscriptions. Of course, Ernest doesn't know every old language, but he clearly remembers learning this secret tongue from his father when he was very young. Pulling out his notes and pen, Ernest got ready to decode the symbols carved into the fountain. Dane stepped back and let him work. His explorer instincts had fully kicked in. The first symbol Ernest figured out meant qualification. He kept checking the runes in his notes again and again, careful not to miss anything. After a long struggle, he finally managed to decode a good part of the inscription. Then he put the words together into a clear message. As far as he could tell, it said that those who are qualified must prove their strength. The words qualification and trial sounded like some kind of test. If so, it might be tied to ancient magic. Dane looked closer, and the nearer he got to the center, the stronger that familiar feeling became. Ernest scratched his head. According to everything people know, if this qualification is tied to ancient power, no one alive should be able to meet it. But he wasn't convinced. He waved his hand again, and pure mana gathered around his wrist, spinning in a bright glow. Ernest, confused, asked what he was doing. Dane focused on controlling the mana around him. As far as he knew, runes only held power in their proper forms. If he used the bracelet he and old Sidrain had found, then the ancient fountain might just respond. And it did. The runes on the bracelet resonated with the symbols carved into the fountain. The strange marks on the bracelet were still impossible to read, but seeing that reaction was enough to make Dane smile. Sure of himself, he stepped closer and reached out to touch the secret symbols. To his surprise, the structure seemed to come alive. The runes and symbols moved like illusions, shifting with the flow of the water. Then both the secret runes and the protagonist's bracelet lit up together. The unlikely pair could only wait for what would happen next. Ernest panicked when the ground started shaking, with the fountain at the center of it all. The gem-like piece in the middle began to tremble. Alarmed, Ernest asked what Dane had done to make the whole fountain sink into the ground. MC only smiled. He had taken a gamble, and it worked. He'd found the answer to the Misty Gardens puzzle. Suddenly, mana rushed toward them so hard it nearly swept the skinny explorer away. Between the fog and the activation of an ancient relic, he'd been hit with one shock after another. Who would have guessed that the one qualified for the ancient trial would be Dane? As the fountain drained, something began to shine at the center of the structure. The sun rose and cleared away the dark clouds, revealing a polished, beautiful gem. Ernest thought that had to be the power source running the fountain. No, maybe it was the reason for all the strange events in the entire garden. Chances like this are rare, and he was ready to seize it, even if it meant facing an ancient unknown power. That mysterious force gathered at Dane's feet and formed a complex circle of runes. He could feel traces of ancient magic, along with the strange power already living inside him. Then, to his shock, the unreadable symbols around the fountain started making sense in his mind. Arcana had flourished before a disaster destroyed it. This was the legacy of the Forgotten Empire. Dane was stunned. The meaningless scribbles suddenly revealed their true meaning, as if he had been meant to understand them after taking in the legacy of ruined arcana. Then a sharp pain stabbed his chest. It tightened and sent a wave of agony through his whole body. The protagonist clenched his teeth and focused on his heart. He couldn't fully explain it, but something was happening there. Threads of pure mana wrapped around the organ, squeezing tight and pushing into every tiny gap. With one final surge, the ancient mana fully entered his body in a brilliant flash. As the pain faded, MC realized he had just formed a magic circle. Here's the problem. A core and a circle normally can't exist together in balance, inside one person. Their roles are opposite, almost made to clash. It's extremely rare for someone to have both. The result is poor efficiency, and the body pays the price. That's why magic swordsmen, strong as they are, often suffer heart problems and shorter lifespans. That was exactly why Dane never wanted to form a circle, meant only for magic. He already had his cores, and even if he could build a magic circle, it wasn't worth the risk. Now the old empire's legacy had been forced into his heart. Seeing his troubled face, Agric asked if he was okay. He looked pale, and clearly shaken. The protagonist forced a smile and told his new friend he'd be fine. He just had a lot to think about. The young explorer asked if he had really absorbed that wild power from before. Even with Ernest's untrained eye, he could tell the fog and the runes had somehow linked themselves to Dane. Of course, Ernest had questions. He'd watched the whole thing, but for now, it was better to keep him in the dark. MC used his magically gifted sister as an excuse, telling Ernest he handled the strange event the way she taught him. After everything that happened today, Ernest was even more fired up to explore. He suggested they keep searching the Academy's mysteries together and share any strange places or odd events they find, since there might be more spots like that fountain. He agreed. With the mist gone and things finally calm, Ernest reminded the protagonist that he still had class. After gaining that ancient legacy, MC had completely forgotten he promised to meet Layla before class. He quickly said goodbye to Ernest and apologized for rushing off. He was already running late. If he missed the meeting spot, that wild girl would definitely chew him out. So Dane left his new friend behind and dashed toward his next class. Ernest watched him run off with a smile. He definitely met an interesting friend today, and he had a feeling that exploring with the protagonist would lead to even crazier things. Once he was sure he'd gone far enough from Ernest, Dane pushed his speed as far as he could. Something felt different. Moving was much easier now, and strong waves of mana wrapped around him, boosting his already fast body. He could clearly sense both the circle and the cores inside his body. Even though that should have been impossible, they worked together perfectly with no pain at all. Normally a circle would disrupt core energy and lower its power, but that wasn't happening. No matter how much magic he drew around himself, there was no backlash and nothing felt wrong. If anything, it was the exact opposite. His mana kept flowing through the circle and then returned to the core again and again, making the energy inside even purer. With this huge and unexpected change, Dane's first thought was to contact his older sister as soon as he could. A moment ago he was scared of heart problems. Now he was excited by everything this could mean. Thanks to his new speed, MC reached the sandy grounds of Hangston District in no time. He arrived just in time to meet Layla and walk with her through the famous area. After a short stroll, they finally reached the entrance. The entrance had a strange design. Layla explained they were about to pass through the Academy's famous magic barrier. She added that this odd structure was made by Saul Hangston, a legendary mage from the Academy. Once a year, it activates for gifted freshmen. When a student passes through, a light appears. The color shows the type and level of their magic talent. It was first built to catch dark mages sneaking into the Academy, but after dark mages vanished, the barrier was reused to rank students. Curious, Dane asked what each color meant. Layla happily explained that if someone has no magic talent, nothing changes. If their talent is decent, the barrier shines yellow. Strong talent gives off blue light, while truly gifted people produce red. Layla had studied the Academy long before they enrolled. She wanted to know everything about the place where the next chapter of her life would begin. She also mentioned that Dane's sisters, Arabella and Claire, both gave off red light, which made sense considering how terrifyingly gifted they are in their own paths. Layla could barely hold back her excitement and ran to the barrier to see what color she'd get. The moment she stepped into the district, a bright red light spread across the wall. With talent like hers, that result was no surprise. She smiled, clearly pleased, as the red glow reflected in her eyes. Dane, proud of his childhood friend, congratulated Layla, wanting to try it for himself. He studied the barrier for a moment. Then he calmly walked toward the district entrance. In his head, he expected to see red too. He was sure that after taking an ancient magic, he might even surpass a normal red light prodigy. But when he turned to check the result, he froze. A bright green light. That wasn't supposed to happen. Green wasn't even part of the ranking system. And even Layla, who knew the Academy well, was stunned. She stared at Dane and asked why he could never just be a normal genius for once. He had no idea either, so he could only give an awkward smile back. After entering the district, he and Layla headed to the lecture hall where many departments had gathered. The magic department's opening lecture was famous, so all kinds of students stayed to watch the first orientation before leaving. Among the unusual visitors that day was an upperclassman named Arthur. Judging by everyone's reaction, the guy was clearly important. Arthur Giametti, the fifth-year representative of the magic department, had come to see one person, the Academy's only interdisciplinary student, Dane Sogress. The new students had already been told the protagonist would attend the class, but he still hadn't shown up. Arthur told his juniors to bring MC straight to him the second he arrived. Since MC was Arabella's younger brother, people who admired her, Arthur included, were watching him closely. Then the room stirred when two students entered. Most of the freshmen had never seen him before, so they crowded around for a better look at the young prodigy. His good looks and emerald eyes caught their attention, and beside him stood the infamous Layla Terian. The protagonist wasn't used to that kind of spotlight, and when he stiffened under all those eyes, Layla made it worse by teasing him about his popularity. Arthur Giametti turned and smiled when he saw his senior's little brother. He was the first to walk up and greet MC loudly, praising the impression MC made at the entrance ceremony. He, confused, wondered why this annoying older student was acting so familiar all of a sudden. Then he shot back with a blunt question. "Who are you?" He also asked what this guy was doing in an introductory class for the magic department. Put off by Arthur's look, the protagonist didn't back down and told the big guy to introduce himself. Arthur, who already had a short temper, didn't like Dane's tone at all. Their first impression of each other couldn't have gone much worse. The juniors who knew Arthur held their breath. Picking a fight with a senior like him was basically academic suicide. Arthur clapped back, saying he came out of respect to meet Lady Arabella's younger brother, only to be met with arrogance. He warned that MC's attitude could stain the Sogress family name. He still refused to give ground. From his side, Arthur was the rude one, acting nasty while demanding respect. Arthur ground his teeth in frustration. This meeting was not going how he planned. If things ended here, rumors would spread fast and make him look bad. He was already thinking of a way to deal with the protagonist without angering the terrifying Arabella. The problem was, he was worrying about the wrong protagonist, Sogress. Pushed too far, Arthur raised the tension by gathering mana in his hand. He meant to teach the insolent junior a lesson. Dane noticed the mana building in the senior's hand and got ready to respond. Before it turned into a real fight, a textbook slammed onto the podium, and a strong voice demanded to know what was going on. It was the professor. Seeing a faculty member step in, Arthur claimed he had only stopped by to greet the freshman. DeNavo, head of the magic department, told Arthur to save socializing for later and stop disrupting class. Arthur gave a lazy apology, looking completely unfazed. After that ugly exchange, Layla quietly warned Dane to be careful. Arthur clearly didn't mean anything good. As he walked away, Arthur whispered to one of his lackeys to bring MC to a certain place, the moment they got the chance to do it. The other student hesitated. He was loyal to Arthur, but messing with Arabella's little brother could bring disaster. Arthur swore he'd explain everything properly to his respected senior later. He just wanted to teach young him a lesson. Class finally began, and Professor DeNavo said the first day would just be a simple orientation before dismissal. Since this was a practical combat course, they first needed to measure everyone's mana. He set a mana measuring tool on the table, and every student's eyes locked onto the decorated artifact. The mana test was simple. Place a hand on it and pour in mana. To demonstrate, Professor DeNavo sent his own mana into the device, making it glow a bright blue. Behind him, 8 fully formed magic circles appeared. He was practically on the level of a tower master. The students were stunned. Almost none of them had ever seen a complete 8-circle mage before. After amazing the freshmen, Professor DeNavo explained that even among people with the same number of circles, a darker color means a higher level. Sometimes circles won't appear at all, but that doesn't mean the student lacks talent, so there was no reason to panic. Some people still hadn't formed their circles yet, which is why today's test wouldn't rely only on circle checks. By the Academy's standards, anyone accepted into the magic department should at least know basic magic. Professor DeNavo summoned several spheres and explained that these would be used to measure mana more accurately. Everyone stared at the blue orbs, unsure how those little balls could test mana so precisely. DeNavo demonstrated again with basic psychokinesis, controlling all the spheres at once. The students would need to show how many balls they could handle using one elemental spell. With a wave of his hand, DeNavo poured huge amounts of kinetic energy into the spheres, creating a steady mana flow and pushing the orbs to top speed. The students watched closely, making sure to study the professor's hand movements. They had never seen runes form so cleanly before. It was hard to believe DeNavo had taken something as simple as psychokinesis to such a high level of precision. While most students were amazed, someone like Layla wasn't impressed at all. Even beginner magic changes in strength and accuracy depending on the user. Each sphere just needs mana applied to it one by one. For a freshman, controlling 3 balls at once was already considered the limit. Layla turned to Dane and asked if he could handle more than 3. Before he could answer, Professor DeNarvo called Arthur from the back. The 5th year was only watching the class, but DeNarvo saw a perfect chance to show the freshman what a top student looks like. Arthur gladly stepped up, excited to show off in front of the new students. He also wanted to make that arrogant freshman look small. The protagonist was curious too. He wanted to see what the so-called grown-up could actually do. Arthur walked up and poured his mana into the measuring device. The room burst into chatter when 4 circles appeared, their color dark and dense. DeNarvo praised Arthur for improving again, and Arthur answered with fake modesty. DeNarvo was all smiles. Usually reaching 4 circles before graduation is rare, so Arthur was proof that real talent stands out. The professor kept praising him and told the freshmen to stay close to the 5th-year representative since his advice might help them become proper mages. Arthur soaked up every second of the attention. In his head, he was already imagining Dane panicking. Any second now, or so he thought. What Arthur didn't know was that MC couldn't care less about his 4 rings. Then came the orb control test. As an experienced spellcaster, Arthur handled it well. His control looked nearly flawless. What really stood out was how many orbs he moved at once. Still, if you looked closely, sweat was running down his face from the strain of controlling his limit. Arthur was sure this display had to impress the freshmen. Dane just watched him without any interest. After that underwhelming show, DeNarvo asked the freshmen to applaud their senior. He looked genuinely proud of his former student. Arthur shot him a smug look, eager to see the young lord's mana level. DeNarvo then turned serious and warned the freshmen. Anyone not confident in their mana control could leave now or risk embarrassing themselves. For a moment, nobody moved. They had already come this far, so there was no backing out. The test would begin from the first row to the last. As the first row gathered at the front, Layla and Dane watched from farther back. Layla didn't like this setup. They called the first day an orientation, but it was really just a public skill check. The protagonist seemed to agree, though that was just how the academy worked. One by one, the students stepped up and measured their mana while the professor took notes. Some lit up with joy just from seeing even 1 circle appear. Others, of course, didn't have enough mana to show even that. The orb test was even harsher, making it clear how hard true psychokinesis really is. Arthur and his friends stood off to the side, laughing at the clumsy freshman who kept messing up the test. Then one student stepped forward and caught all their attention. Dane extended his hand, touched the device, and let his mana flow steadily into it. Arthur was still waiting to see the boy's confidence break once he realized the gap between them. After what happened in the Nebula Garden, MC was curious too. Since absorbing ancient magic, something inside him had clearly changed. The artifact lit up as thick, rich mana poured from his hand. DeNarvo focused on Dane much more closely. The boy had handled the self-study exam perfectly. So with all that theory knowledge, DeNarvo wanted to see how many circles he had. As the seconds dragged on, everyone kept staring at the year's golden child. Then suddenly, a brilliant light burst out, stronger than anything before it. Dane felt like he was losing control as the device pulled mana from the circle in his heart. When the light reached its peak, an error message flashed. His mana could not be measured. No one had ever seen that before. The device could read up to 8 circles, so the whole room was stunned. The protagonist reread the red warning again and again, but he had no explanation either. Layla, Arthur, and the rest of the class held their breath. DeNarvo's eyes narrowed with a conflicted look. The students still waiting in line started complaining that Dane had broken the device before they got their turn. They didn't buy the impossible-to-measure result and assumed he just had no circles. Meanwhile, MC wondered if the ancient magic in his heart had interfered with the reading. DeNarvo had used this test for years and trusted the machine completely. It could even expose people hiding their real level, so seeing unable to measure was new to him. He doubted anyone there had seen this happen before. Trying to calm the room, DeNarvo said it was probably just an overload. For now, they would move on to Dane's orb test. Arthur, of course, took the error message as proof the brat had no real magic talent. He was disappointed by the failed reading, but at least he still had the orb test, though he wasn't even sure his power would work normally here. He closed his eyes and pictured the psychokinesis spell with full focus. Then he raised his hand and countless raging threads of mana shot out. Copying DeNarvo's earlier movements, he lifted every orb from the container, all of them linked by wild strands of ancient mana. The whole room went silent. Dane controlled each orb like it was nothing. Until now, even making 5 float for a moment had seemed nearly impossible. Arthur froze. He had walked up earlier full of confidence, but that confidence vanished the second a real genius appeared. His little brain couldn't process what he was seeing. Layla, already used to the protagonist doing impossible things, recovered faster than everyone else. At this point, she just accepted that logic didn't apply to him. Dane, meanwhile, was panicking. He never expected every orb to rise. It seemed absorbing ancient mana had changed him that much. Once he got over the shock, he slowly moved his hands. Since everyone was watching, he decided he might as well do something flashy. He fed the orbs more ancient mana and made them speed up until they looked like blinking lights. Now he was doing things even DeNarvo had never seen. With his sharp sense for magic, the professor was the first to notice the boy was rearranging the orbs with the clear goal of drawing an image. At last, the swirling mana shifted shape and formed a picture in the air. A lion and a snake. Everyone knew those two beasts were the crest of the great Dane family. MC smiled at his little masterpiece, while DeNarvo was almost terrified. Even Arabella, a genius mage, had never looked this unbelievable. Layla, on the other hand, was annoyed. She was up next, and there was no way her turn could compare. After the orbs were set back down, DeNarvo praised him again and again. Now he understood why a tower master who had never accepted a student took such interest in the boy. Dane bowed politely and thanked his professor. Hearing that, the freshmen nearly fainted when they learned the protagonist had been taught by a tower master. His image among them was quickly turning favorable. One of Arthur's lackeys asked if the plan was still on after seeing MC's performance. Arthur clenched his fist. He blamed his family for raising one monster after another. If the protagonist was already this strong, they would need to change their plan. As much as it annoyed him, Arthur had to admit they might lose in a direct fight, and there would be no coming back from that humiliation. Then his brain finally came up with one possible answer. If they couldn't beat the boy by force, they would have to win him over. Arthur decided to bring Dane into the student council. As a council officer, he could help place the boy under his wing as a senior. Getting into the council wasn't easy, and freshmen had never been allowed before, but Arthur was sure they could break that rule. With MC's talent, the magic department's fame would rise fast. And of course, Arthur's own status would rise with it. DeNarvo pulled him aside after that and showered him with even more praise. If he had known the boy was this gifted, he would have fought the other professors to keep him in his department. Then he used his display to fire up the rest of the class, and before sending him back told the rising star to visit any time. The protagonist never turns down a chance to learn. After class, he and Layla left the lecture hall. As usual, she complained that he had stolen all the spotlight, and he answered with a sly grin, teasing her on purpose. If not for his absurd performance, Layla's control of 5 orbs would have been the highlight. Competitive as ever, she stormed off in frustration. Right then, Arthur and his group walked over. His tone had changed completely as he praised MC's talent. He claimed he only wanted a quick word with the young master. Seeing that sudden attitude shift, Dane immediately got suspicious. Sure enough, Arthur brought up the Imperial Academy's student council. He explained that the council sets academy policy and manages the budget. Because of that, it holds huge influence and plenty of perks. For example, the council can decide disciplinary action against students who go too far. It also has the power to approve academic department events. Dane didn't need the speech. His older sister had already told him how powerful and exclusive the council was. In the end, Arthur offered him a recommendation to become an officer, saying he easily met the requirements. He also added that any officer automatically gets into Dantera Hall. What Arthur forgot is that this year's top student is already in Dantera Hall. While the annoying senior kept listing perks, Dane started wondering if the council members thought they were gods. After Arthur's long pitch, the protagonist turned him down. If he ever joined the council, he'd do it on his own, not through a shortcut. And to him, every advantage comes with a price. Arthur's goons could already see the plan falling apart, so they quickly started praising the council again, acting like Arthur's recommendation was some huge honor. Layla had been forced to sit through this nonsense, and their pushiness was getting on her nerves, so she grabbed Dane by the hand and dragged him to the cafeteria. Arthur was left standing there with his lousy plan in ruins. MC was just thankful Layla stepped in at the perfect time. Even after being rejected, Arthur and his crew weren't planning to give up, and Layla could tell exactly why they wanted to turn MC into a pawn. More than that, the young Duchess was annoyed that she hadn't gotten the same recommendation. By now, Layla had accepted that when it came to talent, Dane was on a whole different level. Then the two headed for the Imperial Academy cafeteria, hoping the sweet pies were still there. Meanwhile, Arthur went to meet Professor DeNarvo. In DeNarvo's opinion, he might be even more gifted than his older sister Arabella. Magic is too broad to judge perfectly, but in raw potential, the protagonist was a monster. Hearing that shocked Arthur, especially since he admired Arabella so much. Then the professor told him to gently push the young Sogress heir into focusing only on the magic department. Ever since MC arrived, everyone had seen the same thing. The boy's talent was impossible to ignore. Arthur admitted he had already tried to recruit him into the student council and got rejected. DeNarvo still couldn't let it go. Talent like that was too valuable to waste. Changing topics, Arthur asked if there was any recommendation letter for him. The professor brushed it off, saying that in 2 years, magic towers would probably line up for Arthur after graduation. But Arthur could tell what DeNarvo really meant. If Arthur got into a magic tower too early, DeNarvo would lose his favorite student and his errand boy. Arthur had even heard rumors that during his 3rd year, DeNarvo was the one who blocked 2 tower offers. Knowing his future rested in that selfish teacher's hands, Arthur kept obeying. He had no real choice. On the way to the cafeteria, Dane noticed the place was packed because of the club events. Every club was trying hard not to get shut down. The two of them tried several booths and won a bunch of prizes. It was a fun break. Inside the protagonist's bag were 20 mana storage stones, 15 lunch coupons, 5 general meal tickets, and 8 convenience store vouchers plus a treasure map. The senior running that booth said it had been bought in a blind auction at the Arkander auction house. The moment Layla heard Arkander, her eyes lit up at the chance it might be real. Dane's father had once told him about that auction house. Arkander was known for handling rare and beautiful items from across the empire. The best appraisers checked everything carefully, so whatever they sold was guaranteed to be real. The treasure map's seal was still unbroken. And with all the stories about hidden places and mysteries around the academy, a real treasure didn't sound that crazy. Looking at it, MC immediately thought of the one person who would love it most, that exploration nerd. Demetra Hall is where most general education classes happen. Right now, he was heading inside for Imperial History. Before coming to the academy, the Sogress family's head butler had already taught him most of the material, so Dane felt pretty confident. Then a familiar voice called out to him excitedly. It was Ernest, the nerd. Since Imperial History is required for freshmen, it looked like they'd be sharing this class. With a worried look, Ernest asked the protagonist about the changes to his body after the incident. It was a messy topic, so the protagonist avoided it. Just as he was about to tell him the exciting news about the treasure map, they were interrupted by a pack of thugs. From Ernest's terrified reaction, Dane could tell there was some history there. The leader looked old enough to have a wife and kids, and he greeted Ernest with a smug grin. Poor Four Eyes barely knew how to answer. To MC, he looked like a soldier reliving trauma. Once Ernest finally managed to speak, we learned the thug leader's name was Brown. He was out here bullying kids. Dane couldn't help thinking about what that would do to the glory of their so-called great king. Then the thug leader grabbed Ernest's head like a basketball and mocked him for shaking like a leaf. These copy-paste villains weren't even paying attention to him. Since they had found their old errand boy, they figured they might as well restart the old servant boss routine, and Brown demanded a sandwich. When Ernest tried to refuse, the thugs laughed, and Brown shot him a sharp glare. Only then did that overgrown student finally notice Dane. Since Ernest called the protagonist his friend, Brown assumed he was just another errand boy, same as Ernest. That attitude reminded MC of the worst trash he'd seen on the battlefield. Before things could get uglier, a hall monitor spotted them and shouted for everyone to get to class. Like an experienced bully, Brown smiled and answered politely. But before leaving, he shot Ernest a look and invited him to a little talk after class. Four Eyes shrank back in fear as all his old problems came rushing back. Brown, meanwhile, was just happy that school life was about to get a lot less boring. Even after Brown was gone, Ernest was still trembling. Dane helped him up and the poor guy apologized for dragging his new friend into trouble with bad people. Ernest admitted he had a rough history with Brown back home. He thought the academy was so big that he'd never run into him again. He told him it was fine. Honestly, he couldn't stand watching his new friend get pushed around by trash like that, so he offered to walk with Ernest for now. He could already tell this dummy would go right back to being a servant if he listened to whatever Brown ordered. If that happened, Ernest would just repeat the worst part of his younger days. He had seen Dane transform at the spring, so there was no need to worry about safety or any of that. Even knowing how strong the protagonist was, Four Eyes still felt bad about pulling him into his personal mess. As soon as classes ended, Ernest and Dane were ambushed by Brown's copy-paste thug club. When MC told Brown to shut up, the bastard only barked louder. Realizing words wouldn't scare him off, Brown started to feel threatened. Like every other rotten noble, he threw around his family name, the Sawa family, claiming he was heir to the strongest house in the West, as if that meant anything. The protagonist just raised an eyebrow and smiled. He had never even heard of such a nobody family. That only made Brown angrier, and his lackeys started yapping like the dogs they were. Acting tough, Brown ordered them to beat Dane up. The nameless extras grinned like they'd been waiting for that all day. They swaggered toward Ernest and MC, and Ernest tried to calm things down by saying they should just run. He warned him that Brown had been called a sword genius since childhood. Hearing that just made Dane more interested in putting that bastard in his place. He turned to his scared friend and told him to fight one of the goons too. One punch to the chin should end it. Ernest couldn't keep living in fear. He had to hit back. When the first thug rushed in, the protagonist barely paid attention. He read the attack easily and took the punch without raising his guard, twisting his neck with the impact. The bald thug looked very pleased with himself. Even Brown felt proud, like his men were experts at intimidation. The bald one threw another punch, but this time Dane raised his guard. He had only taken the first hit so that whatever happened next, no matter how brutal, could count as self-defense. The thug ignored the warning and swung a hook, but MC dodged it easily and fired back with a fast strike to the liver, sending awful pain through the guy's whole body. Then, just to make it worse, Dane swept his leg out from under him. The thug slammed his head on the pavement hard enough to need good health insurance. Ignoring the first victim, he moved on to the second. His defense was terrible, so Dane caught him with an easy palm strike to the jaw. A shoulder shove sent that thug flying into the third. While still a few steps away, the protagonist formed a manosphere in his hand and launched the blue orb straight into the third thug's face. In just a few seconds, all three had been dealt with. They hit the ground and passed out. Dane broke the silence by complaining that he'd hit the third one a little too hard. He still wasn't fully used to his old mana core. Layla stood there with her mouth open, while Brown and the rest of his crew could hardly believe what they'd just seen. Their boss snapped at his men for being useless idiots, and they warned him that the white-haired kid was anything but normal. Brown told them to shut their mouths. Losing to a freshman was already humiliating enough. That only made things worse for him. Dane then taunted the big guy, telling him to back up all the bragging from earlier. The only thug with half a brain tried to warn Brown to stop and back off, but the idiot refused. Brown couldn't stand the thought of bowing to some brat, so he fired up his mana and opened a portal. MC didn't look impressed by the flashy display. From the portal, Brown pulled out a rough-looking sword. He swung it around like it was something amazing. Since they were alone, he figured he could cause a bloody little accident with no witnesses. Ernest shouted, but Danny didn't even flinch. The smart thug tried to calm Brown down, warning that in weather like this, crimes could disappear without a trace. Brown snapped at him to shut up, then told him to go after Ernest, turning it into a 2-on-2. Danny assured Ernest that against some low-level thug in a straight fight, he could win. After all, Ernest is obsessed with exploring. His legs should be strong. He just needs to time it right and send the guy flying. Ernest doubts he has the nerve, but Danny believes he does. The fight finally started, and Danny jumped in to pull Brown away from Ernest. Brown was used to magic nerds keeping their distance from swordsmen, so Danny just smiled at that bad read and kept fooling the big idiot. At the same time, Ernest started taking Danny's words to heart. He couldn't keep living as a victim forever. The thug walked up with a mocking grin, snapping his fingers and telling Four Eyes to lie down and take the beating. It's not easy to shake off years of trauma in a few seconds, so Ernest thought about what Danny would do and recalled the dodge he had just seen. When the thug threw the first punch, Ernest copied Danny's move. He was too slow and got hit, but for the first time in his life, he punched back. Then he braced himself and fired another shot straight into the thug's face. The old Ernest was gone. The scared boy was becoming a man. Caught off guard, the thug was knocked out and dropped hard. Looking at the result, Ernest really did have some fight in him. Once the adrenaline faded, his knees gave out, but the relief was incredible. He had finally fought back. Meanwhile, Danny led Brown farther away. Once he noticed Ernest had won, he stopped running. Brown looked back and cursed his men for being useless. Danny glanced around and spotted a few brooms. Those would do nicely. He grabbed one and snapped the handle. Brown felt insulted that this kid planned to face his sword with a wooden stick. For Dane, that was more than enough. What better tool for trash than a broom? Brown was in real trouble now. With no backup, he rushed in anyway, still arrogant enough to claim he'd hold back before killing Danny. He said he'd only leave a small scar on the boy's face, one that would remind him to fear Brown every time he looked in a mirror. He was embarrassing himself. The moment he got in range, Brown launched a flurry of slashes and thrusts with a smug grin. But as every strike got blocked by a stick, he slowly realized Danny was just toying with him. Meanwhile, our guy was having fun with Brown's obvious attacks. Brown couldn't stand having his sword skill mocked, so he pushed harder. In his mind, only Duke Terian or someone on that level had the right to judge him. Even after Dane poured mana into the stick, Brown still believed real steel gave him the edge. As he prepared his strongest swing, Danny calmly focused mana at the tip of the stick. Then, in one smooth motion, he drove it into Brown's body. A burst of pain like nothing he'd ever felt tore through him. Power like that coming from an ordinary stick shouldn't have been possible. Ernest watched the whole thing nervously. He knew Danny was strong, but not this strong. As Brown coughed on the ground, Danny told him to get up. Once Brown drew a real weapon, this had to be seen through to the end. That's how his father taught him. At last, Brown found enough sense to ask who he was facing. Danny Dane Sogress introduced himself calmly as the only son of Count Sogress and a first-year independent student. That's when it finally hit Brown. This was the prodigy everyone had been talking about, the youngest and brightest genius on the continent. Still, he never expected someone like Danny to hang around an idiot like Ernest. Danny didn't let up. Since Brown drew his sword and lost, honor rules said Danny could take his life if he wanted. From a duelist view, he had every right to kill him right there. Looking into Danny's eyes filled Brown with fear. That cold calm made him feel Danny truly would do it if this kept going. So he swallowed his pride, got up, and dropped to his knees begging for forgiveness. As Brown poured out humble words, Danny looked at him in disgust. Even after getting crushed, this guy still didn't understand who he should be apologizing to. Instead of kneeling to Danny, he should have been begging Ernest. Realizing his mistake, the pathetic coward grabbed onto Ernest and stammered out an apology, tears in his eyes as he begged for his life and apologized for years of bullying. Ernest looked him straight in the eyes, something he never would have dared do before. He remembered all those years of fear, pain, and trauma Brown had caused. To Ernest, Brown had always seemed like the scariest person in the world. Now that same threat was crawling on the ground, sniffling and begging. Danny gave Ernest the final choice. He could beat Brown half to death or end it with that apology. Desperate to stay alive, Brown begged his former bus worker to spare him. Ernest really did want to let out all that buried anger, but in the end, that wouldn't satisfy him. Someday, he wanted to beat Brown fairly, then maybe forgiveness could come after. Danny felt proud of his friend's choice. It took real courage to decide that. As the two walked away, Ernest thanked Danny for changing his life. On the way back to campus, they ran into a worried Layla. One look at the cut on Danny's cheek, and she knew he'd been in a fight. She glanced at the thugs they had beaten, and a knowing smile crossed her face. Brown recognized Layla too, and the fear came rushing back. Since they were both from the swordsmanship department, they had probably crossed paths before, though Layla clearly didn't remember his name. Ignoring the losers, she asked who the Four Eyes kid was, and Danny properly introduced Ernest Dillon from the exploration department. Since Layla was Duke Termian's daughter, he still called her Miss Layla. She told him that Danny's friends were her friends too, so they could drop the formal talk. Danny bragged that Ernest's family was famous for exploring ruins and hidden secrets. Hearing that, Layla excitedly brought out the map they had won. Danny explained they had picked up a treasure map during one of the club events. Ernest had heard some lucky student won something like that, but he never guessed it was his friend. The second treasure map came up, Ernest's shy side vanished and got replaced by full-on obsession. The three moved somewhere private and opened the map to study it. Even with Ernest's trained eye, he could barely make sense of it at first. The one thing he did notice was that it pointed to a specific place inside the academy. Strange writing also covered the scroll, so it had to be some kind of code. For now, the best move was figuring out who made the map. If they knew the creator's habits and style, they might build a rough decoder. The only sure thing was that the map showed somewhere inside the academy, since the shapes used were unique to the campus. The problem was the architectural style was wrapped in old magic that only Saul Hankston could use. Ernest was referring to the legendary mage who founded the academy itself. In other words, they were dealing with ancient magic not seen in centuries, since Saul never had direct students. Layla knew using the map would be hard, but not this hard. In the end, all they could do was dig into the map's creator and start cracking the code from there. After that, they could work together and find the real treasure. Ernest was always ready for an adventure, and Layla had never traveled outside her family's control. Of course they were excited for a treasure hunt. Ernest would naturally lead the research, so Danny was confused when Four Eyes handed the map back to him. Ernest assured them he had already memorized everything, which shocked both Danny and Layla. For some reason, codes and maps just stuck in his head. That would be pretty useful on tests too. This was the first time Ernest had chased a mystery with anyone besides his father, and he felt truly grateful to Danny. To celebrate becoming an official team, Layla suggested they grab some food. After that long day, Danny headed back to his dorm. He cleaned up a little and unpacked his things, making sure the items from his family stayed where he could see them. The only thing he couldn't put away was the familiar egg. He couldn't store living beings in his subspace. When he picked up the giant egg, it suddenly started shaking hard. In 7 years of feeding it mana, that had never happened before. The mana around the academy was strange, but it shouldn't have been that different from before. The only real change was the ancient magic he had absorbed in the garden. To test that idea, Danny poured more mana into it. The thought of finally hatching his familiar filled him with excitement. After a few more minutes of feeding it mana, Dane felt like he was trying to fill a bottomless well, even after 7 years of doing this. He was putting out so much mana that his room was starting to become unstable. Back in the dorm, stopping now could mean missing a huge chance, so he quickly wrapped up the egg and rushed off to the Claire's lab. She's a genius with summoning, but even she was thrown off by what the egg was doing. Even after he stopped feeding it mana, the weird shaking didn't stop. While they try to figure it out, Claire worries Dane will miss roll call at the dorm. With a sly grin, he tells her he already took care of that. Back in the halls of Danter Hall, Albert from the discipline committee stormed in right on time to check the students' attendance. The top students of Danter Hall were lined up neatly outside their rooms. Roll call is done the same way in every dorm at the Imperial Academy. Arnold, the trap-loving kid, started getting nervous because there was still no sign of Priscilla or Dane. Albert announced the rules: 1 penalty point for being late to monthly roll call, 2 for missing it. 3 late arrivals in one term can lead to discipline and dorm service. 2 absences mean forced demotion. He ordered everyone to stay still and keep quiet. Even in Danter Hall, the rules would be enforced. To help the committee, they recently added magical surveillance cameras, and Priscilla had already been caught trying to sneak out before. They confirmed she left the dorm grounds 5 minutes ago. Normally, the committee doesn't inspect rooms, but with Albert in charge, room checks have become the new normal. That means points are going to drop hard this term. After carefully checking Priscilla's room, they gave her the proper penalty for being gone without permission. The only other person missing at the first roll call was the freshman, Dane. A few of the protagonist's new dorm mates tried to cover for him, but Albert wasn't having it. When he and his team stepped into MC's room, they were met by the boy himself. Dane scratched his head and apologized, saying he'd been busy unpacking. Albert couldn't really argue with that, so he left with only a warning. But the real he was still in Claire's lab. He had used an MK1 illusion projector built by Arabella. It could project his image into a slot inside his room through a small generator. Since it's remote-controlled, the link can get shaky. If the flow breaks, it shows right away. The protagonist tested it a few times for fun, and found a perfect use for it tonight. Claire doesn't approve of his tricks, but she's a little impressed. As for the egg, everything points to a strong chance that it will hatch tonight. Claire can't be fully sure, but these reactions are clearly a good sign, so she suggests putting the egg in a magical stabilizer before giving it any more mana. Since her lab is protected by magic shields for sensitive research, it's the best place for the egg to hatch. After setting it on the stabilizer, Claire added a few magical filters. Even though Dane's mana is already very pure, he once again poured everything he had into the egg. It was draining him fast. What the hell is inside that thing? Even if someone with enough money can buy a familiar egg, Shokarum is a whole different story. No one really knows the exact conditions for every kind of egg. The only sure thing is this: the user's mana and the unknown familiar inside must match in magical frequency. In other words, it's pure luck, and a lot of it. Whatever happens next depends on Dane. Claire knew her little brother was gifted, but seeing him work and feeling his mana made her tense. At last, cracks started to sound from the egg. Claire shouted for him to keep going and push harder until it came out. When MC reached his limit, bright blue mana whipped through the lab. Then the egg burst, throwing shell pieces everywhere. Claire and him were both hit by the blast of mana. When the light faded, a small creature covered in primal slime stood where the egg had been. Claire rushed over to her brother, who had been tossed away like a rag doll. Forget the dizziness from mana drain and smashing into the walls, the egg had finally revealed what was inside. It had a white-scaled body, tiny wings, horns on its head, and curious eyes. Claire guessed some traits matched a wyvern. Then the little goofball started spitting fire like it was trying to show off. Claire pushed her brother to get closer to his familiar. Sometimes newborn creatures claim the first person they see as their owner, and so the white-haired boy and the little white lizard looked each other in the eyes. Dane smiled at his new familiar and greeted it. He introduced himself properly, and the two formed an instant bond. Claire was charmed by how cute the little thing was. She praised her brother for making it look easy, even though she knew how hard hatching really is. Now she could study a newborn unknown life form up close. After a few minutes of careful checking and looking for clear signs, she became sure this little guy had been summoned from beyond the horizon. Only a handful of summoners can even reach that place. Even Claire herself can only summon a few minor spirits right now. Bringing out a full familiar from beyond the horizon is a huge achievement. Claire trusts her knowledge of normal summons in the human world, even their young forms, but none of them look quite like this. Ivan is a little similar, but the finer details are clearly different. For now, they still can't be sure what this little creature really is. Claire promised to do more research, though she doubts the Academy has any books that will help. One clue may be its link to ancient mana. Before Dane left, Claire told him to keep the eggshells, since some species eat them after hatching for nutrients. As for daily care, the protagonist needs to keep track of everything about the little creature: what it likes and hates, how much it sleeps, how aggressive it gets, how fast it grows, and everything in between. It's a lot to manage, but MC felt it would be worth it. For some reason, he already felt he had to protect and raise this little one with everything he had. Claire suggested keeping the familiar in the lab to avoid trouble in public, but Dane didn't want to hide his new buddy forever. Besides, if people give him trouble, he has 2 strong sisters to back him up. And honestly, it's better for the little guy to be outside than stuck in a lab. Claire also said he should apply for an official summoner's sigil right away. He may still be a beginner, but he already has the talent to ask for one, and with everything else going on, now is the perfect time. Tomorrow is orientation for summoning classes with Professor Temeric's piano. Claire told the protagonist all he had to do was show his talent and special recruitment would follow. There'll be a faculty meeting, but Claire is sure he'll get special qualifications. Before leaving the lab, Dane wondered what he should name the little goober. When he got back to Danter Hall, one of his new friends questioned him for almost missing roll call. According to the Purple Glasses 4 Eyes, his sisters were also known for pulling wild stunts like that. Still, at least he escaped punishment for now. As soon as he got back to his room, Dane dropped onto the bed. When he looked up, the little lizard was flying in circles overhead, full of energy. While exploring the dorm, it even spat fire here and there. A little earlier, MC had tried to sneak back into the dorm through a secret path his sisters told him about. Sadly for him, the discipline committee was paranoid enough to cover the whole dorm with magic. To deal with the barrier, Dane started studying the mana flow for a weak spot. A barrier that big had to have some hidden flaws. Before he could finish checking, the little scaly got impatient and blasted fire at the magic. To his surprise, the barrier shook hard and then tore open completely. That shouldn't have happened from normal fire. The only answer he could think of was that his familiar's flames might somehow shut down mana. Based on that alone, he already knew he'd hit the jackpot. The next day, Dane met Ernest and told him all about his new buddy. He said the little guy's name was Happy, and Ernest was not impressed. Since Four Eyes hated the name so much, the protagonist challenged him to come up with something better. Ernest thought hard. The little one was cute, sure, but a name should carry more weight. At last, Ernest said one word. Carnus. Dane liked how Carnus sounded. It was mysterious and oddly fitting for the little fire spitter, so he happily dropped the name Happy. From now on, the little guy would be called Carnus. MC's next stop was Bermudez Hall, named after the famous scholar Bermudez. That's where all summoning classes are held. As the students entered the classroom, he spotted a familiar face in the crowd. The Grand Tyron, the brat he beat at his birthday years ago. De Grand realized Dane was in the same class as him. He had never forgotten the boy who took his summons. Because of that humiliating day, House Tyron fell in noble rank and barely held onto its capital noble title. De Grand wasn't even supposed to be in this class. He failed last year and had to retake it. At least the kid had learned his lesson and knew to stay as far from Dane as possible. As he dreaded what was coming, an upperclassman walked over and assured him there was no shame in repeating a class. In fact, this was the second time that veteran was retaking the course. Then the professor entered, and everyone sat down. Professor Temerix, Piano introduced the course outline. This class would cover the theory behind summoning, the crucial first step for any summoner. Most students had already heard that Professor Temerix was strict. He also reminded everyone about a special selection test that anyone could take, as long as they met the requirements. To explain it better, he brought up a magic screen. To qualify for the special selection, you need to summon a level 5 creature or higher with a blank sigil. Then you have to keep it out for over 30 minutes. The whole room started complaining. Holding even a lower level summon is already hard, so this sounded ridiculous. But Temeric wasn't done. He added one more step, a subjective observation test. That means even if someone clears the 3 conditions, they can still be rejected. Special selection is only for truly exceptional students, and honestly, that last part may be the hardest. The first 2 are brutal, but winning over an examiner's personal judgment might be even worse. Danny wasn't thrilled by all the red tape around special selection. In the end, too much power sat with the examiner. Then Temeric made it even worse. Applicants also need at least 2 recommendation letters from people tied to the summoning department. Inside, he was pleased by the class's reaction. Temeric enjoyed knocking cocky freshmen down a peg. His gaze moved across the room and stopped on Danny Dane Sogress, the boy who passed the main autonomous exam. He'd already heard what happened during the entrance test from Professor Delfiniso. No matter how he looked at it, he couldn't believe a freshman had formed a contract with a 4th-level Edaroki. He wanted to see the boy's talent for himself. Part of him still suspected Danny got in because he was from House Dane Sogress. Either way, normal students should be happy just passing the regular exam. For future summoners, theory class shouldn't be a problem. In other words, he was basically calling the repeaters idiots. Danny found that odd since the entrance exam had already tested theory and affinity. Then Temeric asked if any freshmen here could already summon, or if they were all just disappointments. Danny could feel the man staring right at him. Since he was clearly being singled out, he decided to play along. Danny stood up and accepted the challenge. The professor asked for his name and department, even though he already knew. So Danny Dane Sogress introduced himself properly as a student from the autonomous department. Temeric tried to praise him, but the sarcasm was obvious. Even so, Danny didn't answer with pride or fake modesty. He calmly gave credit to the deans who evaluated him. Without wasting time, Temeric called him forward to show the talent that impressed the deans. Danny didn't like the open doubt, but he stayed respectful. Still, he added one condition. If he proved himself, he wanted Temeric to write a recommendation letter for the special selection. The man was surprised by his nerve. So was everyone else in the room. Now all Danny had to do was prove his talent really was that special. To him, it sounded easy. He even admitted that failing hadn't crossed his mind. That made Temeric furious. Even Danny's sister Claire had never sounded this boldly confident. Still, he accepted. Danny would get his chance, and if he succeeded, Temeric would write the letter, though he warned that he wasn't easy to impress. The class buzzed right away. Some knew Danny as the golden freshman, and others as Claire's little brother. As it turned out, the professor already had a blank sigil ready. Danny calmly walked up and took it. This challenge wasn't part of his plan, but it could earn him a lot. He poured mana into the blank sigil and quietly called on it to answer him. At once, a huge wolf appeared and pure mana spread through the room. The beast landed and glared at the students in their seats. Anyone with basic summoning knowledge could tell the wolf was a grade 5 summon. Calling something like that with a blank sigil was nearly impossible. No one was more shocked than the wolf's original owner, Agric. One look was enough for him to recognize Gampu. Danny turned to the professor, waiting for his judgment. Even Temric had to admit this was beyond normal. Still, he was counting on Danny failing the 30-minute requirement. Keeping up a professional face, he praised Danny and reminded him how hard the second condition was. Danny didn't want to waste everyone's time, so he offered to show something else. Before anyone could stop him, he smiled at the professor's cracking expression. The doubt on Temeric's face was falling apart. No one in class could look away from the stage. Since the third condition was to show something special, Danny said the next move could be judged by the professor. If Temeric thought it wasn't enough, he had every right to fail him. Surely there was no room for pettiness in front of a whole class of summoning freshmen, right? Then Danny called Gampu over and patted the good boy on the head. He rose and slowly guided his mana around the level 5 beast. As Temeric watched, he started to realize what Danny was trying to do. Danny spoke an ancient chant, and pure mana flowed into Gampu. The wolf's eyes turned sharper and its fangs grew deadlier. Its whole body swelled larger and began to float, lifted by raw magic. At last, the beast's claws were strengthened to maximum killing power. Danny knew it was working perfectly. Without ancient magic, he never would have imagined doing this so early in life. Then the rest of the class understood. Danny was performing summon enhancement, a technique usually reserved for 5th-year summoning students. With a deep howl, Gampu showed just how much stronger he had become. Danny looked at the professor and asked if that was enough to prove he was unique. Temeric couldn't take his eyes off the massive beast. Watching Danny pull off a link enhancement so easily convinced him the wild stories were true. In fact, he had never seen a student this gifted. After a few stunned seconds, Temeric finally stammered out his approval of Danny's performance. He said they would discuss the recommendation letter later. Danny was satisfied with that fair answer. Meanwhile, Agric was left speechless by how much the Dane boy had grown. Now he could see just how foolish and arrogant he had been back then. Once the commotion died down, class resumed, and Temeric proved he was actually a very good teacher. Danny kept feeling the man's eyes on him, but he didn't bother reacting. Temeric knew the material perfectly, though the earlier shock had clearly thrown him off. Danny kind of enjoyed seeing the grown man flustered. He'd heard Temeric was famous for being strict. Claire would probably love hearing how he was acting now. Meanwhile, Temeric wondered if he should ask Professor Delphinaso for help since he wasn't in the best shape to keep going. Even so, he finished the introduction to summoning theory by the end of the day. When class was dismissed and Danny left Bermuda's hall, someone called out his full name. He recognized Agric right away. Agric felt a little bitter that this was how Danny remembered him. Danny stayed alert, thinking the red-haired jerk might be here for revenge. But Agric seemed strangely calm. Like he'd matured, he admitted he had planned to avoid Danny until graduation. Now, though, he wanted to apologize for what happened between them in the past. He bowed his head and fully admitted he'd been an idiot as a kid, taking all the blame. He held the bow for a long moment and Danny smiled. Seeing Agric was sincere, he let the old grudge go. Agric promised he wouldn't cause trouble anymore. He must have thought Danny might report him and get him expelled or something. When the golden freshman accepted the apology, Agric lit up with relief. He even told Danny to ask for help anytime. After that long talk, Danny felt something move inside his blazer. Looks like Karnas had just woken up and was already getting restless. The little guy was probably hungry after such a long nap. Since Agric knew the summoning department well, this was perfect timing. Danny needed to buy some supplies for familiars. Agric smiled and offered to take him to a shop he liked, Yos and Batan. It had been started by 2 former students 30 years ago. He even talked about what kinds of familiar food were popular lately. Danny didn't sense any hostility from him, so he lowered his guard. Meanwhile, Karnas kept squirming harder and harder inside his coat. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, comment for the next part, subscribe to this YouTube channel, and leave a like. Thanks for watching.